evening air in the old neighborhood of Pingantown was thick with the scent of damp concrete and the distant hum of a city that had long forgotten this corner of the world. Gu Chu stood on the cracked pavement, her small hands tucked into the pockets of her rabbit-themed overalls, her bright pink pigtails catching the fading light. To any passerby, she was just a beautiful 5-year-old child with large, innocent blue eyes. But behind that youthful mask lived the soul of a genius hacker who had transmigrated into this tragic novel exactly 1 year ago. She watched as a sleek car idled nearby, knowing that the wheels of fate were finally turning. The arrival of the Zhao family was not a joyous reunion, though Tang Chengxiu certainly tried to make it look like one. The older woman stepped out of the vehicle, clutching a paternity test like a holy relic as she wept crocodile tears for the daughter she had lost 18 years ago. Gu Mangxi, Gu Chu's mother, stood frozen as she was told she was the biological daughter of a wealthy family, a far cry from the life she had known. Gu Mangxi's life had been a sequence of tragedies. After being kidnapped as a child, she was raised by a poor foster mother who eventually fell deathly ill. To pay for those mounting medical bills, the beautiful but desperate Gu Mangxi had entered the entertainment industry, where she caught the eye of Song Chen. He was a ruthless tycoon who only wanted her because she resembled his first love, turning her into a contractual plaything for his own amusement. Gu Mangxi had eventually fallen in love with the dangerous man, but when his true first love returned and her foster mother passed away, she was discarded. Devastated and alone, she fled while pregnant, eventually giving birth to Gu Chu in the shadows of the town they now stood in. "Mama, Chu Chu is back from school," Gu Chu chirped, running toward her mother with a wide, practiced smile that masked her inner calculations. She played the role of the hungry, innocent child perfectly, demanding milk while internally cringing at how embarrassing it was for an adult soul to act so cute. Her eyes shifted to the older woman standing beside her mother. "Mama, whose is this old lady?" she asked, her voice dripping with artificial curiosity. "This is your grandma," Gu Mangxi said softly, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Tang Chengxiu reached out, her touch lingering on Mangxi's face with a warmth that Gu Chu knew was entirely hollow. The older woman promised that they would never be bullied again, insisting that they move back to the Zhao family estate immediately. As they prepared to leave the only home Gu Chu had ever known, she watched her mother wave goodbye to their old life from the car window. Tang Chengxiu's expression shifted the moment she turned away from Mangxi, her eyes becoming cold and sharp as she ordered the driver to move. As the car sped toward the capital, the luxury of the interior felt like a gilded cage. "Mama, are we really going to Grandma's house?" Gu Chu asked, leaning against her mother's side. She began to poke holes in the narrative, asking why such a rich family had taken 5 years to find them and why they hadn't sent a private plane if they were so influential. Gu Mangxi, ever the compassionate and naïve heroine, defended her biological mother, unable to see the trap being laid for her. Gu Chu sighed internally, remembering the original plot where Tang Chengxiu's only goal was to use her daughter as a bargaining chip. In the original story, the Zhaos didn't want a daughter. They wanted a commodity to sell to a greasy, middle-aged businessman named Mr. Lei. The naive Gu Mangxi had been deceived, forced into a marriage that led to her being tortured to death in a matter of months. The memories of the novel's descriptions were vivid and horrifying, showing a broken woman covered in bruises. And the tragedy didn't stop there. Without her mother to protect her, the original Gu Chu had been left to fend for herself, eventually starving to death on a pile of cardboard boxes. "I cannot let this tragedy happen," Gu Chu thought, her small face hardening with a resolve far beyond her years. The drive was long, and Gu Chu continued to test the waters with the driver, asking why the tickets were supposedly sold out when private travel should have been an option. Every excuse the driver gave was flimsy, and Gu Chu's frustration mounted as she realized her mother was still buying into the lies. Finally, the car pulled up to the Zhao residence, a sprawling mansion that screamed of old money and hidden secrets. They were led through the grand hallways, the opulence of the decor doing little to settle Gu Chu's nerves. The dining room was filled with the rest of the Zhao family, all seated around a long table topped with expensive dishes. Tang Chengxiu immediately pulled Mangxi toward the table, completely ignoring the small child trailing behind them. Gu Chu didn't mind the snub. In fact, it gave her the perfect vantage point to observe her enemies. She scanned the faces at the table, looking for a single person she could use to her advantage. She saw Zhao Jing, the stern and intimidating patriarch, and then her eyes landed on Zhao Yan, Gu Mangxi's brother. According to the novel, Zhao Yan was the only person in this family with a shred of decency, destined to become a billionaire CEO in his own right. Gu Chu decided then and there to latch onto him. "Uncle, hello, hug me, uncle," she cried out, holding her arms up to the handsome, brooding man. Zhao Yan looked down at her, his eyes softening as he noted how much she resembled someone from his past. "What's your name?" he asked as he lifted her onto his lap. Gu Chu gave him a cheeky grin, explaining that her name meant first love, and then she boldly asked him if he had a first love of his own. Zhao Yan smiled mysteriously, telling her to guess, and for a moment, a genuine spark of chemistry formed between the cold CEO and the brilliant child. Gu Chu knew his secret that he was in love with a famous game streamer, but she kept that card close to her chest for now. The peace was shattered by the arrival of Zhao Mangxi, the younger sister who strutted in with a hostile air. She feigned pity for Manxi's hard life in the countryside before turning the conversation toward Gu Chu's education. Tang Chengxiu chimed in, announcing that they had already selected a prestigious kindergarten in the eastern suburbs for the girl. Gu Manxi looked conflicted, though she agreed that her daughter needed to spend more time with children her own age instead of playing on computers all day. Gu Chu's blood ran cold. This was at the kindergarten plot. In the original novel, this prestigious school was a front used to separate the mother and daughter. While Manxi was being pushed toward the lecherous Mr. Li Gu Chu was meant to be sent to a place that was less of a school and more of a torture chamber. She remembered the descriptions of the child turning pale and thin from starvation and abuse. It was a calculated move by Tang Chengxiu to bribe and coerce Manxi, telling her that the only way to save her daughter from that hell was to marry the old man. It's the start of the tragedy, Gu Chu realized, her heart hammering against her ribs. I must stop it. She turned back to Zhao Yan, her lower lip trembling as she put on the performance of a lifetime. Uncle, Chu doesn't want to go to kindergarten, she whispered, her eyes welling with tears. She clung to his shirt, begging him to let her stay with him instead, using every ounce of her charm to win him over. Zhao Yan looked at the small, terrified child in his arms and then back at his mother's overly eager face. For the first time, he felt a flicker of genuine suspicion about why his family was suddenly so interested in a sister they had ignored for nearly 2 decades. Zhao Manxi led Gu Chu into a room filled with sunlight and expensive toys, gesturing toward the plush bed. She told her sister to talk with their mother while she took Chu to see her new room. Gu Chu let out a gasp of wonder, her eyes wide as she looked at the rows of dolls lining the shelves. She asked if this was really her room, and Zhao Manxi watched with a smug expression, thinking how easy it was to deceive a child from the countryside with a few cheap trinkets. Gu Chu climbed onto the bed, clutching a teddy bear while Zhao Manxi leaned in close, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She asked if Chu knew who her father was. Gu Chu looked around cautiously and whispered that she would tell her a secret as long as she did not tell anyone else. Zhao Manxi leaned her ear down, and Gu Chu slowly spelled out the word diver. Zhao Manxi pulled back, her brow furrowing as she processed the information. She had assumed the man would be a common thug or a useless bar loafer, but a legitimate job like a diver was unexpected. She pressed further, asking where the man lived now. Gu Chu looked up with a tragic, innocent expression and explained that her mother said he the best diver in the world. She added that while other divers came up quickly, her father had been diving in the sea for 5 years and had not come up yet. The realization hit Zhao Manxi like a physical blow, and she realized the child was describing a man who had drowned. She felt a surge of irritation, certain that Gu Manxi had fed the child this ridiculous lie to keep the biological father's identity a total mystery. Suppressing her anger, she stood up and told Chu to play by herself while she went to handle some business. Gu Chu waved a cheerful goodbye, telling her auntie to take care. As soon as the door clicked shut, the childish innocence vanished from Gu Chu's face. She moved to the high-end computer sitting on the desk, her fingers flying across the keys with professional speed. She muttered that it was time to remind her mother that the Royal Kindergarten was not the prestigious place it claimed to be. Within seconds, she bypassed the security protocols and whispered that she had found it. The screen displayed a shocking undercover investigation. The headline screamed about the dilapidated campus, irresponsible teachers, and the horrifying conditions hidden behind the school's expensive facade. Satisfied with that discovery, Gu Chu jumped down from the chair to grab her tablet from her bag. She needed to check if her subordinate had found the confidential information she requested regarding Song Chen. She opened an encrypted chat window where a user named B had sent a series of messages. The subordinate confirmed they had found plenty of information on the entertainment industry tycoon and had compiled it into an email. When the subordinate asked why she had been offline, Gu Chu casually replied that she was preparing to go to kindergarten. The subordinate immediately sent back a flurry of messages, refusing to believe that a top-notch hacker with her personality could actually be a child. Gu Chu smirked at the screen, noting that her own subordinates did not believe the truth. The door opened and Gu Manxi walked in, noting that it was almost 9 and time for bed. Gu quickly changed her expression, laughing as she told her mother the computer was so much fun and that she wanted to play again tomorrow. As Gu Manxi lifted the small girl into her arms, Gu Chu's foot intentionally brushed against the keyboard. A notification popped up on the monitor just as Gu Manxi was turning away. Gu Chu leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, watching the screen out of the corner of her eye. Gu Manxi tucked her daughter into bed, telling her to go to sleep first, while she turned off the computer. Gu Chu gave a sleepy nod, pretending to drift off as her mother walked back to the desk. Gu Manxi looked at the screen, thinking about how much fun her daughter seemed to have had that day. However, as she reached for the power button, her gaze sharpened on the open window. Her eyes widened as she read the investigative report about the Royal Kindergarten. The images of the terrible conditions and the reports of irresponsible staff flashed before her eyes. Memories of the afternoon flooded back, specifically her mother praising the school and claiming the Zhao family had invested in it. Gu Chu stirred in her sleep, murmuring that Aunt Manxi had been playing on the computer earlier and asking questions about her daddy. Gu Mangxi felt a chill run down her spine, wondering why Xiao Mansi would be looking at these records while pretending the school was a paradise. Hidden beneath the covers, Gu Chu allowed a tiny, knowing smile to cross her face. She knew that adding fuel to the fire was her specialty, and no one would ever suspect a 5-year-old of having such calculated intentions. She hugged her teddy bear tight, her eyes gleaming with a dark intelligence that contradicted her youthful appearance. Gu Mangxi sat by the bed, stroking her daughter's hair and making a silent vow. She whispered that she would never let anyone hurt her precious Chu Chu. Meanwhile, in another part of the house, Xiao Mansi was meeting with the elder Mrs. Gu. They whispered about their plans to marry Gu Mangxi off to a wealthy, but repulsive businessman, a man who would surely make her life a living hell while securing a lucrative alliance for the family. The next morning at the breakfast table, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. A tall, handsome man entered the room, announcing that he was free today and could accompany Chu Chu to the kindergarten for her enrollment. He looked at the family members, his eyes narrowed as he mentioned that he had felt uneasy since the previous night, as if something was not right. The grandmother immediately protested, telling him that he was far too busy with work to worry about such trivial matters. Gu Mangxi looked down, her hands trembling slightly as she considered the report she had seen on the computer. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the upper floor, followed by a piercing scream that shattered the morning quiet. Gu Mangxi bolted upright, her face turning pale as she screamed her daughter's name. They all rushed toward the stairs, bursting into the room to find a scene of chaos. Gu Chu was sprawled on the floor, surrounded by jagged shards of broken glass. A dark red stain was spreading across the carpet near her leg. Gu Mangxi's eyes filled with tears of pure terror as she took in the sight of her injured child. Gu Chu began to sob, her small frame shaking as she clutched her wounded leg. Xiao Mansi stood nearby, her hands raised in a defensive gesture, stammering that this was not what it looked like and that she had not done anything. The family scrambled to react, with the uncle immediately picking Gu Chu up to rush her to the hospital. Gu Mangxi was a whirlwind of maternal fury and grief, barely hearing Xiao Mansi's desperate excuses about how the child had simply been careless and tripped. As they hurried toward the car, Gu Chu looked up with tear-filled eyes and told her uncle that it had nothing to do with Auntie. However, she then added that Auntie had called her a little bastard and said her existence would ruin the family's plans before throwing her to the ground. Gu Mangxi froze, her face contorting with a mixture of shock and incandescent rage. Gu Chu leaned back, closing her eyes and thinking that she had never cried this much in her past life, but if it took these tears to wake her mother up, she would cry until her eyes were dry. Gu Mangxi's eyes flashed with a cold, piercing clarity as she stared at the man before her, her mind racing through the implications of what she had just discovered. New dad? Bastard? The words tasted like ash in her mouth as she realized the Zhao family was far from the welcoming sanctuary she had imagined, their kindness merely a facade for some deeper, more sinister motive. She turned her gaze toward Zhao Yan, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance as she asked if he was truly on the same side as the manipulative Tang Shangxiu. The sterile scent of the hospital hallway did little to calm her nerves as the doctor delivered his stern warning. You parents need to pay more attention to your child, the physician said, his eyes lingering on the heavy bandages wrapped around Gu Chu's small, delicate foot. He spoke of the permanent scars that could have ruined such a pretty child's life, and Zhao Yan could only offer a somber promise to be more careful in the future. Inside the quiet recovery room, the weight of the betrayal finally began to crush Gu Mangxi's spirit. Zhao Yan revealed that the information about the abusive kindergarten had been intentionally suppressed by Tang Shangxiu, proving that the family she had hoped to lean on was actively working against her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she realized she was truly alone in this world, yet Zhao Yan offered a temporary reprieve, suggesting she stay at his apartment instead of returning to the viper's nest of the Zhao household. Far away from the hospital, Tang Shangxiu gripped her phone with white-knuckled intensity, her expression twisting into a mask of desperate calculation. She realized that Gu Mangxi had sensed their true intentions and knew she had to act fast, deciding she must immediately arrange the meeting with the repulsive Mr. Li before her prey could escape her grasp. By the next morning, the sun shone brightly over the grand modern facade of Zhao Yan's villa, a place that looked like a dream but felt like a temporary fortress. Zhao Yan led Gu Mangxi and the child inside, gesturing toward the second floor and promising they could stay as long as they needed in the rooms he had prepared. As they passed a particular doorway, Gu Chu paused, her large blue eyes narrowing as she peered into a room filled with colorful pillows and toys. She innocently asked if the room was for an auntie, catching Zhao Yan off guard when he mentioned it was for a friend who stayed occasionally. Gu Chu's mind, however, was far from innocent. She remembered the original plot, where a secret relationship had led the Zhao family to sabotage and eventually kill the child involved. Gu Mangxi quickly hushed her daughter, apologizing for the child's bluntness before Zhao Yan excused himself for work. Once the adults were gone, Gu Chu's demeanor shifted instantly as she sat before her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys until a triumphant grin crossed her face. Meanwhile, Gu Mangxi prepared to head out, her face set in a mask of grim determination as she vowed to uncover the truth about Tang Chengxiu's lies. The shadows of the city grew long as Gu Mangxi walked toward her destination, unaware that she was being watched. Suddenly, Tang Chengxiu appeared from the darkness, her voice dripping with artificial warmth as she invoked the memory of Gu Mangxi's ancestors and a doting uncle to guilt her into a meeting. Despite Gu Mangxi's protests about needing to get medicine for her daughter, the older woman's emotional manipulation was relentless. With a firm, unyielding grip, Tang Chengxiu forced Gu Mangxi toward a waiting black car, insisting that the meeting would be brief. The car sped away into the twilight, leaving behind a trail of dust and a growing sense of impending doom. Back at the villa, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the room in a golden hue as Gu Chu finished her hacking task. Her triumph turned to cold dread when she checked the time and realized her mother was long overdue. Panic flared in her chest as she tried to call, only to receive a cold, automated message that the number was unavailable, confirming her worst fears that the Zhao family was handing her mother over to the greasy Mr. Lai. Knowing she couldn't act alone, Gu Chu dialed Zhao Yan's number, instantly dissolving into a fit of convincing, high-pitched sobs as she wailed about her missing mama. As Zhao Yan promised to rush to her side, Gu Chu's internal monologue was a storm of fury. She knew the original plot called for Tang Chengxiu to catch her mother in a staged affair to ruin her reputation and force a marriage. I hope we can make it in time, she thought, her eyes burning with a resolve that belonged to an adult, not a 5-year-old. Within the hour, Zhao Yan's assistant reported that they had tracked Tang Chengxiu to the prestigious Empire Hotel, and Zhao Yan sternly ordered Gu Chu to remain in the safety of the car. Zhao Yan's face was a mask of cold fury as he looked up at the towering hotel, wondering what madness had possessed Tang Chengxiu to bring Gu Mangxi to such a place. He didn't notice the small, bandaged feet that slipped out of the car door the moment his back was turned. Gu Chu huffed to herself, muttering that it was never safe to leave a child locked in a car as she scurried toward the entrance. The chime of the elevator echoed through the opulent lobby as she slipped inside, the golden doors sliding shut behind her. She knew the clock was ticking and that the trap was set for the 30th floor. But as she looked up at the control panel, a wave of frustration washed over her. No matter how much she stretched or jumped, her small child's arms couldn't even reach the button for the floor she needed. The elevator dinged and the doors opened to reveal a tall, imposing figure in a gray suit, causing Gu Chu to shrink back into the corner. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized the man as Song Chen, the blind male lead of the original novel and her own biological father, whom she internally dubbed the Dog Dad. Seizing the opportunity, she reached out and tugged on his expensive suit jacket, ignoring the assistant's panicked warning that the president was a germaphobe. The assistant eventually relented and pressed the button for the 30th floor for her, and Gu Chu offered a sweet, calculated thank you while secretly mocking her father's historical blindness to the truth. She remembered the hidden history of the novel, how her mother had been the one to save this man from drowning, only for him to be tricked into believing his savior was the villainous. The Dog Dad is truly blind, she thought bitterly, watching the floor indicator climb past 20. Song Chen's only response to the child's touch was to coldly order his assistant to have a new suit delivered, a display of arrogance that made Gu Chu vow to one day be completely out of his league. When the doors finally opened on the 30th floor, she hurried out, her mind racing with worry about whether Zhao Yan had managed to reach her mother first. She rounded a corner and saw a pair of legs clad in ornate, blue-patterned fabric, and her heart leaped with hope. "Uncle," she chirped, turning her head with a bright, expectant smile. The smile died instantly as she realized the man standing before her was a complete stranger, and a cold sweat broke out across her brow. A blond man with piercing eyes looked down at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, his voice low as he asked where her mother was. Gu Chu stood in the hallway of the Grand Hotel, her small face crumpled in a display of calculated distress as she wailed for her mother. Cheng Qi looked down at the pink-haired child, his brow furrowing with a sudden, sharp realization that things were moving faster than he had anticipated. His assistant quickly stepped forward with the information he had gathered, reporting that Madame Zhao had booked room 3019 for a meeting between Gu Mangxi and Mr. Lai. Gu Chu watched the young master from the corner of her eye, her mind racing as she recognized him as the legitimate heir of the Cheng family, a figure whose tragic fate in the original novel was now potentially intersecting with her own timeline. Cheng Qi did not waste another second, ordering his men to keep a close watch on the child before he bolted toward the hotel rooms. He moved with a focused intensity, his thoughts biting as he wondered how Gu Mangxi could be so easily fooled by the obvious traps laid by the Zhao family. He reached the door of room 3019 and swiped the key card with a snap, his jaw set in a hard line as he burst inside. The sight inside was a nightmare. Mr. Li was looming over a terrified, struggling Gu Mangxi, his face twisted with a predatory grin. The heavy air in the room felt thick with the man's disgusting confidence as he ignored Gu Mangxi's weak pleas for him to go away. Cheng Qi's rage boiled over instantly, and he lunged forward with a powerful strike. His foot connected with the man's chest, sending the portly Mr. flying backward with a sickening thud. The man hit the floor hard, gasping for air and clutching his chest in agony as he stared up in shock. Mr. Li sputtered in outrage, demanding to know who had dared to ruin his fun, but his voice died in his throat when he saw Cheng Qi's cold, murderous expression. Cheng Qi ignored him, leaning down to drape a blanket over Gu Mangxi's trembling shoulders and whispering that she should not be afraid because nothing had happened. Mr. Li's face turned pale as he recognized the young master of the Cheng family, realizing he had just crossed someone he could not afford to offend. Just then, Gu Chu burst into the room, her voice high and trembling as she called out that she had finally found her mother. Gu Mangxi looked up, her eyes red from crying, and gasped her daughter's name as the child rushed toward her. Gu Mangxi pulled Gu Chu into a tight, desperate embrace, her tears flowing freely as she held her daughter close. Gu Chu snuggled into her mother's neck, her sharp eyes scanning the room to confirm that her mother's clothes were still intact and that the worst had been avoided. She felt a pang of genuine warmth as she hugged her mother back, reflecting on how this was the first time she had ever experienced true motherly love after a past life of solitude. Mr. Lai, however, was staring at them in shock, pointing a finger at Gu Chu and demanding to know why Tang Chengxiu had told him her daughter was pure and ignorant of the world. Cheng Qi stepped between them, his presence like a wall of ice as he asked if there was a problem. Gu Mangxi looked up at her savior, her voice soft and full of sincere gratitude as she promised to repay him if she ever got the chance. Cheng Qi looked at her intently, his voice dropping as he asked if she truly did not remember him. Outside the room, Tang Chengxiu was busy poisoning Zhao Yan's mind, whispering lies about how Gu Mangxi was greedy and had deliberately sought out Mr. Li to climb the social ladder. When they rounded the corner, they saw Gu Mangxi and the child standing with Cheng Qi, and Tang Chengxiu's face twisted in a mixture of shock and fury. Zhao Yan hurried forward, his expression full of concern as he said he was glad his sister was safe. Gu Chu looked up at her uncle, flashing a small, innocent smile and bragging about how she had found her mother all on her own. Cheng Qi did not allow for pleasantries, turning to the hotel manager and demanding that the police be called immediately to report an attempted assault. Mr. Li panicked, shouting that he was innocent and that Tang Chengxiu had practically sold the girl to him as his fiancée. Tang Chengxiu tried to intervene, but Cheng Qi's glare silenced her as he reminded everyone that this hotel was owned by the Cheng family, and he would not tolerate such crimes. Gu Mangxi stood her ground, her voice trembling but clear as she confronted Tang Chengxiu about the drugged water she had been given. Tang Chengxiu's facade crumbled, and she lashed out, accusing Gu Mangxi of ruining the family's reputation, while Mr. Li desperately tried to blame the entire setup on Tang Chengxiu's lies. The family elder stepped forward, trying to pressure Gu Mangxi into silence by reminding her that she was part of the Zhao family and should protect their honor. He spoke cruelly, suggesting that a woman with a child out of wedlock had no value and should be grateful for a match like Mr. Lei. Cheng Qi watched Gu Mangxi closely, his mind drifting back to his investigation into the high-level hacker who had been tracking his movements. He had followed the IP address directly to Gu Mangxi's home, but looking at the vulnerable woman before him, he wondered if he had found the wrong person. He remembered his assistant's report about Gu Chu's injured foot and the mysterious circumstances surrounding the family. He stared at the screen in his mind, picturing the shadowy figure of a hacker at work and wondering how such a person could be connected to this house. Looking back at Gu Mangxi, he felt a sense of conflict, unable to reconcile the image of a genius hacker with the woman who seemed too weak to protect her own child. Gu Mangxi looked at Tang Chengxiu with a cold, hollow gaze, realizing that the woman who was supposed to love her was only interested in profit and vanity. Cheng Qi ignored the family's pleas for leniency and repeated his order for the police to take over. Later that night, they gathered at Zhao Yan's apartment, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of the day's events. Gu Mangxi's heart sank when Zhao Yan informed her that the Zhao family had already dealt with her house in the town as a way to control her. She could not believe their aggression, her eyes filling with tears as she clutched Gu Chu. Zhao Yan sighed, staring into his coffee and admitting that the Zhao family was far too filthy for his liking. He spoke of his father's greed and his sister's manipulative nature, painting a picture of a family rotting from the inside. Gu Chu, listening from the shadows, felt a cold smile touch her lips as she vowed that she would not let them have their way. Far away at the Zhao Manor, the lights burned late into the night as the family argued over their failed plans. Their world began to crumble when the news broke that Mr. Li had been arrested on multiple charges, a development that would inevitably drag the Zhao family's business down with him. Inside the high-rise office, panic had set in like a terminal disease. A woman in a sharp blue dress paced frantically, her eyes wide with desperation as she stared at the glowing monitors. Why not contact the back end and delete the negative news online? She screamed, her voice cracking under the pressure of the unfolding scandal. Her companion stood paralyzed, shaking his head as he stared at the sheer volume of data flooding the internet. There is too much information, it is impossible to delete it all, he admitted, his face pale. He turned to his assistant, his voice dropping to a low, urgent growl. Zhao immediately convened a shareholders meeting at the company. He ordered, his eyes darting toward the door. We need to cut off projects with the Li family and sever all ties with them immediately. Miles away, the Cheng family manor stood as a silent, imposing fortress under the moonlight. Inside the master's suite, a high-tech computer screen flickered with lines of code and a loading bar that pulsed with a steady, rhythmic light. The IP is being traced, the screen announced, a blue circle spinning as it dug through layers of digital encryption. The master of the house, a man with striking blonde hair and a gaze like sharpened steel, watched the progress while holding a delicate porcelain teacup. That special information source has appeared again. He mused, his voice smooth, but carrying an undercurrent of danger. After releasing a large amount of internal scandal information about the Lee family, it disappeared instantly. The screen beeped, a map of the city appearing with a glowing red dot. The IP was locked onto the western district of the capital. The man narrowed his eyes, his mind instantly cataloging the residents of that area. Western district of the capital, he whispered to himself. Gu Chu is temporarily staying in the western district right now. Could it be her again? He stood up, pacing the room as memories swirled around him like a storm. The last traced IP address was in Pingan Town, the small town where Gu Chu once lived. But Gu Chu doesn't have any trace of being that person. Could it be that her acting is just too good? He remembered the years he had spent tracking a top-tier hacker, a person he was certain was a man, only to have his world upended by an unexpected one-night stand. He could still see the shock in his own eyes when he realized the person he had been chasing had been cross-dressing all along. He took a slow sip of his tea, a cold smile touching his lips. "Where the hell are you?" he wondered silently. He turned to his subordinate with a look of pure ruthlessness, ordering that a certain troublemaker be dealt with so severely they ended up in the ICU. While elsewhere, Gu Chu lay in her bed, a triumphant smirk on her face as she celebrated another successful hack. The next morning, Gu Chu found herself in a far less exciting environment. Dressed in her school uniform and a wide-brimmed blue hat, she sat in a kindergarten classroom looking utterly miserable. The teacher stood at the front of the room, holding up a red paper flower with a bright, patronizing smile. "Come on," the teacher said, looking over the sea of toddlers. "The teacher wants to pick the cutest kid to answer. What is 3 plus 2? Gu Chu felt a vein throb in her forehead. Kindergarten is so boring, she thought, her expression one of pure, unadulterated disdain for the simple addition. Finally, just to get it over with, she raised her hand and answered that 3 plus 2 equals 5. The classroom erupted in cheers, and her desk partner, Yi Siching, clapped along as the teacher rewarded her with a little red flower. When she finally got home, she found a note from her mother. "Mommy has to attend a last-minute company meeting." The note read, "The nanny will come over to make lunch, so do not run around." Gu Chu crumpled the paper, a huff escaping her lips. "Only little kids run around," she muttered. She wandered through the spacious, modern living room of the apartment, the silence of the house feeling heavy. She pushed open a door that was slightly ajar, her curiosity piqued by a strange clicking sound coming from within. "Oh, this room is interesting," she whispered, her blue eyes widening. She peered inside, wondering if her aunt was home. But instead, she saw a young man with messy blonde hair sitting in a gaming chair. The young man was busy slurping down a cup of instant noodles, his eyes glued to a monitor. He jumped when he noticed the small child watching him. "You must be old Zhao's niece, right?" he asked, his face lighting up with an easy, friendly grin. He was not lying. "You really are cute, like a little kitten." He introduced himself as Lin Xiaozhu, a famous game streamer known to Handle Kid. He immediately began fussing over her, squishing her chubby cheeks with his hands and asking if she had eaten breakfast yet. "Chu Chu, do you like playing games?" he asked excitedly. "Big brother can teach you." Gu Chu felt her face being squeezed until she looked like a pufferfish, her mind screaming about how noisy this guy was. They eventually settled down on the sofa with some snacks. Lin Xiaozhu explained that he and Zhao Yan were close friends, though he described their bond with a level of affection that made Gu Chu narrow her eyes. He told her that since he was Zhao Yan's buddy, she should call him Brother Xiaozhu. As she chewed on a cracker, Gu Chu looked at him with a gaze that was far too old for her body. In the original novel, Zhao Yan was a very pitiful, tragic character, she recalled. His feelings for Lin Xiaozhu were repressed and silent, never expressed to the world. She looked up as Lin Xiaozhu reached down to pick her up, his smile bright and genuine. "Do you want to play a game?" he asked, hoisting her onto his shoulders. "Let's go, brother will teach you." He sat her down at his professional gaming rig and began explaining the mechanics of League of Glory, a game developed by the Cheng Group. He walked her through base returns and equipment, unaware that the toddler beside him could likely outplay the entire professional circuit. Their secret gaming session was interrupted when the door swung open. "What are you guys doing?" Zhao Yan asked, standing in the doorway with a stern expression that made Lin Xiaozhu jump in fright. After a brief scolding, Zhao Yan mentioned he had attended a streamer event and offered to take Chu along to buy new clothes. "Chu Chu, you should come too," Lin Xiaozhu added. But Gu Chu shook her head with a sweet, innocent smile. "No, I am not going," she chirped. "Mama said the nanny will come soon. If I go, I will just be a third wheel." She watched from the balcony as the two men walked toward the car. "We are off, little cutie," Lin Xiaozhu shouted, waving back at her. Gu Chu's smile faded the moment they turned their backs. Her sharp eyes caught a glint of light from the bushes across the street. Someone is secretly taking photos of Zhao Yan and Lin Xiaozhu, she realized, her brow furrowing. She remembered the plot clearly. In the novel, the Zhao family used these photos to destroy Lin Xiaozhu. They spread rumors that he made lewd remarks and even fabricated obscene chat logs. The public backlash had been instantaneous and brutal. Lin Xiaozhu could not defend himself, and no one believed his claims that his phone had been stolen. His streaming contract was terminated and his endorsements vanished overnight. But the final straw that broke him was far more violent. A deranged fan, fueled by the lies, had tracked him down and cruelly broken his arm. He could no longer play games, which was as a devastating blow to a gaming enthusiast. Zhao Yan had been deliberately sent abroad on a business trip during the crisis and couldn't return to help. In the end, Lin Xiaozhu had ended his life in utter despair. The scene shifted to the Zhao family estate, where Zhao Yan's parents were looking at the very photos Gu Chu had seen being taken. No wonder every time we set him up for a blind date. He wasn't interested in any of the beautiful girls, his mother hissed, her face contorted with rage. It turns out he's been enchanted by a male demon. This is outrageous. Her husband gripped the photos until his knuckles turned white. My Zhao family must not end without an heir, he growled, his eyes filled with a cold, calculating fury. A week later, the sky over the city was a brilliant, mocking blue. At the airport, the terminal was bustling with travelers heading to distant lands. Gu Mangxi and Zhao Yan stood with their luggage, preparing for their sudden business trip. Choo-choo, Mom and Uncle have to go abroad for a few days, Gu Mangxi said, kneeling to hug her daughter. During this time, you must listen to Brother Xiaozhu and not run around. Got it. Gu Chu nodded obediently, her eyes shimmering with false innocence. Choo-choo understands, she said. Don't worry, Uncle. Choo-choo will take good care of Brother Xiaozhu. Zhao Yan chuckled, patting her head. All right, I'll leave it to Choo-choo then, he said, clearly taking her words as a childish joke. They waved one last time before disappearing into the terminal. Mama, Uncle, safe travels, Gu Chu called out, waving her small hand. As soon as they were out of sight, her expression shifted. She looked up at Lin Xiaozhu, her eyes burning with a protective fire. Don't worry, she thought, watching the young man smile. I won't let the tragedy from the novel happen. I promise. Lin Xiaozhu looked down at the small girl walking beside him, his expression softening as he spoke. Let us go home and eat after this, Choo-choo, he said, promising a quiet end to a busy day. They were heading toward the grand venue for the streamers' annual conference, where the city skyline glittered against the evening sky. A crowd of eager fans had already gathered outside the entrance, whispering and pointing as they waited for the stars of the digital world to arrive. As they moved through the throng, the air was filled with high-pitched screams and declarations of love for the popular young man. Gu Chu looked up at Lin Xiaozhu, noting the bright, polished image he projected to the public. She knew all too well that a fan's adoration was a fragile thing, easily shattered by a single calculated lie. She watched him step into the spotlight, the center of a whirlwind of attention that could turn into a storm at any moment. Inside, the gala was a display of opulence, with golden chairs arranged around tables topped with extravagant floral centerpieces. Lin Xiaozhu leaned over to Gu Chu, who was already focused on a plate of cookies. Choo-choo, I am going for an interview soon, so stay seated and behave. Okay, he told her gently. A woman with striking blue hair and a predatory elegance approached them, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the child. Gu Chu recognized her instantly as Bai Yi, the popular streamer who in the original novel would orchestrate Lin Xu's downfall to climb the social ladder. When Bai Yi tried to feign interest in her, Gu Chu looked up with wide, innocent eyes. Auntie, did you never attend kindergarten? She asked with a deceptive sweetness that left the woman momentarily stunned. Lin Xiaozhu's assistant, Xiao Fang, stepped forward and reached for the young man's phone, claiming he would keep it safe. Gu Chu didn't hesitate, jumping in to intercept the device. Brother Xiaozhu, Choo-choo wants to play League of Glory. Can Choo-choo keep the phone, she asked, her voice full of childish longing. Lin Xiaozhu chuckled and handed it over, ignoring the assistant's stiff posture and the sharp look exchanged between the two conspirators. Gu Chu settled back into the plush sofa, her thumbs hovering over the screen. She was well aware that Xiao Fang had been bribed and that the plan was to use the phone to send incriminating messages. She intended to hand the phone over eventually, but she would ensure the timing served her own purposes first. Bai Yi leaned in close, her hand reaching out toward the girl as she tried to find an opening to take the device. Gu Chu's gaze shifted toward the entrance of the hall, her eyes lighting up as she spotted a very familiar face. It was the man she had dubbed the Dog Daddy, standing tall and imposing amidst the crowd. Long-legged uncle, she shouted, abandoning her seat and scurrying across the floor. She collided with his legs and wrapped her arms around him, looking up with a mischievous grin. The man, Cheng Qi, looked down with a mixture of annoyance and confusion as she babbled about her mother being bullied. He turned to his companion, muttering about how troublesome children could be in such crowded places. Bai Yi watched the interaction with growing impatience, her eyes fixed on the phone Gu Chu was still clutching. Finally, the little girl turned back to her and held the device out with a bright smile. Sister, can you help Choo-choo hold the phone? Choo-choo wants to go to the bathroom, she said. As she walked away, her expression shifted into one of cold calculation. In the original plot, Lin Xiaozhou would suffer a sudden health crisis tonight and be left alone to face a scandal that would break by dawn. She navigated through the guests, her small stature allowing her to move unnoticed. She had no intention of letting the hero of this story fall into the trap laid for him. She managed to find Cheng Kai again, putting on an act of pure desperation as she told him that brother Xiaozhou was sick and she couldn't find anyone to help. Her persistence worked, and soon an ambulance was speeding away from the gala under Cheng Qi's authority. At the private hospital, a nurse delivered the diagnosis of a severe stomach ulcer, noting that the patient would likely remain unconscious until morning. Gu Chu stood by the bed, her face a mask of worry as she looked up at Cheng Qi. "Brother Cheng Qi," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. He stood by the window, watching the girl with a skeptical eye as she thanked him for his help. Gu Chu felt a sense of triumph. The first part of her mission was complete. She knew Cheng Qi was suspicious of her, wondering how a 5-year-old could be so resourceful. He studied her face, his violet eyes searching for any sign of the adult mind hidden behind her cute exterior. While they were at the hospital, Bai Yi and the assistant were already celebrating their perceived victory, confident that the messages sent from the stolen phone would ruin Lin Xiaozhou's reputation forever. The next morning, the sun rose over the quiet hospital wing, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing online. Headlines were already screaming about the sexual harassment scandal, and the comment sections were a battlefield of accusations and vitriol. In the hospital room, Gu Chu was sitting on the sofa eating a chicken leg when the door opened. She immediately dropped the food and let out a loud, theatrical wail as Cheng Qi walked in. She sobbed about being scared and her mother not answering her calls, playing the part of a traumatized child to perfection. Cheng Qi watched her, impressed by the sheer commitment of her performance. He sat down beside her and placed a hand on her head to comfort her, telling her everything would be fine. Then, his expression turned slightly awkward as he cleared his throat. "By the way, what kind of food does your mom usually like?" he asked. Gu Chu froze, her fake tears drying instantly as she looked at his blushing face. She realized with a start that this 15-year-old boy was actually harboring a crush on her mother, Gu Mangxi. Cheng Qi leaned back, his gaze narrowing as he studied the small girl sitting across from him. Gu Mangxi had only just arrived in the capital, so he couldn't help but wonder how this little brat had managed to cross paths with him so specifically. It was suspicious, and he felt a nagging sense of guilt mixed with curiosity. He watched her closely, trying to peel back the layers of her innocent facade. "Oh right," Gu Chu said, her voice bright and airy as she attempted to change the subject. She knew Lin Xiaozhou was facing a premeditated public opinion attack, and they had to help him. She leaned in, pointing out that there were no signs of digital manipulation on the chat logs posted online, which meant the messages had been sent directly from his device. She reminded them that yesterday, she had gone to the bathroom and left the phone with Auntie Bai Yi to hold. Cheng Qi listened to her carefully, his suspicion growing. To protect privacy, the streamer's annual conference had no internal surveillance, meaning they couldn't easily prove Bai Yi had taken the phone. Gu Chu was hinting at the truth so heavily that she hoped Cheng Qi would hurry up and figure it out on his own. Suddenly, she realized she might be overstepping. She let out a small gasp, her eyes widening as she prepared to switch back into her harmless, cute mode. "Brother Cheng Qi, what should we do?" she asked, tilting her head and looking up at him with shimmering, tearful eyes. Cheng Qi almost wanted to laugh out loud. If Gu Chu really was the person he suspected, someone once arrogant and domineering, seeing her reduced to acting like a child and pretending to be cute was incredibly entertaining. "Don't worry," Cheng Qi said, reaching out to pat her head gently. He told her he already had a plan to help Lin Xiaozhou. He suggested that once the streamer woke up, they would discuss it, but for now, he had other matters to handle. Seeing her looking bored, he offered to have someone bring her a laptop to play with. Gu Chu cheered, jumping up and down with feigned excitement, though internally she was thrilled. She needed that laptop to start her own counterattack and perhaps find a way to kick her biological father Song Chen out of the picture entirely. Somewhere far away, Song Chen let out a sudden sneeze, feeling a strange chill as if someone was plotting his demise. Meanwhile, Gu Chu settled onto the sofa, her small fingers flying across the laptop keys with a speed that would have shocked any observer. A message popped up on her screen from a contact asking her to hack into a streaming platform called Orange Live to retrieve transaction records. Then, the contact mentioned the World Hacker Championship being hosted in the United States, with a $3 million prize. $3 million? Gu Chu's eyes sparkled with a very adult greed. She didn't hesitate for a second. She needed that money to become financially independent as soon as possible so she could protect her mother without relying on anyone else. In the hospital bed nearby, Lin Xiaozhou finally began to stir. He groaned, clutching his head as he asked where he was and what had happened. Gu Chu quickly scrambled over to him, her expression shifting to one of deep concern. She told him that something terrible had happened and showed him the screen of a mobile device. People online were accusing him of sexual harassment. "What?" Lin Xiaozhou cried out, his face pale with shock. He scrolled through the hateful comments calling him a trashy streamer and a despicable lowlife. He insisted that he never sent those messages and had nothing to do with Bai Yi, wondering why she would slander him so viciously. Desperate to clear his name, he asked Gu Chu to borrow a phone so he could call the director of Orange Live. When the call connected, he tried to explain, but Mr. Wang on the other end was livid. The company's stock had plummeted because of the scandal. Mr. Wang wouldn't listen to his claims about a stolen phone, telling him to simply wait for a lawyer's letter, because they would not tolerate an immoral streamer. The line went dead with a cold click. Lin Xiaozhu stared at the phone in silence, his world crumbling around him. Gu Chu watched him, asking softly if he was okay. He looked like a broken man, lamenting that after 2 years of devoted game streaming, his career was ending in disgrace. He told Gu Chu he wanted to leave the hospital and go back to old Zhao's house, but Cheng Qi stepped into the room to stop him. He reminded Lin Xiaozhu that he had suffered a stomach hemorrhage and couldn't be discharged yet. Cheng Qi then dropped a bombshell, offering him a position as a top streamer at Hangzhou Live instead. Lin Xiaozhou was hesitant, fearing he was a disgraced brand, but Cheng Qi assured him he would handle the situation. Over at the Orange Live building, the atmosphere was chaotic. The boss was furious as his assistant rushed in with bad news. Hangzhou Live had released official surveillance footage showing Lin Xiaozhu passing out from a severe stomach ulcer and being taken away in an ambulance at the exact time Bai Yi claimed she was receiving harassing messages. Bai Yi stood nearby, her face losing all color as she realized her popularity was about to vanish. She couldn't let the truth come out after working so hard for her traffic. Across the ocean at a lavish estate in the United States, a man stood on a balcony, exhausted from a long meeting. Gu Maxi came running toward him, her face full of panic as she told him to look at the news. She cried out that Xiao Zhu was in big trouble. The man, Big Brother Zhao, looked at the reports of cyberbullying and hospitalization with a grim expression. It was exactly as he had expected. He realized now that the trip to the US had been a setup by his parents to get him out of the way so they could focus their attacks on Lin Xiaozhu. He turned to Manxi with a determined look, telling her they needed to return home immediately. They wasted no time boarding a flight as the leaves drifted through the clear blue sky. Back at the hospital, the group reunited. Zhao walked into the room asking if Xiaozhou was okay. The streamer laughed it off, claiming he was as strong as ever despite the ordeal. Manxi hugged Gu Chu, mentioning that it was getting late and she needed to take the child home because she had kindergarten the next day. Kindergarten? Gu Chu's soul practically left her body in horror. She wailed internally, wishing she could stay in the hospital forever rather than go back to school. As Manxi led her away, Zhao stayed behind, offering to take Lin Xiaozhu for a walk outside to get some fresh air. The night was quiet as they walked under the glow of streetlights. Lin Xiaozhu thanked Zhao, noting that since the surveillance evidence was released, public opinion had calmed down. The legal procedures against Bai Yi were already being handled by the company. He felt a sense of relief, telling Zhao that he would be discharged in a few days and that everything was finally fine. However, they weren't alone. A man named Wang Qiang, a delusional fan of Bai Yi, was lurking in the shadows with a knife. He muttered about the trash streamer hurting his beloved goddess and vowed to break his hand. Suddenly, he lunged out of the darkness, screaming that he would break the person who bullied his goddess. Zhao reacted instantly, shoving Lin Xiaozhou out of the way and taking the blow himself. The blade sliced into his arm, drawing blood. The fan was hysterical, waving the knife and demanding that Lin Xiaozhou apologize to Bai Yi on the internet. Zhao stood his ground, ignoring the pain in his arm as he told Xiaozhu to run. Lin Xiaozhu's eyes flared with a protective rage he hadn't known he possessed. He looked at the man who dared to hurt his friend. Spotting a heavy broom nearby, he snatched it up and charged. He began beating the attacker relentlessly, screaming that he would beat him to death for hurting Zhao. The fan eventually broke down in tears, confessing that Bai Yi had lied to him. Lin Xiaozhou stood over him, disgusted that the woman had no shame left. In the following days, the news reported that Orange Live had gone bankrupt and Bai Yi was facing legal charges for slander. Gu Chu sat in the living room, observing how busy everyone had been. Lin Xiaozhou, now recovering, approached with an exciting offer. He was going to film a game ad for Hangzhou Live and invited Gu Chu to come along to the set. Gu Chu's eyes lit up. If she went to the film set, it meant she didn't have to go to kindergarten. She cheered, insisting she wanted to go, and Manxi agreed to accompany her to keep an eye on the energetic child. When they arrived at the film studio, Gu Chu was dressed in a bright green frog raincoat, splashing through the puddles with a wide grin. She marveled at how huge the place was. She ran ahead, calling for her mother to follow her. But as she turned a corner, she froze. Her blue eyes widened in shock. Standing there under a black umbrella was Cheng Qi. Gu Chu's heart hammered against her ribs as she wondered why the young master of the Cheng family was there. A terrifying thought crossed her mind. Was he there for her mother? "Miss Gu, long time no see. How have you been?" Lu Shani asked, his gaze lingering on Gu Maxi as he held an umbrella over her. Gu Chu looked up at the man with the long, light-colored hair, her mind racing through the plot of the original novel. This was Lu Shane, the tragic second male lead who had been hopelessly in love with her mother. Years ago, Gu Mangxi had entered the entertainment industry using the name Guruoxi, a period of her life that seemed like a distant dream. It was during that time she had caught the eye of the brilliant director Lu Shane, who had even created the film Falling Blossoms with her as his primary muse. Gu Mangxi had reached the peak of her career almost immediately upon her debut, but she had vanished just as quickly when the male lead Song Chen entered her life. On the current filming set, a frantic staff member pleaded with Gu Mangxi to help them out. "If you do not want to show your face, we can just film your back," he begged, desperate to save the commercial after the original actress walked out. Gu Mangxi eventually relented, stepping into the role for a no-face agreement. When she finally emerged in traditional attire, the entire crew was breathless at the sight of her ethereal beauty. The lead staff member was nearly in tears of joy as he reviewed the footage on his tablet, shouting about how absolutely perfect the promotional video had turned out. Out in the desert, a jeep kicked up dust as the assistant frantically tried to contact his master. "Master, I found a natural-born actor," he shouted over the headset, insisting that Lu Shane check his email immediately. Lu Shane clicked on the file, his hand trembling slightly as the image loaded onto his screen. He stared at the display, his eyes widening in disbelief at the familiar curve of the woman's back and the way she held herself. "It is her," he whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had never thought she would return to his world like this, and the realization left him breathless. Meanwhile, in a high-rise office, another man stood frozen before a massive digital display. Song Chen gazed at the same slim, cold silhouette, knowing there was only one person in the world who could look like a living painting in traditional clothes. "I need to find her immediately," Song Chen commanded, his voice tight with an intensity that bordered on desperation. His assistant quickly gathered the information, noting that the woman in the promo had the surname Gu and was currently living in the city. Song Chen took a moment to adjust his reflection in the car mirror, ensuring he looked approachable and perfect before heading out to meet her. He waited near her residence, his heart skipping a beat when he finally spotted her walking toward him. "Miss Gu, are you heading out?" he asked, his voice smooth and practiced. Gu Mangxi turned, her green eyes bright and her smile radiant as she acknowledged him. Song Chen felt a wave of relief wash over him, his eyes searching her face for any sign of the woman he had lost. After 5 long years, he had finally found her, and he watched her with a look of pure determination. He followed her at a distance, watching as she arrived at a kindergarten to pick up her daughter. "Mama!" Gu Chu cried out, throwing her arms around her mother and complaining loudly about the miseries of learning to count to 10. Song Chen watched from his car, his expression darkening as he saw Zhao Yan step forward to join them, looking every bit like a doting father. The sight of the 3 of them together like a warm family felt like a knife to his chest, making him realize how much his past misunderstandings had cost him. He had wanted to apologize in person and express his love, but it seemed she had already moved on and chosen someone else. He watched them walk away together, feeling more isolated than ever. "Let us go," Song Chen said quietly, turning away from the scene of domestic bliss. His assistant looked back in confusion, asking if they were no longer following them, but Song Chen simply stared ahead in silence. Several days later, Gu Chu walked out of school alone, her brow furrowed in thought. Why has that dog dad not come to find us yet? She wondered, kicking a pebble as she considered if she needed to manipulate the plot to move things forward. Her thoughts were interrupted when a shadow fell over her. "You must be Gu Chu," a rough voice said from behind. Gu Chu looked up, realizing this was not the nanny who was supposed to pick her up. Before she could react, a large hand covered her mouth, and she was snatched off the street. The man tossed her into the back of a green van and slammed the door shut, the vehicle peeling away from the curb and leaving her hat behind on the pavement. Inside the van, the kidnappers glanced back at their silent captive. "Is the kid scared stiff? Why isn't she crying?" one of them asked, confused by her lack of fuss. Gu Chu sat perfectly still, a black hood pulled over her head, her mind working with cold precision as she realized she had been kidnapped. They arrived at a dilapidated hideout where a woman with blue hair was waiting for them. "Why bother kidnapping a 5-year-old?" the woman asked, looking down at the small girl. The kidnapper explained that it was a direct order, noting that Gu Chu was a strategic target due to her mother's complicated relationship with Zhao Yan. Gu Chu decided to lean into her role as a helpless child, looking up at the woman with tear-filled eyes. "Auntie Bai, are you going to kill Chu?" She whimpered, her voice trembling perfectly. The woman looked at her coldly, stating that they would have to silence her since she had seen their faces. "Tang Chengxiu said Gu Chu is a stain that needs to be erased," she added. Gu Chu nodded frantically, promising to be obedient while her small hands remained bound, her mind already calculating her next move. The afternoon sun glinted off the glass facade of the towering commercial building where the air inside was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and high-stakes negotiations. Gu Mangxi adjusted the lapels of her cream-colored suit as her assistant reviewed the final details of the upcoming merger, noting that the quote from the Chengxi Group had reached 20 million. They only had half an hour before the president of Chengxi himself was scheduled to arrive, and Mangxi took a deep breath, determined to raise the price even further for the sake of her company's future. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and a man stepped out with an aura so commanding it seemed to pull the oxygen from the hallway. Manxie froze as her eyes met his, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. It was him. The introductions were a blur of polite professionalisms, but as the project director was introduced to President Song of the Chengxi Group, Manxie felt as though the floor were tilting beneath her feet. 5 years had passed since she last saw Song Chen, and she never imagined their paths would cross in a boardroom of all places. She struggled to maintain her composure, reminding herself that he had discarded her like she was nothing back then, and she refused to let him see any weakness in her now. Most importantly, a cold dread pooled in her stomach as she realized she had to keep him from ever discovering the existence of Gu Chu. She could not risk him trying to take her daughter away. President Song, nice to meet you. I am Gu Manxie, she said, extending a hand that she hoped was steadier than she felt. Song Chen took her hand, his piercing blue eyes narrowing as he studied the woman before him. She seemed different, harder yet more vibrant than the woman he remembered, and the recognition sparked a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. The professional mask held until Manxie's phone began to vibrate incessantly in her hand, forcing her to break the tense silence. Excuse me, President Song, I have to take a call, she murmured, her voice tight. He simply nodded, his eyes never leaving her face as he gave her leave to step aside. The voice on the other end of the line was a jagged blade of ice that sliced through her professional calm, informing her that her daughter was in their hands and demanding $10 million. The threat was explicit, no police or the child would die. Manxie's face drained of color, her eyes wide with a sudden, paralyzing terror as she clutched the phone. Why do you have my daughter? Who the hell are you? She screamed, her voice cracking as the kidnapper's laughter echoed through the receiver. The boardroom and the multimillion-dollar deal ceased to exist as she became nothing more than a mother facing her worst nightmare. She continued to shout into the dead line, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the device. The world began to spin, the edges of her vision blurring into a gray haze of panic. As her knees buckled, Song Chen moved with predatory speed, catching her before she'd hit the marble floor. He held her firmly, his brow furrowed in genuine concern as he looked down at the woman who had just been a picture of corporate strength. Kidnapped, she whispered, the word a broken sob as she looked up at him with eyes full of tears. The revelation seemed to strike Song Chen with the force of a physical blow. Song Chen, Gu Chu has been kidnapped, she cried out, grabbing his lapels as if he were the only anchor in a storm. She was hysterical now, babbling about how her daughter was only 5 years old and wondering who could possibly be cruel enough to snatch such a small child. Song Chen's expression shifted from concern to a sharp, calculating intensity as the number hit him. 5 years old. The timeline clicked into place with a terrifying precision, and he stared at Manxie as the realization dawned on him that this child could very well be his. You should notify the child's father first, he said, his voice low and strained as he tried to gauge her reaction. He watched her closely, searching for any hint of the truth in her panicked expression. Manxie's reaction was immediate and visceral as she pushed him away, her face hardening even through her tears. Brother, I have to tell my brother, she insisted, her mind racing toward the only person she truly trusted to help her. Her fingers flew across the screen, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she dialed Zhao Yan's number. She prayed silently for her daughter's safety, knowing that Gu Chu was her entire life, and the only reason she had survived the last 5 years. Brother, Gu Chu, she's been kidnapped. She shrieked into the phone the moment Zhao Yan picked up, her voice echoing through the quiet hallway. She told him about the $10 million ransom, and her immediate suspicion that Tang Chengxi was behind it, convinced that the woman's hatred for the child had finally turned deadly. Before she could say another word, Song Chen reached out and snatched the phone from her trembling hand. He put the device to his ear, his voice dropping into a cold, authoritative tone as he introduced himself to Zhao Yan and began to take command of the situation. Manxie collapsed into the arms of the assistant as Song Chen signaled for his own team to mobilize. On the other end of the line, Zhao Yan's voice was frantic, but Song Chen remained a pillar of icy resolve, promising to bring Manxie home and oversee the investigation. No problem. See you soon, Song Chen said, a dangerous, thin smile touching his lips as he hung up the phone. The predator in him had been awakened, and whoever had touched his potential offspring was about to learn the meaning of regret. Back at the residence, Zhao Yan was a whirlwind of frantic energy, nearly knocking over his associates as he processed the news. He explained the situation in a rush, his face pale as he repeated the ransom amount and mentioned that Song Chen was already involved and reporting the crime. The news sent a shockwave through the room, leaving the others stunned. The blonde man standing nearby looked as though he had been struck, his eyes wide with disbelief as he whispered Gu Chu's name. The house erupted into motion as the group prepared to launch their own search, books and papers forgotten on the floor in their haste to leave. Among them was Cheng Menglu, better known as Bobo, a young man with messy hair and thick glasses who looked more like a shut-in than a savior. Bobo adjusted his glasses, indignantly defending his presence as he sat down before a high-powered laptop. He insisted he wasn't just a freeloader, and that his skills with computers were matched only by his dedication to the family's backyard garden. He pointed a finger for emphasis, reminding everyone that he fed the chickens and grew the vegetables, earning a scoff from his brother who urged him to focus on the task at hand. Despite his eccentricities, the moment his fingers touched the keyboard, his demeanor shifted into that of a professional hacker. The tension in the room reached a breaking point when Manxi's phone began to ring again. Zhao Yan urged her to stay calm and talk slowly as she pressed the button to answer, her heart stopping as the kidnapper's voice filled the room. The instructions were cold and precise. The money was to be left on boat 136 at the eastern port the following noon. Manxi begged to hear her daughter's voice, but the line went dead with a final, mocking click. Manxi slumped forward, the weight of the silence following the call nearly crushing her. Zhao Yan placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, promising her that Chu would be fine, while Song Chen stood in the shadows, his gaze fixed on the woman he had once lost. Song Chen's hand clenched into a fist at his side as guilt gnawed at him. He realized that he should have been the one protecting them all these years, and he swore a silent, lethal oath that whoever was behind this would pay in blood. "I've located them. They're in the eastern suburbs." Bobo shouted, his screen glowing with complex maps and data points. He explained that the signal was coming from a large forest near Moon Bay, and Song Chen immediately ordered his people to begin a sweep of the area. Song Chen stepped away to make his own calls, his voice a low growl as he coordinated his private security forces. The house was now a war room, fueled by a mixture of desperation and the immense resources of two powerful men. Zhao Yan watched Song Chen work, a bitter realization crossing his face. Despite being Chu's real uncle, he felt like the poorest person in the room compared to the sheer power and influence Song Chen was currently wielding. Deep in the shadows of a dilapidated warehouse, Gu Chu sat quietly, her small hands fiddling with a lucky charm as she watched her captor. She looked up at the large man with wide, innocent eyes, complaining softly about the mosquitoes that were biting her. The kidnapper looked down at the small, pink-haired girl, his expression softening despite himself. As Gu Chu spun a heartbreaking tale of poverty and abandonment, the man began to see his own reflection in her story, remembering his own struggles and how he had been forced onto the path of robbery. "Big brother, are you going to kill Chu?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. She followed it up with a selfless wish, telling him that if her death could help her mother live a better life, she wouldn't mind at all. The man was moved to tears by her supposed bravery, sobbing into his hands as he declared her the most sensible child he had ever met. He told her to go inside and rest, his resolve to harm her completely dissolved by her carefully crafted sob story. As she turned away, the innocent look on Gu Chu's face vanished, replaced by a sharp, calculating glint in her blue eyes. She knew his weakness was a mother's love, and she was certain that her performance had secured her safety from him for the time being. Now her focus shifted to the second kidnapper, her eyes narrowing as she planned her next move. The second man was sitting on a crate, greedily drinking from a water bottle, unaware that he was the next target of the genius child's psychological warfare. Gu Chu stepped into the dim light, her voice a ghostly whisper as she asked him where he was going in the middle of the night. The man jumped, nearly dropping his bottle as he turned to face the small girl. He lunged forward, grabbing her by the head and shoving her back into the straw. He growled at her, asking if she really thought she could run away from him. Gu Chu lay in the straw, looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes as she claimed she wasn't running. She whispered that she had seen a girl with pigtails, her face covered in blood, calling out to her from the darkness outside. The man's face went pale, his bravado vanishing as he asked what the hell she was babbling about. Gu Chu pointed a small finger toward the boarded-up window, insisting that the pretty girl outside was lost and just wanted to go home. The man shouted at her to shut up, but the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed his growing fear. He tried to convince himself that the girl was just making things up to scare him, but the details she provided were hitting too close to a dark secret from his past. He muttered to himself about blood and pigtails, his mind racing as he tried to dismiss her words as nonsense. His memory flashed back to a year ago, to a remote town in the middle of the night where a schoolgirl with pigtails had asked him for directions. He could still see the red bows in her hair, a detail that Gu Chu couldn't possibly have known. The memory grew darker as he recalled how he hadn't been able to resist dragging the beautiful girl into the bushes. The scene in his mind was obscured by dense foliage and the oppressive darkness of that night. He could still hear her screaming, calling him a beast and promising that even as a ghost, she would never let him go. The man's eyes were wide with terror as Gu Chu added a final, chilling detail, telling him that the girl said she would never let him go. A dark, menacing smile spread across Gu Chu's face as she leaned in closer. "She's right outside," she whispered, her voice echoing in the small, cramped space. The man backed away, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he stared at the shadows dancing on the walls. "No," he whimpered, his mind finally snapping under the weight of his own guilt and the child's suggestions. In his hallucination, dark, ethereal shapes began to seep through the cracks in the walls, coalescing into a terrifying visage. He let out a final, strangled scream of no, as the darkness seemed to lung at him. The man collapsed onto the floor, his eyes rolling back in his head as he lost consciousness from sheer terror. Gu Chu stood over his prone form, a look of utter disdain on her face as she called him trash. She looked toward the pile of straw she had used to create the ghostly silhouette, mocking the man for being such a coward that he fainted from a simple trick. The first kidnapper came rushing in, alerted by the commotion, and demanded to know what the noise was about. He saw his partner on the floor and ran over, frantically asking what happened to him. Gu Chu put on her innocent act once more, trembling as she claimed she didn't know and was too afraid of Sister Bai to speak. She pointed to a spilled bottle of water on the floor, suggesting that Sister Bai had given him something to drink and leaving the man to connect the dots himself. The man's face twisted in suspicion as he looked toward the door, where Bai Yi was standing, her expression unreadable in the shadows. Bai Yi stepped into the room, yawning as she complained about the noise and offered the first kidnapper a bottle of water, telling him he must be tired from staying up all night. Before she could react, the man swung his arm with brutal force, the water bottle flying through the air as he struck her across the face. "You think I'm an idiot?" he roared, accusing her of trying to poison them so she could take the entire ransom for herself. Inside the warehouse, the tension between the kidnappers finally boiled over as the man loomed over the woman, shouting that she was no man for hitting a woman, while she retorted that he was the one who tried to poison him. Gu Chu watched from the shadows, her small hands clutching a black wallet as she realized their fragile alliance was crumbling. Suddenly, a gloved hand reached out from the darkness, a SWAT officer sweeping her up into a protective embrace. He told her not to be scared, announcing over the radio that they had found the child. Gu Chu blinked her large, innocent eyes, looking up at the helmeted men with a feigned tremor in her voice, telling them she thought she had run into a bear. The police swarmed the building, their weapons drawn as they shouted for everyone to freeze. The kidnappers were forced to the ground, their hands behind their heads as they desperately claimed innocence, but the officers were unmoved, ordering their immediate arrest. Outside, the scene was a chaotic blur of flashing sirens and yellow police tape. Song Chen stood tall amidst the officers, his face etched with a rare, raw anxiety until the lead officer led Gu Chu toward him. He knelt down immediately, his eyes searching her face for any signs of trauma as he asked if she was hurt. The officer assured him she was fine, while Gu Chu watched him with a calculated gaze, realizing that the man she internally called dog already knew the truth about their biological connection. She decided to play her part perfectly, offering him a sweet, grateful smile and thanking Uncle Song for bringing people to save her. The word uncle struck Song Chen like a physical blow, leaving him momentarily speechless and wounded. He decided he would have to slowly prepare her for the truth, hoping to find the right moment to reveal he was her real father. He sat beside her on a wooden bench, the night air cooling around them, and asked softly if she wanted to know where her dad was. Gu Chu tilted her head, her expression bright and untroubled as she claimed she already knew exactly where he was. She leaned in, a mischievous glint in her eyes that Song Chen failed to interpret as a warning. He was ready to confess, but the words died in his throat when she simply said that her dad was dead. Song Chen recoiled, his face pale as he stammered, asking if her mother had really told her that. Gu Chu nodded solemnly, explaining that her mama said her dad was a diver who went on a trip 5 years ago and never came back, which meant he was definitely dead. Internally, she smirked at his visible heartbreak, thinking that he had missed his chance to be a father years ago, and she was not going to make it easy for him now. Later that night, the car pulled up to the grand estate, and Gu Chu ran toward the entrance, calling out for her mother. Gu Mangxi burst through the doors, tears streaming down her face as she gathered her daughter into a fierce hug, apologizing profusely for not watching her properly while Gu Chu tried to comfort her. Gu Mangxi's brother watched the interaction from a distance, his eyes narrowing with suspicion as he noted Song Chen's lingering presence and wolfish ambitions. To ease the tension, they moved to the kitchen for some cake. While Gu Chu happily dug into her treat, the blonde young Master Cheng took a call, learning that the kidnappers were still turning on each other in custody. He smiled coldly, satisfied that they were reaping the benefits of the criminals falling out. He watched Gu Chu eat, admiring her wit and intelligence, thinking that even as a 5-year-old, she was survivor. Gu Mangxi and Song Chen stood nearby, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. However, Gu Chu noticed the blonde man was secretly recording her while she ate, her eyes narrowing as she chewed. She wondered if he could stop for a moment and control his obvious affection for her mother. It felt wrong to her that he was taking secret photos while her biological father was standing right there. Gu Mangxi suggested it was time for a bath and bed, noting there would be no kindergarten tomorrow. Song Chen quickly chimed in, offering to come over and spend the day with the child. Gu Mangxi hesitated, wondering if his sudden interest was because he had figured out Gu Chu's identity, but Gu Chu decided to intervene. She clung to her mother, loudly announcing that she did not want Uncle Song to come because he was a germaphobe who thought she was dirty. Song Chen looked panicked, trying to explain that he could fix his issues, but the damage was done. Gu Mangxi's brother stepped in, his hand extended to usher Song Chen out, reminding him that it was late and that his sister and niece did not need his company. Gu Mangxi walked Song Chen to the gate, the night sky hanging heavy over them as he admitted he knew everything. She stopped, her voice trembling as she asked if he intended to take Chu away. Knowing the Song family had been desperate for a grandchild for years, he looked at her, his expression unreadable as he denied any such intention. Misinterpreting his answer, Gu Mangxi began to cry, asking if that meant he actually disliked her daughter. Song Chen felt a headache coming on, wondering why women's thoughts were so complicated. He took the child, he was a thief, and if he did not, he was rejecting her. Gu Mangxi stood her ground, her green eyes flashing maternal fire as she declared that whether he liked her or not, she would never let her child leave her side. Song Chen reached out, his own eyes filled with a desperate intensity. He told her that Cutie was his child too, and that he would not let her grow up without a father or leave him without a wife. He grabbed her hands, pulling her close and swearing that he had searched for her for 5 years and would never let her go again. Gu Mangxi recoiled, reminding him that his supposed wife was Chen Qingyun, and that she was tired of being a mere substitute. Song Chen tried to protest that he did not love the other woman, but a sharp cuff interrupted them. Gu Mangxi's brother stood there, a large kitchen knife in his hand, his face shadowed with a murderous intent as he suggested it was time to go home. He claimed Chu wanted cake, but he only knew how to cut meat, his tone dripping with a silent threat. Song Chen backed away, startled by the sudden intrusion. Gu Mangxi told him firmly not to come back again as she turned to follow her brother inside. Standing alone in the driveway, Song Chen felt the weight of his past mistakes, wondering how he could ever make her see how much he truly regretted the lost years. High above in the window, Gu Chu watched the scene through a pair of binoculars, thinking about what a tragic love story it was. She knew that in the original novel, her mother had been tortured from start to finish, and she was determined to use her knowledge to help her fight back. A few days later, new information came in from the police. It turned out there were 2 groups of kidnappers, one hired by the jealous Bai Yi, and another mysterious group from the United States. Gu Mangxi was stunned, wondering how an ordinary mother and daughter could have offended someone across the ocean. She suddenly remembered one person who might be capable of such a thing. Gu Chu, however, was already several steps ahead, suspecting the villainous Chen Qingyun, the ultimate green tea manipulator from the original story. She knew Chen Qingyun was currently undergoing treatment in the US and had used her influence to make Gu Mangxi's life a living hell in the past. She recalled how the woman had once driven a pregnant Gu Mangxi away, and later tried to have her kidney removed to curry favor with the Cheng family. Gu Chu vowed not to let her get away with it. But as she dug deeper into the kidnappers' communication records, she found something unexpected. The IP address was traced to a manor owned by a young elite named Moria, who had no known connection to Chen Qingyun. Suddenly, a message popped up on her screen. "See you at the World Hacking Championship," signed by Moria. Gu Chu gasped, her eyes wide with shock as she realized someone had actually found her. She could not believe there was someone in this tragic romance world who rivaled her hacking skills. A terrifying thought crossed her mind. Could it be the man who had hunted her down in her past life? The one she had ended up sleeping with had entered this novel too. Gu Chu's fingers danced across the keyboard with a precision that belied her 5-year-old appearance, her mind racing through the sins of her past life and the hunters who had once chased her across the globe. She was no longer that woman, but a supposedly innocent child, yet the shadows of previous world refused to let her go, even stooping so low as to hire kidnappers to end her life. A flash of genuine anger crossed her youthful features as she narrowed her eyes at the screen, determined to show her enemies exactly who was in control of this game. With a sharp, decisive click on the confirm button, she executed a command targeting the electrical system of her opponent's stronghold. She slammed her small hands onto the desk, her breathing heavy as she calculated the odds, nearly certain that the man known as Shensei was the puppet master behind the recent attempt on her life. In a distant, sprawling manner, the independent power lines suddenly flickered and died, plunging the entire estate into an eerie, suffocating darkness. Amidst the confusion of the staff and the panicked calls for security, a man stood calmly by a window, a single ace of hearts clutched between his fingers as he realized the manor systems had been compromised. He looked out at the moonlit grounds with a knowing smirk, recognizing the signature of the grudge-holding brat from his memories who never knew when to quit. The next morning arrived with a much more peaceful atmosphere as Gu sat at the breakfast table, happily stuffing her face with food, while her mother watched with a mixture of relief and lingering worry. Gu Mangxi watched her daughter eat, grateful beyond words that the terrifying events of the previous night had seemingly left no lasting trauma on the child's psyche. However, the weight of the truth pressed heavily on Mangxi's heart, and she looked at Gu Chu with soft, sad eyes, wondering when the right time would be to tell her that Song Chen was her biological father. She leaned in closer, her voice gentle as she asked her daughter if she had any desire to actually meet her dad. Gu Chu paused, her thoughts drifting to the tragic path Gu Mangxi had walked in the original novel, a life filled with undeserved suffering. If Song Chen could truly step up and protect her mother, Gu Chu decided she could tolerate calling him dad, but if he failed, she was more than ready to find a better replacement. She looked up at her mother with a bright, determined smile, promising that she would protect her mama too once she grew up. Moved to tears by the child's unexpected devotion, Gu Mangxi pulled her daughter into a tight, emotional embrace, whispering her thanks into the girl's pink hair. Outside the gates, Song Chen arrived in his sleek black car, adjusting his tie while clutching a brightly wrapped gift box. He had done his research online and was convinced that a Barbie doll was the ultimate key to winning over a 5-year-old girl's heart. His confidence wavered, however, when he spotted Cheng Qi standing nearby, Looking equally prepared for a visit, Song Chen bristled with immediate jealousy, demanding to know what business a minor could possibly have with his wife in broad daylight. Cheng Qiai merely sweat-dropped, offering a weak excuse about wanting to see the cute kid while secretly trying to maintain his composure. A maid opened the gate and formally invited Cheng Qi inside, leaving Song Chen standing on the brick path with a look of utter bewilderment. He pointed a finger at himself, his voice trailing off as he realized he had been completely ignored while his rival was ushered in. Just as his frustration peaked, another man approached from behind, his presence commanding and his gaze sharp as he called out Song Chen's name. It was Lu Shan, and the look he gave Song Chen was one usually reserved for a persistent, unwanted ghost. The two men stood face to face in a silent, high-stakes confrontation, the air between them thick with years of unresolved resentment. Lu Shan made it clear through his icy stare that he had no intention of letting Song Chen off easily for the mistakes of the past. As he looked at the man who had caused so much upheaval, Lu Shan couldn't help but think back to the moment his life changed. He remembered the first time he had met the woman he knew as Roxy, absolutely captivated by a beauty that transcended the screen. He had been so impressed that he immediately invited her to take the lead in his film, The Flowers of Time. Back then, she was a rising star, a talented actress who seemed destined for the very top of the industry under his guidance. But then Song Chen had swooped in like a predator, stealing her away from the spotlight and causing her brilliant career to fade into nothingness. To Lu Shan, it was a tragedy, a waste of a generational talent that he could never forgive. He turned his back on Song Chen, his voice dripping with venom as he pointed out that she had run far away just to escape him, yet he still had the nerve to show his face. Inside the apartment, Cheng Qi was busy trying to win Gu Chu's favor with a box of expensive sweets, watching her eat with a hopeful expression. Gu Chu took a bite, politely noting it was delicious but reminding him that her mama didn't want her having too many sweets because of cavities. Privately, she scoffed at his efforts, thinking that if he really wanted to woo her mother, he should start by learning that his target audience actually preferred spicy crawfish and savory skewers over sugary treats. Her thoughts were interrupted when the maid announced that a gentleman named Lu was there to see Gu Manxi. Gu Manxi hurried to the door, her face lighting up with genuine joy the moment she saw the red-haired man standing there. She called out his name, Ruoxi, and she threw her arms around him in a warm, familiar hug, exclaiming how long it had been. Lu Shan held her close, his eyes closing as he whispered that it had been 5 long years since they last saw each other. He pulled back slightly, his expression soft with relief at finally finding her again after her long disappearance. Outside, Song Chen's heart practically shattered into stone as he witnessed the intimate reunion from a distance. He stood frozen, still clutching his Barbie doll, as Gu Manxi invited her teacher inside for a seat, completely forgetting Song Chen even existed. He looked down at the doll in his hands, his eyes watering as he pathetically whispered that he wanted to go in too. Inside, the atmosphere was much livelier as Cheng Qi offered his laptop to Gu Chu, asking if she wanted to play simple games like Snake or Barbie Dress Up. Gu Chu gave him a flat look, requesting a much more complex game called Dream Fairy Tale instead. Cheng Qi was surprised by her choice of such a difficult game, but he smiled and began searching for it for her. As he worked, Gu Chu watched him intently, recalling that in the original novel, Cheng Qi had met a very tragic end. She decided then and there that since he was genuinely pursuing her mother and had saved her life before, she would use her skills to help him out if he ever ran into trouble in the future. Gu Manxi led Lu Shan further into the room, explaining that they were temporarily staying in her brother's apartment. She introduced him to the space, her demeanor relaxed and happy in his presence. Gu Chu hopped down from the sofa and greeted him with a polite smile, introducing herself as Chu Chu. She recognized him instantly as the beloved second male lead from the books, noting how handsome he was and why readers preferred him over her lousy biological father. Lu Shan froze as he looked at the 5-year-old girl, the math quickly clicking in his head as he realized she was exactly the right age to be Song Chen's child. He watched as Gu Manxi tenderly wiped the crumbs from the girl's face, his heart aching at the thought of how hard it must have been for her to raise this child all alone for 5 years. A vein popped in his forehead as his anger toward Song Chen reached a boiling point. He knelt down to Gu Chu's level, apologizing for coming in a rush and promising to bring her a gift next time, perhaps a Barbie doll. Gu Chu didn't miss a beat, flatly rejecting the idea and stating that she wanted the latest game figurines instead. She looked toward the door with a mischievous glint in her eye, declaring loudly that she didn't even like Barbie dolls. Outside, Song Chen heard the rejection and a fit of pique and heartbreak, threw his carefully chosen gift into the air. He tried to maintain a smile despite the sweat pouring down his face, frantically lying to himself that there were no Barbie dolls, and he hadn't just been rejected by his own daughter. As night fell, Lu Shan prepared to leave, standing by his car as he spoke to Gu Manxi one last time. The headlights of his Range Rover cut through the darkness as he urged her to consider the request he had made earlier that day. He reminded her now that her worries were behind her, she could finally focus on herself and her own future. Gu Manxi nodded softly, promising to give it some serious thought as he climbed into his vehicle. She watched him drive away, waving goodbye and telling him to be careful on the road. When she turned back toward the house, she found Song Chen still standing there, his presence a dark shadow in the moonlight. She sighed, her patience exhausted, as she asked him why he hadn't left yet. Song Chen stepped forward, his voice earnest as he tried to tell her that he never saw her as a replacement for anyone else, his eyes pleading for understanding. Gu Mangxi cut him off with a sharp shout, telling him she had heard enough and that she had something far more important to say. She turned her gaze away from him, her expression hardening as she revealed that there were two forces behind the kidnapping of their daughter. One was the Zhao family, but the other was a mysterious entity hidden in the United States. She looked him dead in the eye, telling him that if he truly cared about Gu Chu's well-being, he would stay far away from them both. She explained that back when they were together, she had been repeatedly set up by Cheng Qingyun, a woman obsessed with him. If that woman ever learned of Gu Chu's existence, she would stop at nothing to harm the child. Without giving him a chance to respond, she turned and slammed the heavy doors shut, leaving him alone in the cold night. Song Chen was left reeling, his mind spinning as he tried to process who this admirer could be and what Mangxi meant by her warnings. Half a month passed, and Song Chen became a fixture outside the house, spending hours playing with the dog in the garden just to catch a glimpse of them. Gu Chu watched him from the balcony, amused by how persistent her daddy was being despite being constantly shut out. Inside, Gu Mangxi ignored the man outside entirely, her focus shifting completely to her work and Lu Shaina's new script. Gu Chu noted with satisfaction that her mother was no longer the weak woman from the novel. Her focus and intelligence had skyrocketed. A sudden knock at the door prompted Gu Chu to jump up, thinking it was her uncle returning. She threw the door open with a bright smile, but the smile vanished the moment she saw the woman standing there. It was Zhao Manshi, draped in a flamboyant blue dress and looking down at the child with a predatory grin. She reached out to poke Gu Chu's cheek, asking if she had missed her aunt, while Gu Chu recoiled from the overwhelming, stinking scent of cheap perfume. Gu Chu let out a loud sneeze, wondering what this annoying supporting character was doing there and why she was so intent on looking for trouble. "Hello, sister. Is my brother not home?" Zhao Manshi asked with a fake, saccharine smile as she stepped into the room. "My brother is really something. Leaving his nice mansion to live in this rundown place and letting all sorts of people into his home," she continued, her eyes scanning the room with obvious disdain as she clutched a script in her hands. In her mind, she could already see the headlines, imagining her own value skyrocketing as she stood wrapped in the arms of the powerful Song Chen. She envisioned him dropping to one knee with a diamond the size of a pigeon egg, making her the undisputed lady boss of the song group. Gu Chu did not even look up from where she sat, her voice small, but cutting as she remarked that her uncle would never bring home non-recyclable trash, like the woman standing before them. Zhao Manshi took a deep breath to protect her expensive makeup, telling Gu Mangxi that she simply was not cut out for the acting world, and that a famous director like Lu Shaina would never give her a role. She went on about her professional acting classes, but the sound of the script being slammed down onto the table cut her off mid-sentence. Gu Chu looked at her with a deadpan expression, asking if she was trying to play the role of an alarm clock because she simply would not stop blabbing. Zhao Manshi fumed silently as she headed toward the door, convinced that these two were only arrogant because they were hiding under her brother's protection. When the door opened, Lu Shaina stepped inside, ignoring the sister entirely as he greeted Gu Chu with a specially promised figurine. Zhao Manshi stood frozen, her eyes wide as she realized the man before her was indeed the legendary, difficult-to-please director Lu. She quickly tried to salvage the situation, bowing slightly as she introduced herself as Zhao Yan's younger sister. Lu Shaina did not even offer her a glance, instead focusing entirely on Gu Mangxi and the brilliant notes she had made in the margins of his script. Desperate for attention, Zhao Manshi stepped forward and claimed she had studied screenwriting professionally and could help her sister revise the work. Lu Shaina's face darkened immediately as he asked her, with chilling politeness, if she could please just shut up. When she tried to stammer an excuse, he finally snapped, shouting that she was so noisy she was giving him a massive headache. Without another word to the interloper, he grabbed the script and led Gu Mangxi away to work in peace, leaving Zhao Manshi standing alone in the center of the room. She stared after them in disbelief, unable to fathom why the notoriously cold director was being so gentle with her sister. Her thoughts turned poisonous, deciding that Gu Mangxi must have used her experience as a mother to become skilled at seducing men. Gu Mangxi paused and looked back, her expression unreadable as she caught the hateful glare from her younger sister. Zhao Manshi walked right up to her, whispering that her schemes were well hidden, but that there was no way a legend like Lu Shaina was actually her mentor. She leaned in close, her voice dripping with venom as she suggested that Gu Mangxi was likely keeping the director satisfied in the bedroom. Gu Mangxi's patience finally broke as she pointed toward the exit and told the woman to get out, though Zhao Manshi only mocked her anger. Gu Chu's eyes narrowed, her small face contorting into a look of pure, predatory focus as she prepared to defend her mother. Before Zhao Manshi could say another word, the little girl lunged forward and sank her teeth into the woman's hand, drawing a sharp scream of pain. Gu Chu pulled away with a huff, telling her aunt that she should be grateful she only had baby teeth before threatening to call the neighborhood dog to finish the job. Once the woman had scurried away in a panic, Gu Chu placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. She kneeled down and told the girl that she should not speak to her elders that way, insisting that these adult problems were not for a child to solve. Deep down, however, Gu Chu's resolve hardened as she realized she could no longer stay silent and would have to prove herself through her own strength. Gu Chu watched her mother with a secret smile, knowing the heroine was finally waking up, just as the scene shifted to a few days later where Song Chen sat in his car. He looked back at Gu Chu, who was happily working on a lollipop, and told her that they were going to pay Uncle Lu a visit at the studio. Gu Chu saw right through him, knowing that her dog dad was only doing this to provoke Lu Shani and flaunt their supposed father-daughter bond. Song Chen tried to sound casual as he asked her who she liked more between him and the director, but Gu Chu just laughed and listed every other man she knew instead. A comical look of despair washed over Song Chen's face as he realized he was just one of many names on her list of favorites. They arrived at the studio just in time to hear Lu Shane slamming a script onto a table and screaming at an actor whose performance was worse than a beggar's. His assistant tried to suggest a lunch break to let everyone reset, but the director was in such a foul mood that he refused to stop. Then, Lu Shane looked up and saw a small, familiar figure standing near the entrance of the chaotic set. His anger vanished instantly, replaced by a wide, genuine smile as he called out to little Chu Chu. He dropped into a crouch to be at her eye level, his voice softening as he asked what had brought her to visit him today. The assistant watched in awe, noting that his master changed expressions faster than the pages of a book whenever the girl appeared. When Gu Chu mentioned she was hungry, Lu Shane immediately ordered a 1-hour break for everyone and demanded a deluxe meal be sent over right away. He stood up with renewed energy, finally willing to eat now that his favorite little guest had arrived. His pleasant mood soured slightly as he looked past the girl and noticed Song Chen standing there, asking where exactly he had popped out from. Song Chen did not answer, instead reaching down to scoop Gu Chu up into his arms with a possessive air. He smirked at the director, claiming that since it was the weekend and the girl had finished her homework, he had simply brought her out for a stroll. The tension between the two men was thick enough to cut with a knife as they stared each other down. Song Chen made sure to hold her close to show off their progress, while Lu Shane could only think about what a complete dumbass the man was being. Lunch was served shortly after, and the chubby assistant encouraged Gu Chu to make sure the skinny director actually ate some meat for once. Gu Chu dutifully piled food into Lu Shane's bowl, telling him that her mama said work should never come at the cost of his health, which only made Song Chen more jealous. Gu Chu could only sigh at her father's childish behavior before he eventually had to step away to take an urgent phone call. Left at the table with the director and the scripts, the little girl looked around and realized she was starting to get a little thirsty. Lu Shani stood over the table, his brow furrowed, as he reviewed the latest script changes with his assistant, completely unaware of the shadow looming from the ceiling. Suddenly, the heavy spotlight fixture snapped, plummeting toward the floor where Gu Chu stood near the refrigerator. Zhang Qi did not hesitate for a second, launching himself across the room with a desperate cry for the child to watch out. The impact was deafening as glass and metal shattered against the floor, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air while the crew looked on in horror. Lu Shani and Song Chen rushed forward, their hearts in their throats as they shouted the girl's name. Zhang Qi groaned, his body shielding the small girl as he winced from the sharp stabs of pain in his legs, asking if the little one was okay or hurt anywhere. Gu Chu looked up at him with wide, blue eyes, her small hand reaching out to touch his arm as she thanked him for saving her. Song Chen reached them first, his face pale as he knelt in the wreckage to check on his daughter while Lu Shani hovered over them, frantic to know if they were both all right. Song Chen barked out an order for an ambulance, his voice shaking with a mixture of terror and fury as he gathered the girl into his arms. At the hospital, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife as the doctor examined the small scratches on Gu Chu's arm and ankle. The doctor offered a reassuring smile to the men, explaining that her injuries were minor and she would recover quickly. Song Chen held her tightly, his gaze never leaving her face, even as the doctor turned his attention to the more serious condition of Zhang Qi, who had suffered a concussion and multiple glass shards in his leg. Song Chen turned his icy gaze toward Lu Shane, questioning how such a thing could happen after the massive investment he had made into the studio's equipment. Lu Shane defended his team, insisting that the equipment was checked every 3 days, and that this must have been a freak accident. Gu Chu, however, let out a small, innocent laugh, telling her Uncle Lu that he was actually the lucky one today, because he would have been the one hit if he had gone to get water. The room went silent as the weight of her words sank in. Gu Chu added that she had heard a strange spring-like sound when she tried to open the fridge, leading the men to realize that the entire incident had been a rigged trap. Lu Shani felt a cold break out on his forehead as he realized that he was the intended target of the assassination attempt. He immediately ordered his assistant to call the police and secure the surveillance footage, declaring that no one was allowed to touch the scene. Song Chen snapped at him to keep his voice down, unwilling to let his daughter hear such dark talk of life and death. The two men began to bicker over who had more enemies, each trying to prove they were the bigger target in the dangerous world of business and entertainment. Gu Chu watched them with a deadpan expression, thinking to herself how childish they were being. In her past life as the Ace of Hearts, the number of people who wanted her dead could have circled the earth 3 times over. The door to the room burst open as Gu Manxi rushed in, her eyes red with tears as she cried out for her daughter. She fell to her knees by the bed, checking Chu Chu's bandages while the girl tried to comfort her, saying a nice uncle had saved her. Song Chen stood by, his head bowed in a rare display of humility, as he apologized to Manxi for failing to protect their child. Gu Manxi stared at him in disbelief, unable to process that the mighty president of Song Entertainment was actually admitting he was wrong. Trying to ease the mood, Song Chen picked up an apple and a knife, offering to peel it for Manxi since she likely had not eaten lunch in her rush to get there. He focused intently on the task, his long fingers working with uncharacteristic precision. Manxi watched him, noting that he never used to know how to peel fruit, to which he replied that he had learned it especially for this purpose. He smiled to himself, certain that she would be deeply touched by his effort. Instead, Manxi's expression turned suspicious as she wondered if he had actually learned the skill to take care of Miss Cheng, who had been ill for years. Song Chen nearly dropped the knife in his panic, waving his hands as he explained he had only started practicing 2 weeks ago, along with learning how to cook and play games to be a better father. Later, the group moved to Zhang Qi's recovery room. The doctor confirmed that the actor would be fine in a week or 2, and Manxi presented him with a large bouquet of flowers. Zhang Qi's eyes widened as he recognized her, asking if she was the famous Miss Suruoxi who had disappeared from the industry years ago. He confessed that he had been her fan since her debut, considering her his idol. Gu Chu watched the interaction, remembering that in the original novel, Zhang Qi was just a background character who met a tragic end after a framed cheating scandal. Seeing his upright and loyal demeanor now, she doubted the old plot's version of events and suspected he had been a victim of a setup. She decided that when the time was right, she would investigate his background to repay the debt of her life. Lu Shane promised Zhang Qi a spot in the crew once he healed, and the conversation turned back to Manxi's past. Gu Chu asked why her mother had stopped acting, but Manxi became visibly uncomfortable. Lu Shane he did not hold back, calling her former partner a criminal and a bastard, which prompted Manxi to quickly usher Chu Chu out of the room under the guise of finishing kindergarten homework. In the hallway, they ran into young Master Cheng, who seemed surprised to see them at his family's hospital. He agreed to ensure Zhang Qi received the best care, his gaze lingering briefly on the bandages on Gu Chu's arm. He noted with a quiet intensity that it was a good thing her injuries were not serious. As he walked away with his assistant, Gu Chu found it odd that he had not even looked at her mother to try and impress her today. Away from the others, Cheng Xiang ordered his assistant to keep a close watch on Lu Shan. He looked back toward the ward, thinking that while Gu Chu could protect herself, she was still just a 5-year-old child in this life. He knew there were far too many unknown variables in this tragic novel, and that he needed to find a way out quickly. The next day, Song Chen arrived at Manxi's home laden with bags of fresh fish, shrimp, and vegetables, determined to feed Chu Chu well after her scare. As the housekeeper complimented his kindness, his phone began to vibrate in his pocket. It was Lu Shan, who reported that he had identified the man who tampered with the fridge as Zhang Ruai, a washed-up actor who had failed a recent audition. Song Chen's eyes darkened with a cold, predatory light as he told Manxi he had urgent business to handle. He promised to return soon to cook something tasty for them. After he left, the housekeeper remarked on how devoted the president had become, noting that he was even asking for recipes to win Manxi's heart. Manxi sighed, heading toward the back of the house to check on her daughter's progress with her schoolwork. She opened the door to the study, calling out Chu Chu's name, but the room was empty. Meanwhile, on the busy road outside, Song Chen's car sped toward the studio. Tucked away in the back of the vehicle, Gu Chu sat with a small, dangerous smile on her face, knowing exactly where her father was going. She clutched her teddy bear, her eyes gleaming with anticipation, as she thought about seeing which idiot had a death wish. Song Chen walked toward the back of his luxury car, his mind still heavy with the day's events. He reached for the trunk, but a sudden knocking sound from inside made him freeze in his tracks. When the lid finally clicked open, a mop of bright pink pigtails popped up with a cheerful exclamation of Uncle Song. Song Chen stared at her, his jaw nearly dropping as he realized the little girl had hitched a ride all the way to the studio. "I just wanted to play with Uncle Song," she said, blinking her large blue eyes with practiced innocence. The sheer force of her cuteness hit Song Chen like a physical blow, melting away every ounce of his stern composure. He scooped her up into his arms, unable to stay mad as he warned her never to sneak off like that again. Inside the building, Lu Shane looked up in surprise as Song Chen walked in carrying the child. They set her aside with a laptop to keep her occupied, but the conversation between the two men quickly turned dark as they discussed the sabotage on set. Lu Shane he explained that Zhang Rui had admitted to tampering with the lights, though it was clear the man was just a pawn for someone more powerful. Song Chen leaned back, his eyes narrowing with a cold, predatory light that signaled it was over for whoever had targeted them. His gaze was sharp enough to cut through glass as he processed the threat to his hidden family. Tucked away in the corner with a pair of oversized headphones, Gu Chu puffed out her cheeks while pretending to play games. She thought to herself that her dog dad was actually quite badass when he was being serious. While the guards dragged the trembling Zhang Rui into the room for a final interrogation, Lu Shani berated the man for his lack of talent and his betrayal. Zhang Rui begged for mercy, but the atmosphere remained thick with tension. Song Chen stepped forward, his presence looming over the captive actor. "If you are working for the Wang family like a lapdog, you will pay a price you cannot even imagine," he threatened in a low, murderous voice. As the police took the man away, Gu Chu's fingers flew across the keyboard of the laptop. She quickly bypassed security and found the smoking gun, a massive bank transfer to Zhang Rui from Wang Entertainment. She knew the Wang family wouldn't give up easily and might even target her mother next. A mischievous grin spread across her face as she decided to find a way to accidentally leak the conspiracy to all the major players. Her focus was broken by the sound of the door opening, and she looked up expecting Lu Shane to return. Instead, a strikingly handsome man with silver-blue hair walked in, his gaze cool and distant. Gu Chu immediately recognized him from the original novel as Jiang Cheng, the Triple Crown Best Actor and a secret admirer of her mother. He stared at the little girl with a look that felt strangely hostile, wondering why a child was allowed to touch the director's laptop. Gu Chu felt the awkwardness of his gaze and wondered what kind of grudge a famous actor could possibly have with a 5-year-old baby girl. The silence in the room became unbearable as they waited for the others to return. Gu Chu tried to break the ice by telling him she saw him on television all the time, but Jiang Cheng remained cold. Finally, Lu Shani and Song Chen walked back in, carrying bags of high-end honey. Lu Shani handed a jar to Gu Chu, telling her to give it to her mother for her skin because she had been working so hard. Jiang Cheng watched the interaction with a silent, brooding expression. Gu Chu peeked over her sunglasses, sensing that the best actor was perhaps a little too concerned about Uncle Lu's personal life. The room erupted into a petty argument as Song Chen and Lu Shani fought over who had the right to take care of Gu Manxi. The bickering was interrupted by the vibration of a phone, showing an incoming call from Manxi. Song Chen's face lit up instantly as he answered the video call, showing her that her daughter was safe. Gu Chu leaned into the frame, smiling brightly and telling her mother how much she loved spending time with Uncle Song. Song Chen felt like his father-daughter bond had just reached a new level, his heart swelling with joy. However, Gu Manxi wasn't as amused and demanded that he send the girl home immediately. As Song Chen prepared to leave, Lu Shani and Jiang Cheng stood together, watching them go. Jiang Cheng asked about the identity of the child's mother, sensing a secret. Lu Shani laughed, telling him it was a secret that would shock him when he finally found out. Jiang Cheng looked away, feeling a twinge of curiosity and a strange, lingering jealousy. A few days later, at the headquarters of Song Group Entertainment, a different kind of tension was brewing. Cheng Qingyan, Song Chen's supposed fiancée, sat in a lavish lounge visiting her best friend, Cao Yuezhi. She stirred her tea with a frustrated expression, complaining that Song Chen had become unpredictable lately. She was desperate to hold on to her status, especially since she knew he had changed after a certain woman left 5 years ago. Cao Yuezhi tried to cheer her up by mentioning her new role in Lu Shani's film. It was only a second female lead, but it was still a major production. Their conversation was cut short when an assistant rushed in with a tablet, announcing that the poster for the female lead had just been released. Cao Yuezhi looked at the screen, noting that the newcomer was named Gu Manxi. As the image loaded, showing a stunning woman in a black kippah holding a fan, both women froze. The blood drained from Cao Yuezhi's face as she recognized the woman she thought had been driven out of the industry forever. Yuezhi stared at the screen, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the edge of her seat. Her manager leaned in, sensing the sudden shift in the air, and asked what was wrong and who the female lead actually was. The revelation hit Yuezhi like a physical blow, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and simmering rage as she realized it was her old rival. It had taken so much calculated effort to get rid of Gu Roxy back then, and the sight of her name back in the headlines was a nightmare she had thought was long buried. A cold, hard determination settled over her features as she looked at a photo of the woman she had once successfully sabotaged. If she had managed to kick Gu Roxy out of the industry once, she was certain she could do it again. While the shadows of the past began to stir in the city, Gu Manxi was focused on the present, offering a bright and hopeful smile as she prepared for her day. She leaned down to give her daughter a final instruction, telling the girl she was heading to the studio. Gu Chu waved a small hand, calling out a sweet goodbye as her mother stepped toward the waiting car. Before leaving, Gu Manxi reminded her to stay put and finish her arts and crafts homework, promising to check it the moment she returned. Left alone in the sprawling house, Gu Chu slumped over the coffee table, her pink pigtails drooping as she stared at the mountain of paper in front of her. She put on a brave face for the empty room, but internally, she was screaming for a savior to rescue her from the mind-numbing task of cutting out tiny paper ducks. As if answering her silent prayer, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Gu Chu looked up, her blue eyes sparkling with genuine relief as she realized her lifesaver had finally arrived. "Brother Cheng Qi, come help me with my homework," she chirped, holding up a pair of red-handled scissors and a bright blue sheet of paper. Cheng Qi offered a soft, indulgent smile and stepped forward, taking the tools from her small hands without hesitation. He looked incredibly graceful even while performing such a mundane task, and Gu Chu watched him with appreciative gaze. She couldn't help but think how handsome he was, noting that if he were just a few years older, Even her dog dad might have to step aside in the face such competition. She watched him work, her mind spinning with a child's version of strategic analysis. She was convinced Cheng Qi was only hanging around to get closer to her beautiful mother, but she mused that both her father and Uncle Lu were currently standing in his way. Cheng Qi broke the silence by asking if there was a boy in her class that she liked. Gu Chu immediately shook her head, holding up a finger to emphasize that her mother had strictly forbidden her from dating until she was at least 18. She looked at him with a playful, knowing expression, telling the young master that his questions were getting a bit tricky. The mention of the age 18 caused a flicker of something deep and complex to cross Cheng Qi's face. 18, he repeated softly to himself, his gaze turning distant. His mind drifted back to the Red Ace case, remembering the elusive woman he had been ordered to arrest the very moment she had reached that milestone age. To him, 18 was an age that represented surprises and a dangerous, fleeting beauty. He looked back at the little girl, asking her more directly what kind of boy she preferred. Gu Chu paused, her finger tapping her chin as she tried to come up with a description. She began listing traits. Someone with a nice profile, thick eyebrows, and thin lips, perhaps someone who wore a black uniform and was skilled at video games and flying planes. Suddenly, she caught herself wondering why on earth she was describing Shensai. Cheng Qi laughed, telling her she had great taste, though he secretly thought her description sounded exactly like his old rival Red Ace. When Gu Chu turned the question back on him, asking what kind of girl he liked, his expression softened into something intense and yearning. He described a woman who could fight, someone arrogant and over the top who was always lying and scheming, yet would secretly stop to feed stray kittens. He spoke of a woman who was wicked, wild, and shameless, someone who was cunning and fast enough to stay one step ahead of him. Every time she slipped away right under my nose, I was so mad I could explode, he admitted, his eyes fixed on the paper duck he was finishing. He confessed that while he hated how she always managed to escape him, he loved the fact that she never let him catch her. He looked down at the letter A he had perfectly cut out, a small, triumphant smile playing on his lips. Gu Chu watched him, completely misinterpreting his nostalgia. She giggled behind her hand, convinced that he was lost in a love fantasy about her mother, and silently warned him not to fall too hard. As the sun began to set, Cheng Qi finally took his leave. His driver noticed how long he had spent playing with the child, but Cheng Qi simply nodded and signaled for them to go. However, as the car pulled away, a mischievous glint appeared in his eyes. He instructed his driver to contact the art teacher at the kindergarten and ensure they assign Gu Chu more difficult craft homework, the harder the better. He leaned back in his seat, a pale hand resting on his lap as he admitted to himself that he really did enjoy the challenge. Meanwhile, at the studio, Gu Mangxi was being introduced to her co-star for the new film. The male lead, Jiang Cheng, was a well-known figure in the industry, and the atmosphere was charged with the professional tension of a high-stakes production. Nearby, the personal lives of the cast and crew continued to clash. Song Chen found himself in a heated argument with another man, both of them bickering over who had more right to be at the studio. The conflict escalated quickly, with tempers flaring as they traded insults about who truly belonged in Mangxi's life. Song Chen was eventually grabbed by his shirt and hauled toward the exit. He grumbled about being pulled as he was forced to step outside, but he paused just long enough to tell Gu Chu that there were snacks in the box for her. Gu Chu barely looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with confusion at the two grown men sneaking around and fighting like children. She quickly dismissed them, deciding that a team fight in her mobile game was far more important than their petty squabble. Outside, the confrontation continued as the two men stood under the grand pillars of the building. Song Chen was accused of being blind to the reality of the situation, with the other man holding up a phone to show him the vitriol spreading online. The screen was filled with hateful comments from fans of Yueji, all of them attacking Gu Mangxi's character and demanding she be replaced. Song Chen remained remarkably calm in the face of the digital onslaught. When asked what he intended to do about the attacks, he simply adjusted his tie and stated with absolute confidence that he had money. The other man could only groan at the bluntness of the response, but Song Chen was already moving. He pulled out his own phone and showed a headline that would change everything. It was a shocking announcement. The internationally acclaimed but previously banned film, Falling Blossoms in Youth, had officially been unbanned. The effect was instantaneous. Public opinion shifted overnight as people remembered Gu Mangxi's phenomenal performance in the classic film, and the haters were quickly silenced by a wave of renewed adoration. A few days later, Song Chen arrived at the Song Entertainment Media Group headquarters with Gu Chu in his arms. The staff whispered in hushed tones, wondering who the little girl was and if she could possibly be the president's illegitimate daughter. Song Chen ignored the gossip, focusing entirely on the child. He promised her that if she liked the smart robots that delivered coffee around the office, he would give her one of her own. He was determined to give his daughter whatever she wanted, having realized she preferred adventure over dolls. As they approached his private office, a hand reached out to turn the golden handle. Inside, a woman in a silk robe was waiting for them, a thermal container of chicken soup in her hand. She greeted him warmly, claiming she had made the soup just for him because she was worried he was overexerting himself. She began to put on a performance of fragility, mentioning that the doctor said she didn't have much time left and that she only wanted to take care of him. Gu Chu watched from her father's arms, her eyes narrowing as she recognized the classic tactics of a manipulative White Lotus from the original novel. Song Chen remained cold, stating he had people to handle his meals, but Gu Chu decided to intervene. She leaned in with an innocent smile, sniffing the air and remarking on how good the soup smelled. She looked at the woman and asked who she was, before clapping her hands together as if she had solved a puzzle. If she was so good at making soup, Gu Chu chirped, then she must be the family's new chef. Gu Chu looked up at the man with wide, pleading eyes, her voice small and sweet. "Uncle Song, can I drink the chicken soup that the chef auntie made? Pretty please?" she asked. Song Chen felt his heart melt at the request and immediately reached for the container. "Of course. Uncle will get you a bowl," he said, his expression softening as he poured the warm broth for her. Gu Chu took the bowl and began to drink, savoring the taste while Song Chen watched her with an attentive gaze, gently telling her to drink slowly. Standing nearby, Chen Qingyan watched the scene with a look of disbelief and growing irritation, her eyes fixed on the child who had just effortlessly claimed the soup she had intended for Song Chen. Gu Chu finished the bowl with a satisfied hum, announcing that the soup was super tasty and that she had drunk every drop. Chen Qingyan forced a tight, artificial smile, her voice strained as she remarked that it was great the girl liked it, while internally she seethed at the little brat for stealing her hard work with just a few words. Chen Qingyan stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized the pink-haired girl. "Ah, Chen, whose child is this? I don't think I've seen her before," she asked, trying to keep tone casual. Song Chen went quiet for a moment, his mind immediately cataloging the dangers surrounding Gu Chu, from the Zhao family to the mysterious forces hidden in the United States. He knew there were too many variables to speak the truth, especially since he and Manxi were not officially together yet, and he decided it was better not to reveal her identity to protect her. "This is Chu Chu," he said, resting a hand on the girl's head. "She is the child of a business partner." Chen Qingyan repeated the phrase with clear skepticism, her gaze lingering on the protective way he held the child. Sensing the woman's eyes on her, Gu Chu tugged at Song Chen's sleeve and asked when they were going to see the robots. "Very soon," he promised her. "They are setting things up now." Chen Qingyan knew Song Chen's personality better than anyone. He was a man who avoided children whenever possible, yet here, he was acting remarkably patient. She realized he was playing some kind of game and decided she would play along for now. She leaned down toward the girl, her smile bright and insincere. "Hello, Chu Chu. I am Chen Qingyan. You can call me Sister Cheng," she said, reaching out to pat the girl's head. Gu Chu stared back blankly as the woman continued, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I am your Uncle Song's fiancée, not his private chef." Gu Chu tilted her head, repeating the word fiancé as if she didn't understand. "A fiancé is, well, someone you are going to marry," Chen Qingyan explained, her eyes flicking toward Song Chen to gauge his reaction. She moved closer to him, her hand sliding onto his arm. "So in the future, I will be marrying your Uncle Song," she declared. She clung to his arm with a triumphant expression, certain of her status. The rejection was swift and public. Song Chen pulled his arm back, his voice sharp and firm. "No, Auntie Cheng is joking," he said. He looked directly at Gu Chu, ensuring she heard him clearly. Uncle Song would never marry her. Gu Chu watched the woman's face crumble, laughing hysterically in her mind at what a spectacular failure the attempt had been. Chen Qingyan stood frozen in shock. She had been publicly claiming to be his fiancée for 5 years, and this was the very first time he had ever denied that relationship, especially in front of a third party. Song Chen didn't seem to care about her feelings, telling her that he had things to take care of and that she should go home because of her poor health. He told her to have the driver take her back, reminding her not to overwork as he had once done. Chen Qingyan's eyes flashed with a desperate, calculating light. Suddenly, she let out a sharp cry and clutched her chest, her body trembling. "Ah, Chen, my chest hurts so much," she gasped, collapsing onto the sofa. Song Chen immediately moved to her side, his brow furrowing with worry as he offered to have his assistant take her to the hospital. Gu Chu watched from the side, thinking to herself how incredibly fake the performance was. Chen Qingyan reached out for him, her voice a weak plea. "Ah, Chen, I am scared of injections. Can you stay with me?" she asked. Song Chen looked genuinely flustered, a bead of sweat appearing on his face as he dealt with the sudden crisis. Gu Chu knew she couldn't let the woman gain the upper hand. She suddenly cried out in a loud, dramatic wail. "Oh no," she screamed, catching Song Chen's attention immediately. Song Chen rushed over to her, his face pale. "Chu Chu, what's wrong?" he asked. Gu Chu rolled onto the sofa, clutching her stomach. "Chu Chu's tummy hurts. Wah, Chu Chu's gonna die. I am gonna die," she cried. Song Chen didn't hesitate, scooping her up into his arms. "Don't be scared, Chu Chu. I will take you to the doctor right now," he said, his voice thick with panic as he shouted for help. His assistant rushed in, and Song Chen barked out orders to have every doctor in the corporate medical department ready within 3 minutes. He paced the room, his mind racing with terrifying thoughts of appendicitis or food poisoning. He turned to his assistant and told him to send Chen Qingyan to her family's private hospital. barely sparing her a glance. As Cheng Qingyun was pushed aside, she realized with a sinking heart that in Song Chen's eyes, this child was actually more important than her, even if the brat was supposedly suffering from a terminal illness. Gu Chu lay against Song Chen's shoulder, whimpering in pain, but she couldn't resist winking and offering a tiny, mischievous grin. Cheng Qingyun saw the look and her blood began to boil. This kid is totally faking it, she realized. She stared at the girl, amazed that someone so young already knew how to fake an illness for sympathy, like a natural-born manipulator. She clenched her fist, vowing to find out the girl's true identity, and decided that if she was a threat to her place beside Song Chen, she wouldn't go easy on her. Gu Chu remained calm, remembering how Cheng Qingyun had used these exact same methods against her mother in the original story to create misunderstandings. She figured that if the woman could do it, so could she. When the doctors arrived, Song Chen urgently told them to check Chu Chu. He watched her with eyes full of desperate concern. Gu Chu continued to moan, saying it hurt so much. However, as the medical staff began their examination, Song Chen's sharp eyes noticed the lack of physical symptoms. He began to wonder if Chu Chu was feigning the illness. He let out a long, weary sigh and told the doctors to go back. Song Chen thought about the parenting books he had read, specifically the section on how to handle a child who lies and feigns illness. He sat on the edge of the sofa and placed his hand over hers. Chu Chu, you are feigning illness, aren't you? He asked gently. Gu Chu looked away, her expression shifting to one of guilt. Song Chen explained that lying was bad and would worry her mother, asking why she would do such a thing. Gu Chu finally looked at him, her eyes wide. Chu Chu doesn't like Miss Cheng, she confessed. She told him the woman's eyes were fierce and scary, like a wicked stepmother. Song Chen was surprised, defending Cheng Qingyun by saying she was kind, but Gu Chu insisted that the woman had glared at her fiercely when they were out. Song Chen went quiet, his mind weighing the child's words against his image of Cheng Qingyun as obedient and gentle. He promised to investigate but asked Gu Chu not to prank people with fake illnesses anymore. Gu Chu pouted, saying she really hated Miss Cheng. I don't like her being your fiancé. I hope mommy becomes your fiancé, she said. Song Chen's face transformed with a look of pure, unadulterated joy. What? My precious daughter said it herself. She hopes Manxie becomes my wife. He thought, his heart soaring. He hugged her tightly, feeling that all his care over the past month had finally been worth it. He was convinced she had feigned illness specifically to defend his marriage to her biological mother. He promised to protect her and her mother for a lifetime, but Gu Chu wasn't finished. I hope you and Mr. Lu will protect mommy together, she added. Song Chen froze, his expression darkening instantly. Mr. Lu? He repeated. Gu Chu continued to count on her fingers, explaining that both men were very good to her mother, and that she hoped her mommy could marry both of them. She suggested he could be the first daddy, Mr. Lu the second, and Mr. Jiang the third. Song Chen stared at her in absolute horror, his mind reeling at the terrifying idea of sharing the title of father with two other men. He imagined Lu Shani trying to be the second dad and felt a surge of possessive fury, telling himself the man could only dream of it. Gu Chu watched him with a calculating gaze, thinking about the deep emotional debt he owed her mother. She wasn't about to let him off the hook after only 1 month. She felt he needed to repay that debt for a long time, and only when he saw Cheng Qingyun's true colors would she consider handing her mother over to him. She began to tell him about their past, describing how poor they were and how her mother worked so hard she couldn't even straighten her back. She spoke of a heavy rainstorm when her mother had carried her for 5 kilometers on her back. Because they couldn't find a car, her feet rubbed raw and bleeding. She described how her mother always refused to see a doctor when she was sick, always putting her daughter first. Gu Chu clutched the fabric of his jacket, her voice trembling as she spoke of her wish for her mother to have many people protecting her. Her small fingers tightened on his clothes as she played the part of a vulnerable child to perfection. Song Chen held her close, his heart breaking as he realized how much Manxie had suffered over the years. He vowed to take his time proving his sincerity and promised he would never let her suffer like that again. Meanwhile, at the Cheng family's private hospital, Cheng Qingyun was already meeting with a doctor. She handed him a request, her voice cold and demanding. Dr. Li, go check on Gu Chu for me. This hospital should have her personal medical records, she ordered. The doctor looked at the request, noting that she seemed like an ordinary child, but Cheng Qingyun wasn't convinced. She clenched her hand into a tight pinch, her eyes burning with a dark suspicion. She had seen how much Song Chen valued the girl, and a terrifying realization had begun to take hold. I almost suspected this as his daughter, she thought, her face twisting with malice. And Zhao stood in her room, the silk of her robe slipping slightly as she spoke with a cold determination to the man standing across from her. I must marry into the Song family. There can be no mistakes, she declared, her eyes fixed on a future she refused to let slip away. Her mind drifted back to the years before she turned 10, a time when her world was defined by the harsh realities of poverty. Back then, she had lived in the slums where every corner was filled with filth and squalor, a stark contrast to the life she craved. Fate had seemed to smile upon her when she discovered that her biological father was none other than Cheng Kaiyuan, the powerful head of the Cheng family in Jing City. She had looked at the grand estate and imagined her days of being a princess, destined for a life of prosperity and greatness, were finally here. However, the dream shattered when she realized she was merely one of many illegitimate children, none of whom could claim the family assets, leading to a bitter internal war for the position of heir. In that cutthroat world, no one could truly stand against the legitimate young master. Even at only 15 years old, Cheng Qi had already taken control of more than half the Cheng family through sheer ruthlessness and a bloody nature. Zhao turned toward the window, her reflection showing a woman who had tasted wealth and could no longer stomach the thought of a hard life. Since she could not defeat Cheng Qi, she would find another path to the top, even if it meant using the Song family as her stepping stone. A few days later, Gu sat comfortably on a sofa, munching on a snack while listening to the adults discuss her potential role in a new movie. Chu Chu smiled brightly, promising to do her best, though her thoughts were actually on her mother, Gu Maxi. It had been over half a month since they had seen each other, and Gu Chu felt a pang of worry knowing that the villainous Cao Yuji was also on the same film set. Meanwhile, Zhao was in a car with her mother, heading toward the very same studio. Her mother spoke with a mix of disdain and envy about how Gu Maxi had climbed the social ladder to become a star, even snagging director lose attention without a peep. The film studio was a sprawling complex of classical buildings and bustling crews. As Zhao walked through the area, she looked around impatiently, wondering where her sister was hiding. Suddenly, a shout rang out as a heavy rickshaw began sliding down a slope, heading straight for her. Before she could react, a pair of strong arms pulled her out of harm's way, a voice shouting for her to watch out. Zhao looked up into the eyes of her savior, a strikingly handsome man dressed in a period vest and bow tie. Her heart began to thump wildly against her ribs as she stammered that she was looking for her sister. The man had piercing green eyes that seemed to see right through her. Zhao felt a sharp pain in her leg and looked down to see that she had twisted her ankle during the rescue. The man immediately called for an ice pack, his voice calm and authoritative as he handed her over to a staff member. Zhao followed the staff member into a dressing room, her head filled with thoughts of the handsome actor, only to discover a shocking truth as she entered the room. The handsome man who had saved her was actually her own sister, Gu Maxi, who had been dressed in drag for a scene. Zhao's face turned a deep shade of crimson as the realization hit her like a physical blow, and a staff member confirmed she was looking for Maxi. Mortified beyond words, she screamed that she never wanted to see Maxi again and bolted from the room. She ran out into the gardens, tears of frustration and embarrassment streaming down her face as she cursed the fact that she had fallen for her sister at first sight. In a fit of dramatic despair, she threw herself onto the grass, rolling around and wishing for the ground to swallow her whole. She sat up eventually, hugging her knees as she wallowed in the sheer awkwardness of the situation. As she calmed down, she began to question why she had harbored so much hatred for Maxi, when the woman had never actually done anything to her. She realized that her mother's words had poisoned her mind, and that she had simply been jealous of her sister all along. Her introspection was interrupted by the voices of two extras sitting on a nearby bench, gossiping maliciously about how Maxi must have slept her way into director's bed. Zhao's eyes narrowed as she listened to them insult her sister's character. She stood up, her red dress flared as she marched over, and demanded to know who they thought they were to gossip such nonsense. The extras tried to defend themselves, claiming it was their right to say whatever they wanted. Zhao tossed her hair back, retorting that since she was beautiful, she had every right to dress flamboyantly and speak her mind. She leaned in close, threatening to send photos of them to the studio owner if they didn't shut their stinking mouths immediately. Terrified of losing their jobs, the two gossips gathered their things and scurried away as fast as they could. Zhao watched them go with a huff, realizing that she found Maxi utterly irresistible, whether she was in menswear or a dress. On the set, the director called for a break, and the crew buzzed with excitement over how well Maxi was performing alongside the veteran actors. Zhao watched from the sidelines as Maxi was surrounded by admirers, looking absolutely dazzling in her costume. She realized then that her mother had been completely wrong about her sister, and that Maxi wasn't bad at all. Elsewhere, a sleek blue car moved through the city streets as Cheng Qi drove Gu Chu toward the studio. Gu Chu looked at the teenager beside her, noting how efficient and reliable he had become despite being only 15. She knew from the original story that he was destined for a tragic end because of his ruthless siblings, and she felt a surge of protectiveness. Cheng Kai noticed her staring and offered a small, rare smile. Gu Chu warned him to be careful of the trouble his father's other children might cause, and told him that she was strong enough to protect him. Cheng Qi's lips curled into a smile at her earnest declaration. He patted her head and told her not to worry, suggesting she save those skills for herself. Chu Chu beamed at him, suggesting they beat up all the bad guys together. Cheng Kai agreed, his gaze softening as he thought of her as the ace of hearts. He made a silent vow that this time, with her by his side, he would not allow their story to end in tragedy. And Gu Chu snuck up behind her mother, covering her eyes with her small hands and giggling as she asked her to guess who it was. Gu Maxi laughed, pulling her daughter into a warm embrace and telling her that she was her most favorite person in the world. While she played the part of the innocent child, Gu Chu's mind was racing with strategy. knowing she had to stay for a few days to figure out the background of Cao Yuezhi and her niece. Nearby, Cheng Jiang watched the little girl with a sharp, knowing gaze, convinced that her acting skills were truly unparalleled. Outside the audition room, Cao Yuezhi leaned down to her niece, Meng Meng, telling her she must win this role because they couldn't afford to lose to Gu Mangxi's daughter. She watched the mother and daughter with a cold, calculating stare, resenting how Gu Mangxi had stolen the spotlight she once held as the director's favorite. Director Lu Shaini gathered the children, explaining that the scenario for the audition was a battlefield where a little girl had lost her parents. The kids began shouting and jumping, each one desperate to be the first to try out, which only served to irritate Gu Chu, who felt like she was back in a nightmare kindergarten. Sensing her tension, Cheng Jiang approached her with a glass of water, telling her not to be nervous and to moisten her throat. Gu Chu took a long gulp of the water while Cao Yuezhi watched them, wondering why a powerful young master like Cheng Jiang was so attentive to a child brought in by Gu Mangxi. The first few performances were lackluster, with children wailing dramatic lines about not wanting to be left behind, leaving the judges looking exhausted and disappointed. Finally, it was Gu Chu's turn to take the stage. She stepped forward with a calm confidence that belied her age, introducing herself as 5 years old to the esteemed judges. As soon as the signal was given, Gu Chu's entire demeanor shifted. A single tear began to stream down her cheek, her eyes filled with a profound, soul-crushing sadness as she whispered for her mother. She called out for her father into the void of the imaginary battlefield. She wandered through the simulated wreckage, her small voice trembling as she searched for her parents amidst the flames. The imagery she evoked was visceral, her hand reaching out toward a bloody, motionless limb as if she were witnessing the end of the world. She looked down at her own trembling hands, the horror of the scene written across her face. With a hollow, haunting look in her eyes, she whispered that she was hungry and just wanted to go home. The room fell into a stunned silence. Lu Shaini stared at her, wondering if it was even possible for a 5-year-old to possess such terrifying emotional depth. Cao Yuezhi felt a cold sweat break out, realizing that Gu's acting was far beyond anything a normal child could perform. Lu Shaini was so excited he could hardly contain himself, praising the way she captured the naivety of a child against the harshness of the era. In her mind, Gu Chu reflected on her past life, thinking about how she had ended up in this novel because of a suddenly exploding stone. After the audition, Gu Mangxi took her daughter's hand, planning to take her for a walk around the neighborhood now that the script work was done. Cao Yuezhi watched them leave, her mind churning with suspicion as she recalled that Cheng Qingyan had asked her to investigate the girl's identity. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of Gu Mangxi and Gu Chu, determined to uncover the truth. Back at her home, Cheng Qingyan received the message. Her eyes widened as she read that the little girl was indeed Gu Mangxi's child. The realization hit her like a physical blow. If this child existed, it meant she was almost certainly Song Chen's daughter. She grew frantic, remembering how she had tried to force Gu Mangxi to take abortion drugs years ago. She began tapping her phone screen with shaking fingers, ordering Yuezhi to find a way to get a hair sample from Gu Chu for a DNA test. She resolved that she would be the only one worthy of being the mistress of the Song family, and that Gu Mangxi would not use a child to climb the social ladder. Meanwhile, on set, the makeup artists were fawning over Gu Chu's new look as a stray kitten for her role. Gu Mangxi was her daughter's biggest fan, snapping photos and wondering if she should send one to Song Chen. Despite her hesitation, she clicked send. In the middle of a high-stakes board meeting, Song Chen's phone chimed. He looked down and a soft smile spread across his face as he saw the photo of Gu Chu in her costume. He was so distracted by her cute, sun-kissed cheeks that he completely lost track of the presentation. When his employees asked if the project could be approved, he realized he had been caught daydreaming and asked them to go over the proposal again. Gu Mangxi and Song Chen exchanged a few more messages, with Gu Mangxi blushing as she told him not to eat too many likes. Gu Chu noticed her mother's red face and teased her about it. As they walked toward the set, Gu Chu felt satisfied that the relationship between her mother and her father was gradually mending, though she knew she still had to eliminate Cheng Qingyan first. Suddenly, they were interrupted by Zhang He, who had finally healed and was ready to return to filming. He thanked Gu Chu for visiting him in the hospital, but the pleasant moment was cut short when Cao Yuezhi appeared again. Gu Chu narrowed her eyes, annoyed to see the vicious female villain standing there once more. Gu Chu stood on the bustling movie set, her small frame nearly lost amidst the cameras and equipment. Cao Yuezhi leaned down toward her, a practiced, sugary smile on her face as she reminded the girl to give her all during the performance and not to disappoint director Lu. As the woman reached out, her fingers twitching toward the child's pink pigtails, Gu Chu sensed the trap. With a playful giggle, the girl ducked her head and spun away, causing Cao's hand to swipe at empty air. The frustration on Cao Yuezhi's face was momentary but sharp. Gu Chu watched her from under the brim of her little black hat, her adult mind analyzing the encounter. She knew exactly what the woman was after. Cao Yuezhi was desperate for a paternity test, likely trying to confirm if Gu Chu was the daughter of Lu Shaini or perhaps Song Chen. A short while later, Gu Mangxi had to prepare for her own scene. She entrusted her daughter to Zhang Qi, the famous action star, for the time being. Gu Chu nodded obediently, her innocent facade perfect as she watched her mother walk toward the dressing rooms. Zhang Qi mentioned that Song Chen had sent over ice cream for the entire crew and asked Gu Chu which flavor she preferred. She requested vanilla with a bright smile, and the actor headed off to fetch it, leaving her sitting alone on a wooden crate. It didn't take long for the shadow to return. Kao Yuji appeared again, her eyes fixed on the child's head. She complimented the hat, her voice dripping with false warmth as she reached out to touch it, but Gu Chu pulled back. The woman like a piece of sticky plaster that simply wouldn't go away. When the girl explained that the hat was clipped on and couldn't be removed easily, Kao Yuji's expression hardened. She looked at the 5-year-old, wondering if the brat was intentionally being cagey or if she actually understood the danger. Kao grew impatient, her voice losing its sweetness as she demanded the girl give her the hat. Gu Chu looked her straight in the eye and gave a firm refusal. The tension thickened as Kao Yuji looked ready to use force to get what she wanted. Gu Chu gripped the edge of her crate, her blue eyes narrowing. She hadn't had to hit anyone in a very long time, but she was more than ready to defend herself if this woman tried to touch her. Before the confrontation could escalate, a sharp voice cut through the air. Yi Qiantian, a popular female idol, stepped forward with a mocking laugh, asking the great movie queen if she was back to bullying children again. Yi Qiantian stood tall, her long orange braids and vibrant outfit making her look like a hero straight out of a comic book. Kao tried to stammer out an excuse about seeing a bug on the hat, but Qiantian laughed in her face, telling her that her acting was as bad as her character. Gu Chu puffed out her cheeks, trying to hide a smirk at the idol's bluntness. The two women traded barbs, with Kao Yuji calling Qiantian a pathetic tag-along. However, the idol merely winked and revealed that director Lu had invited her to sing the promotional song for the movie, a contract that was already signed. Gu Chu watched the exchange, her mind flashing back to the original plot of the novel. Yi Qiantian was a rare, upright person in the entertainment industry, but that goodness would eventually lead to her ruin. In the original story, Qiantian had stood up for Zhang Qi when he was framed for a scandal, causing her own career to plummet. Later, because she went against Kao Yuji, her beautiful voice was ruined, and she disappeared from the public eye entirely. Gu Chu looked at the brave woman shielding her and made a silent vow that she would stop that tragic future from happening. After Kao Yuji retreated in a huff, Qiantian turned to Gu Chu and warned her to stay far away from that woman in the future. She admitted she was actually looking for Zhang Qi, and Gu Chu happily told her that he would be back with ice cream soon. When Zhang Qi returned, he took Gu Chu to the set so she could watch the fight scenes, with Qiantian following closely behind, her eyes shining with admiration for the actor. Gu Chu watched the crew as they prepared the wire rig for a high-altitude stunt. She observed Zhang Qi being harnessed into the equipment, listening as the staff explained he would be jumping from a 10-meter platform. With an innocent look, Gu Chu asked about the wires, even reaching out to touch them to check their strength. The crew assured her that the wires were replaced regularly and that there hadn't been an accident in decades. Gu Chu smiled, but her eyes were cold. She knew that in the original story, Zhang Qi was meant to be accidentally injured during this very scene. She realized she had to do something from the shadows to prevent the tragedy while keeping her own secrets safe. She pretended to be relieved, stepping back as the director called for the first take of the sight test. The machinery began to whir, lifting Zhang Qi into the air toward the 20-meter mark. Suddenly, Zhang Qi's face went pale. He began to shout for the crew to stop, his voice echoing through the set as he realized his pants were slipping down because he hadn't tightened his belt. The crew laughed, starting to lower him immediately, but then a terrifying sound filled the air. The wire rope snapped with a violent crack. The metal strands frayed and gave way in an instant. Zhang Qi fell, but because he was only 5 meters up instead of 10, he hit the safety mat with a loud bang instead of the hard floor. Qiantian screamed his name, rushing toward the mat in a state of pure panic. Gu Chu watched the chaos, her expression calm. Everything had gone exactly as she intended. Director Lu and the crew swarmed around Zhang Qi, helping him to the side to check for injuries. The director was furious, ordering the scene secured and all unauthorized personnel cleared out immediately. A technician soon approached with a grim face, holding the ends of the snapped wire. He pointed out that the ropes had very clean cuts in them. It was obvious that someone had deliberately sabotaged the rig, making small cuts so it would snap under weight. Director Lu realized that if Zhang Qi's pants hadn't fallen off, he would have been at the full height and likely suffered permanent injuries. He ordered a complete, confidential investigation into the equipment. Meanwhile, at the Song family estate, Song Chen was finishing his work for the day. He instructed his assistant to have project documents ready for his review later that night. As he turned to leave, he was stopped by his grandfather, who sat in a wheelchair with a stern expression. The old man asked where he was going, his eyes full of suspicion. Grandpa Song questioned the frequent deliveries Song Chen was sending to Lu Shan his film crew, suggesting that his grandson was keeping track of more than just a business investment. The old man dropped a bombshell, saying that if Song Chen actually liked Lu Shan, he could accept it. Song Chen's jaw dropped in utter shock at the misunderstanding. He vehemently denied having any romantic interest in the director, his face turning red with embarrassment. His grandfather eventually sighed, telling him to break off his current engagement and inviting Lu Shan to his upcoming birthday party. Song Chen realized the situation was spiraling out of control, but he knew he had to bring Gu Chu to that party to finally prove the truth of his paternity. The film crew at the hotel resumed their normal shooting schedule after a supposedly thorough inspection of the wire ropes. Little did they know that the equipment had been expertly tampered with, a detail that remained hidden from their untrained eyes. Inside one of the guest rooms, Gu Chu sat perched on the edge of a large bed, her small fingers flying across the keyboard of her laptop as she monitored the digital chatter surrounding the set. A sudden, aggressive knock at the door broke her concentration. "Brother-in-law, open up," a woman's voice shrilled from the hallway. "I called you, but you did not answer, and I texted you, but you did not reply." Gu Chu hopped off the bed and pulled the door open, staring up at the glamorous woman standing there. "Who is it?" Gu Chu asked with an innocent tilt of her head. The woman, draped in a shimmering black cocktail dress with purple-tipped hair, froze in surprise. "Huh, you are," she stammered, looking down at the pink-haired child. "I am looking for the big star Zhang Qi. He is my brother-in-law." Her eyes narrowed as she looked past Gu Chu into the room. "But why are you in his room?" she demanded, her mind already spinning with scandalous possibilities. "Could it be that Zhang Qi is keeping a mistress behind my sister's back and even has an illegitimate daughter?" A wicked smirk played on the woman's lips as she clutched her designer bag, thinking she had just stumbled upon a goldmine of juicy gossip. Gu Chu recognized her immediately as Xiaosu, Zhang Qi's sister-in-law. In the original plot of the novel, this woman was nothing but trouble for the rising star. "Mr. Zhang Qi lives over there in room 2021, Gu Chu said calmly, pointing down the hall. "This is room 2012, miss. You are at the wrong room." She added that he was still filming and might be back very late. Xiaosu clicked her tongue in annoyance, her excitement vanishing instantly. "So it is not his illegitimate child. I got excited for nothing," she muttered under her breath. She turned on her heel without a word of thanks, while Gu Chu watched her retreating back with a pleasant, fake smile. "Take care, miss," Gu Chu called out sweetly. As the door clicked shut, Gu Chu's expression shifted to one of cold calculation. This woman was a harbinger of doom in the original story. Because of her, Zhang Qi's reputation was eventually ruined when she was conveniently found in his bed by the paparazzi. He fell from an A-list star to a complete unknown and eventually died from the sheer stress of overwork. Gu Chu knew she had to find a way to warn him before history repeated itself. In her mind, she could see exactly how Xiaosui operated, recalling the scenes from the book where she would invite Zhang Qi to dinner and act the part of the supportive relative. She would pretend to be excited about a small role in a drama and ask him to visit her on set. During their meals, she would lean in close, her eyes sparkling with false affection, as she reached out to wipe sauce from the corner of his mouth. Zhang Qi, being an unromantic and straightforward man, would simply thank her and keep eating, unaware of the trap being laid. Xiaochu didn't care about his lack of response because she had already hidden cameras to record every staged moment of intimacy. She could already see the headlines in her mind, screaming about a famous Marshall star's late-night tryst with a beauty. Back at her laptop, Gu Chu saw a notification flash across her screen. An unknown camera had been detected in the vicinity. It seemed the sister-in-law was already moving to stir up trouble, and Gu decided it was time to take action. She quickly typed a message to one of her trusted contacts, demanding they show themselves. "Boss, you finally contact me." The reply came back almost instantly. "Any missions for me lately?" Gu Chu gave her orders clearly, telling them to monitor the communication records of Xiaoxu, Xiaonan, and the paparazzi Zhang Zhaoqiang for the next few days. The subordinate confirmed the task was a piece of cake, but then added a piece of news that made Gu Chu's blood run cold. They mentioned that a leader from an organization had contacted them privately to join a team for a hacker competition in America. The name of that organization was Poker. Gu Chu stared at the screen, her eyes wide with shock. In this novel world, there was actually an organization called Poker. She instructed her subordinate to finish their current tasks and avoid contact with that group for now. As the subordinate signed off, promising to see their boss at the world competition, Gu Chu sat in a stunned silence. She had been in this world for almost 2 years, yet she had never noticed the existence of Poker. In her previous life, that was the very name of the world-class hacker organization she had co-founded with a man named Mo. They had expanded it from nothing to a global powerhouse before Mo mysteriously disappeared. To find him, she had been forced to step out of the shadows and into the light. But she had learned that before he vanished, Mo had been searching for a special stone. It was because of that very stone that she had inexplicably transmigrated into this novel world. She realized she would have to go to America eventually to uncover the true face of this version of Poker. A soft sound at the door made her snap her laptop shut. "Chu Chu, it is so late. Why are you not asleep yet?" Gu Mangxi asked as she walked into the room. "Mommy," Chu cried out, turning back into a perfectly normal, innocent child. She scrambled off the bed and threw her arms around her mother's waist. "Chu Chu was waiting for Mommy to come back," she chirped. Gu Mangxi smiled, picking her daughter up. "Mommy is hardly a big star yet," she laughed softly. Then, her expression turned a bit more serious. "By the way, Song Chen will come over tomorrow. Mommy asked him to help you with your summer homework, so you have to be good, okay?" Gu Chu's jaw dropped, her eyes filling with genuine horror. Summer homework, she shrieked internally. She had completely forgotten about that pile of boring kindergarten assignments while she was busy managing international hacker networks and preventing life-altering scandals. The next day, Song Chen arrived looking every bit the strict tutor in his sharp suit and glasses. I was personally appointed by Manxi to tutor homework today, he declared with a smug adjustment of his frames. Little Chu Chu, you are not going anywhere today, so be good and do your work. Gu Chu sat at a small table, staring miserably at her math and Chinese workbooks while Song Chen sat across from her with his arms crossed. Mr. Song, she pleaded, her voice small and pathetic. No way, he countered. Your mom said you have to finish before you can rest. Gu Chu clasped her hands together, her large blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears as she looked up at him. But Mr. Song, Chu Chu is thirsty and wants to drink juice. Let us just go downstairs and buy some juice, okay? The sight of her pouting face hit Song Chen like a physical blow to the heart. Fine, let's go, he shouted, throwing his hands up as papers flew off the table. It is just juice, it's perfectly reasonable. Gu Chu giggled as he led her toward the door by the hand. She thought to herself that her dumb-ass daddy was finally starting to feel like a real person these days. However, she wasn't just looking for juice. She intended to use this opportunity to track down Xiao Xiu. As they walked through the hotel's upscale dining area, Gu Chu's sharp eyes scanned the room. She knew Xiao Xiu didn't have a shoot this afternoon and hadn't gone to the set, which meant she was likely plotting something nearby. Found her, Gu Chu thought as she spotted the purple hair at a distant table. Mr. Song, let's sit here, she said, pointing to a table that gave her a perfect view of their target. The waitstaff immediately swarmed Song Chen, eager to serve the powerful man. Chu Chu, pick whatever you like, Song Chen said, handing her the menu. Gu Chu didn't hold back, pointing at item after item. I want this one, and this one, she cheered, going wild with the ordering. Song Chen watched her with a faint, indulgent smile as he sipped his water. He pulled out his phone to report his progress to Manxi, feeling incredibly proud of himself. He texted her that Chu Chu had finished her math and he was treating her to a snack. When Manxi replied thanking him for his hard work, Song Chen's face flushed red with joy. Gu Chu sighed, watching him turn into a blushing mess over a simple text. As expected, men in love are idiots, she thought. She reached up to her ear, activating a small listening device. Connection successful, she noted as the audio from Xiao Xiu's table came through clearly. Xiao Xiu was on the phone, her voice hushed and venomous. Tonight is the night, she whispered. Zhang Qi gets off work at 8 and I will slip the stuff into his chicken soup. Don't worry, no one will know. Gu Chu took a bite her green tea ice cream, her eyes narrowing. Oh, excuse me, but I already know, she thought. To ruin his reputation with a honey trap is truly despicable. Song Chen looked over at the array of desserts on their table and frowned. Chu Chu, why did you order so much ice cream? He asked. Manxi said you can only have 1 cup a day, so I'm having the rest taken away. Gu Chu's eyes bulged as he signaled the waiter. My dumbass daddy should look in the mirror and see if he looks like a henpecked husband, she fumed silently. I can't even get my fill of ice cream because of him. Song Chen ignored her pout and leaned forward. Chu Chu, I want to discuss something with you. My grandfather is turning 80 this August, and I want to know if you would like to meet him. Gu Chu paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Old Master Song, she realized. In the original novel, he was one of the few people who had been genuinely kind to her mother, seeing people for who they truly were. However, his story had ended in tragedy. At his 80th birthday banquet, Cheng Qingyun had secretly sabotaged his wheelchair, causing him to lose control and crash into a stone pillar, leading to his death. Gu Chu's expression turned grim as she realized she would have to keep a very close eye on Cheng Qingyun. Okay, I want to meet your grandpa, she agreed. Song Chen smiled, but their moment was interrupted by a sharp voice. Mr. Song, Xiao Xiu exclaimed, sashaying over to their table with her phone in hand. I am so happy to run into you here. You are even more handsome than the rumors say. She introduced herself as Zhang Qi's sister-in-law, clearly trying to use the connection to get Song Chen's attention. Gu Chu saw her opening and hopped down from her chair. Chu Chu, where are you going? Song Chen asked, looking startled. I am going to call Mommy, Gu Chu announced with a mischievous glint in her eyes. You have company now, so Chu Chu won't disturb you too. Wait, what? Song Chen yelled, his face contorting in panic as he realized how this would look to Manxi. Chu Chu, come back, he pleaded, trying to reach for her as she skipped away. Xiao Xiu saw her chance and stepped in his way, putting a hand on his arm. Mr. Song, please wait. I am actually involved in the filming too, she cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Could I take this opportunity to ask for some guidance? Get lost, Song Chen roared, his face darkening with rage as he shoved her hand off his expensive suit. He was a notorious germaphobe who couldn't stand the touch of strangers. Xiaoxiu recoiled in terror, stammering an apology as he charged past her to find Gu Chu. I am doomed, she thought, trembling as she realized she had offended the CEO of the company. But how is that child so close to him? Could it be, she wondered, before her phone buzzed with a call from Zhang Qi. She quickly masked her fear with a fake, cheerful voice. Hello, brother-in-law, are you finally done with filming? I am absolutely starving. How about we grab some Western food tonight? She paused, her eyes glinting with malice. Or better yet, there is a place with really good chicken soup. Later that evening, the tension was thick as Gu Mangxi, Song Chen, and Gu Chu sat down for a quiet dinner. Mangxi, eat more. Filming must have been tough, Song Chen said, placing food in her bowl. Thanks, Mangxi replied shortly, her eyes occasionally darting toward her daughter. Mommy, what does catching a cheater mean? Gu Chu asked suddenly, her voice loud and clear in the quiet room. Both adults froze instantly, their chopsticks hovering in midair. Song Chen looked like he had been struck by lightning, while Mangxi's face paled. It wasn't me, I didn't teach Chu Chu that word, Song Chen stammered, his hands shaking as he looked at Mangxi's accusing glare. Chu Chu, that is not a nice phrase. Where did you hear it? Mangxi asked, her voice stern. Gu Chu looked down at her soup, playing the part of the confused child. Chu Chu was waiting for Mommy in the lobby and drank too much water, so I went to the bathroom, she explained. Then I heard a lady on the phone saying something about the paparazzi coming and preparing to catch that cheater. She said something about going to Zhang Qi's room tonight and getting a large sum of money when it's done. Gu Chu looked up, her eyes wide and innocent. She also said Mr. Zhang Qi would have to jump into the Yellow River to clear his name. Mommy, is Mr. Zhang Qi really going to jump into the Yellow River? Gu Mangxi was frantic, her heart racing as she turned toward the door. I am going to find Qi, she declared, her voice trembling with urgency. Please help me look after Chu Chu. Song Chen reached out, his hand firm as he caught her arm and pulled her back. Wait, he commanded, his eyes narrowing with a calculated intensity. You have no proof. Going there based on a child's word is useless. Gu Mangxi looked at him, her eyes wide with desperation. Then what should we do? Do we just stand by and watch Zhang Qi get framed? Song Chen didn't answer immediately, instead turning his attention to the small girl watching them. Chu Chu, we have to go out for a bit, he said, his voice softening. The nanny will be here to look after you soon. Don't be scared and don't run off. Wait for us to come back, okay? Gu Chu nodded obediently, though her mind was already several steps ahead. My dumbass daddy is actually pretty reliable at critical moments like this, she thought. Song Chen took Gu Mangxi's hand, his grip steady and reassuring. Let us go to the security room first, he said, leading her toward the hallway. If they are trying to set him up, they are bound to have left some evidence. In a quiet room elsewhere, Xiaozu held a red thermos with a predatory smile. Brother-in-law, my sister told me to make sure you get daily nourishment, she cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I brought back some chicken soup. Drink it while it is hot. Zhang Qi, distracted by a script in his hands, didn't even look up. Just leave it there, he muttered. I will drink it after I finish reading the script. Xiaozu stepped closer, her purple hair swaying as she leaned in. No, it is best when it is hot, she insisted. Suddenly, Zhang Qi's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, his eyebrows knitting together in confusion. Miss Gu, why is she calling me so late? He stood up, grabbing the device. I am going to take this call, he told her, stepping away. Xiaozu watched him go, her expression shifting into a mask of cold determination. Hurry back, okay? She called out, but once he was out of earshot, her eyes flashed with malice. No matter what, I have to make Zhang Qi drink this today. She looked down at the open thermos, the steam rising from the liquid. Once he drinks the drug in this chicken soup, he will fall unconscious within half an hour, she whispered to herself. Then all I have to do is secretly climb into Zhang Qi's bed and have my sister catch us in the act. Zhang Qi's entire fortune will belong to us sisters. Zhang Qi returned a few moments later, his expression unreadable. Xiaoxu was waiting for him, the thermos already open. Xiaoxu, it is getting late, he said. You should go back to your room and rest. She didn't budge, stepping into his personal space with a practiced pout. I know, brother-in-law, but you must be tired after a long day of work. Have some chicken soup to replenish your energy. You have no idea how worried my sister is about you. Zhang Qi looked at the red container, hesitating. Do I really have to drink it? Xiaoxu let out a sharp, offended huff. Are you going to disrespect my sister's kind intentions? She demanded. I will go tell her and see if she gives you a good scolding or not. She turned as if to leave, her voice rising in feigned indignation. How can you neglect your own health like this? Fine, I will drink it. Zhang Qi sighed, relenting. He took the thermos and tilted it back, the liquid disappearing down his throat in several large gulps. Xiaozu watched him, a triumphant glint in her eyes. I have finished it, he said, wiping his mouth. You can go report back to your sister now. Xiaozu beamed, her plan finally in motion. Ha ha ha, we are just doing this for your own good, she said, her voice light and airy. I will be going then. You should get some sleep, brother-in-law. She walked out of the room, her silhouette disappearing into the hall. As soon as the door clicked shut, her face twisted into a dark, satisfied smirk. Inside the room, Zhang Qi stood perfectly still, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the closed door. The fish has taken the bait, he thought grimly. He immediately rushed to the bathroom, leaning over the sink. He let out a violent retch, forcing the liquid back up until his throat burned. Bleg, he coughed, clutching the edge of the porcelain. He leaned back against the wall, breathing heavily as he recalled the phone call from moments ago. Zhang Qi, we just got some news. Gu Mangxi's voice had been frantic over the line. Your sister-in-law, Xiaoxu, is planning to drug you. Don't drink anything she gives you. Zhang Qi had been skeptical at first. Miss Gu, that is impossible, he had argued. Xiaoxiu has always been very nice to me. But Song Chen's voice had cut in, cold and authoritative. It is true, you have to believe me. We have already found evidence that she is working with the paparazzi to set you up. These kinds of tactics are not uncommon in the entertainment industry. Gu Mangxi had then shared her own trauma. Back then, I drank a spiked drink and ended up stumbling into Song Chen's room by mistake. And he thought I was a woman who was sleeping her way to the top. Song Chen had quickly steered the conversation back to the present. Zhang Qi, this is Song Chen. I have already obtained the recording of her phone call. This isn't the only thing they have done to harm you. I will arrange for someone to pick you up shortly. You only need to wait for half an hour, and you will know the truth. If this turns out to be a misunderstanding, I will compensate you accordingly. Zhang Qi gripped his phone, the weight of their words finally sinking in. All right, he whispered, his face pale with shock and betrayal. Half an hour later, a soft beep echoed through the silent room as a keycard was swiped through the electronic lock. Xiaoxiu slipped inside, her movements fluid and quiet. She glanced at the bed, where a figure lay motionless under the covers. Brother-in-law, you can't blame me for this, she whispered, her voice devoid of its earlier sweetness. She reached for the strap of her dress, letting it slip down her shoulder. You have to blame someone, blame yourself for being rich but stupid. A fool like you doesn't deserve to enjoy all that money. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a thunderous pounding on the door. Zhang Qi, you bastard, get out here. A woman's voice screamed from the hallway. I slave away at home raising our child while you are out gallivanting with other women. The door was kicked open, and a swarm of people flooded into the room. Cameras flashed as paparazzi captured every second. Open the door, Zhang Qi, you asshole. Open this door. Leading the charge was Xiaonan, Zhang Qi's wife, her face contorted with a performative rage. Open up. If you don't open this door, I am going to break it down, she shrieked. She froze when she saw her own sister standing there, wrapped in nothing but a white towel. Sister? Cousin? What are you guys doing here? Xiaoxiu stammered, feigning shock. Xiaonan pointed a trembling finger at her. It really is you, she cried, her eyes filling with crocodile tears. You are my own sister. How could you do this to me? It was a ridiculously exaggerated performance. Sister, you have to listen to me. Xiaoji wailed, grabbing her sister's arms. It was brother-in-law. He forced me. If I didn't agree, he said he wouldn't let me survive in the entertainment industry. Sob, sob, sobster, I know I was wrong. The male relatives behind them joined in, their voices booming with rehearsed indignation. Zhang Qi, you have gone too far, one shouted, holding up his phone to record. You married one of my cousins, and now you are trying to ruin another one. We have to expose his evil deeds. They rushed toward the bed, grabbing the covers. Stop playing dead. Get up, they yelled, flipping the blanket back. But the man who sat up wasn't Zhang Qi. He was a complete stranger with messy hair and a confused expression. What do you want? The men asked, blinking at the crowd. Xiaonan and Xiaoxiu froze, their mouths hanging open in genuine shock. Who are you? They gasped in unison. Holy shit, who the fuck are you? The relatives shouted, their cameras capturing their own confusion. Where is Zhang Qi? Xiaonan demanded, turning on her sister. He was definitely here, Xiaoxiu stammered, her face turning ashen. I slept with him tonight. Suddenly, a cold voice spoke from the doorway. Dad, Zhang Qi walked into the room, holding his young son's hand. He looked at the chaos with a look of profound disgust. Sorry to trouble you, please take my kid to President Song, he said to a man in a suit standing beside him. The assistant nodded and led the confused boy away. Brother-in-law, Xiaoxiu whispered, her voice trembling. Honey, why are you here? Xiaonan asked, trying to salvage the situation. Zhang Qi stepped closer, his eyes burning with a cold fire. Where exactly should I be if not here? He asked. Xiaonan reached out, her hand shaking as she tried to touch his arm. You naughty boy, I couldn't find you. Honey, it is all my fault for being too anxious. I almost caused a misunderstanding. She forced a laugh, her mind racing. Zhang Qi didn't notice anything, did he? He is usually so easy to fool. This time should be no different. Don't call me honey again, Zhang Qi snapped, pushing her hand away with a violent shove. It is sickening. He turned his gaze to Xiaoxui, who was still shivering in her towel. Xiaoxui, I have always cherished you like a little sister. I gave you money and introduced you to resources. And this is how you treat me? A honey trap. Xiaoxiu's eyes welled with tears, this time real ones. Well, brother-in-law, it is all a misunderstanding, she lied, her voice cracking. What do I do? What do I do? She panicked internally. It was all my fault. It was my jealousy. She suddenly screamed. It was my jealousy. I saw how loving you and my sister were, and I got jealous, so I wanted to ruin your relationship. Brother-in-law, I just think you are too wonderful. I wanted you to be as good to me as you are to my sister. Xiaonan jumped in, nodding vigorously. I am sorry, honey. I just love you too much. I acted on impulse without thinking. Please don't be angry. She signaled to the relatives with her eyes. Brother-in-law, it is all my fault, Xiaoxiu added. It has nothing to do with my sister. The male cousins stepped forward, trying to pat Zhang Qi on the shoulder. Zhang Xiaonan is just tired from taking care of the kid all day. That is why her imagination is running wild. You are usually so good-tempered. Just let this go. Right. For the child's sake, please don't make a scene. Besides, if this blows up, it will be bad for your career. Good-tempered. Zhang Ke repeated, his voice dangerously low. He looked at them, his face twisting with a rage that had been building for years. So a good person deserves to be schemed against by you all? He roared. He pointed a finger at the first cousin. Eldest cousin-in-law, you took hundreds of thousands from me to get married, didn't you? He turned to the second. Second cousin-in-law, you took my cars, one after another, and drove them to your own home. They are yours now. Is that it? He looked down at Xiaoxiu. Xiaoxiu, should I pull out the receipts for all the shopping sprees I paid for, and we can tally them up? And these are just the minor things. Xiaonan tried to interrupt, her face red with anger. You, she screamed. Zhang Qi grabbed her by the shoulders, his face inches from hers. Your son with another man. I raised him for 5 years, and you people don't even say thank you. He screamed, his voice raw with pain. The room went silent. How did Zhang Qi find out? We're screwed, Xiaoxiu thought, her heart sinking. Zhang Qi, you're talking nonsense. Xiaonan shrieked, her voice reaching a glass-shattering pitch. I went through so much to give you a child. What right do you have to suspect he is not yours? Then have a listen to this, Zhang Qi said, pulling out his phone. He pressed play and Xiaonan's own voice filled the room. Sis Gigi is already 6. As he gets older, outsiders will soon be able to tell he doesn't look like Zhang Qi. This is for our own good. After it's done, remember to give me half of the assets. The recording continued, capturing a conversation with another man. Mr. Wang, once I get a divorce, I'll marry you. That idiot Zhang Qi is as dumb as a dog. He's been raising a son for 5 or 6 years for free. Xiaonan collapsed to the floor, her face pale as a sheet. Xiaonan, I want a divorce, Zhang Qi said, his voice cold and final. I will have my lawyer settle the accounts for your whole family down to the last cent. You won't get a single penny. Xiaonan's shock turned into a feral rage. A divorce? In your dreams? She screamed, her eyes bulging. Back then, I humbled myself to marry a dirt-poor nobody actor like you. And now you want to just toss me aside? No way. Come back. Don't go. Make yourself clear. She yelled as Zhang Qi turned his back on her. You bastard. You deserve to be cuckolded. The relatives tried to grab him, but Song Chen's manager stepped in. Manager, please escort them out, the man commanded. Right away. Zhang Qi walked down the hall, his head bowed. How can people be so disgusting? He whispered to himself. If it weren't for Gu Mangxi's repeated warnings tonight and President Song's thorough arrangements, I really would have fallen into their trap. The consequences would have been unimaginable. Back in her room, Gu Chu sat on her bed, her laptop open in front of her. A message popped up on the screen, boss. I handled this pretty well, didn't I? She typed back quickly. Not bad. Thanks for your hard work. Keep an eye on Xiaonan and Xiaoxiu. Stop them from doing anything desperate and trying to control the narrative. The response came instantly. Don't worry, they're finished. Gu Chu leaned back, popping a lollipop into her mouth as she scanned the news headlines. Shocking. Meet the modern-day femme fatale and her sneaky schemes. The comments were brutal. Damn, that woman Xiao is such a player. I heard her lover ran off too. That Xiaoxiu was already a nobody. Now no one will dare to hire her. Good, they won't be able to stir up any more trouble, Gu Chu thought. I backed everything up. Bobo leaked it to the press, then leaked it to my dumbass daddy. Only rock-solid proof will ensure their downfall. Without it, Zhang Qi would have struggled to escape this mess. She closed her eyes, remembering the original plot. In the novel, they caused Zhang Qi to lose both his reputation and his fortune. Not only was he saddled with tens of millions in breach of contract fees, but his career also plummeted. In the end, he went back to Hengdian World Studio to be a stunt double and died from overwork. Thank goodness none of that happened. She sighed, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. I may not have been a good person before, but I will never stand by and watch a good person be bullied to death. Meanwhile, on a movie set, the artificial rain poured down as a director's voice boomed through a megaphone. Cut, Cao Yuezhi. Do you even know how to act? He screamed. You are playing a high and mighty young lady, not a shrew. A whole crew has been standing in the rain with you all afternoon. Can you do it or not? If not, then find a new career. Cao Yuezhi stood there, her elaborate period dress soaked through. Sorry, she stammered, her voice small. This is so annoying. That's a wrap, the director yelled, throwing his script down. Let the best actress Cao rest until she can actually act. He stormed off, leaving her standing in the downpour. Gu Mangxi walked over, draped in a warm blue raincoat. Hurry and dry off, you don't want to catch a cold, she said, kindly offering a towel. Director Liu says harsh things when he gets angry. Don't take it to heart. Cao Yuezhi took the towel, her eyes downcast. Thank you. You're probably just too tired. Get a good rest tonight, Gu Manxi continued. We'll continue shooting tomorrow. Thank you, Manxi. I'll do my best, Cao Yueji replied. But as Gu Manxi walked away, the crew's whispers reached Cao Yueji's ears. This best actress Cao couldn't even finish one scene in 5 hours. It's tough on us gophers. Miss Manxi has such a good temper. She's not even mad about being dragged down by a burden like that. And I'm telling you, when Miss Manxi and best actress Cao stand together, her figure and looks are miles ahead of the other one. Cao Yueji's face twisted with a silent, burning fury. That bitch Gu Manxi, she thought, her nails digging into her palms. She's deliberately crushing me with her acting skills to humiliate me. I won't let you get away with this. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Beep, beep, the screen lit up as she opened a messaging app. She pulled up a contact from Mr. Wang, the president of Wang Entertainment. About the matter we discussed last time, have you made up your mind yet? She typed, her thumb hovering over the send button. Cao Yueji stared at her phone, her brow furrowed in deep irritation. It was that Mr. Wang again, persistently inviting her to switch companies despite her clear lack of interest. She found him greasy and disgusting, and besides, she had worked too hard to secure her connection with director Lu Shane to simply throw it away for a man like him. In the offices of Wang Entertainment, a man puffed on a cigar, listening as an assistant asked what to do about the actress's refusal to sign with them. Wang Tianqing, the president, narrowed his eyes with a cold smirk, plotting to plant saboteurs in Lu Shane's film crew to drag the great actress into the mud until she had no choice but to crawl back to him. The scene shifted to the warmth of the Gu household later that evening. Gu Manxi called out to her daughter, telling her to put down the phone and focus on her meal. Gu Chu looked up with a bright, innocent smile, admitting she was chatting with Chen Qi, which immediately caused Song Chen to tense up with fatherly suspicion and protective jealousy. Suddenly, Gu Manxi broke into a fit of coughing, her face turning pale from a cold she had caught while working in the rain. Song Chen was immediately at her side, his voice full of concern as he ushered her to bed, and promised to look after Gu Chu while she rested. Tucked into the soft sheets, Gu Manxi felt a wave of profound gratitude, marveling at how much her life had improved in just 6 months now that Song Chen was back. The next day at the studio, Gu Manxi arrived ready to work, looking fully recovered and professional. Lu Shani praised her natural acting, even suggesting that Cao Yueji should take notes and learn from her, which left the other actress seething with silent, bitter rage. As the director called a wrap on a successful day of shooting, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Behind the closed doors of her dressing room, Cao Yueji finally snapped, shattering a bottle against the floor in a violent fit of pique. Outside, the staff whispered among themselves, noting that her acting was miles behind Gu Manxi's, and that she was only being carried by the talent of her co-stars. Later, Cao Yueji watched from the shadows as Song Chen tenderly fed porridge to Gu Manxi. She overheard a snippet of conversation about taking care of a daughter and jumped to a malicious, mistaken conclusion. Gu Manxi must be lying to Song Chen, claiming the child belonged to the nanny. Cao's mind raced with the possibility that Song Chen had no idea he was being deceived about the child's true parentage. She decided then and there that she would use this secret to ensure Gu Manxi had no place left in the industry. With a dark, predatory smile, she whispered to herself that she was going to give her rival a very big gift. She reached out to Wang Tianqing, who was delighted to hear from her and immediately asked when they could discuss a contract. He pressured her to steal Lu Shani's script, a move that would destroy the movie before it even premiered. Cao Yueji hesitated, knowing the gravity of such a betrayal against a director she liked, but her desire to destroy Gu Manxi won out. She told him she would think about it, her heart pounding with the weight of her decision. Back at her computer, Gu Chu's eyes narrowed as an alert flashed across her screen indicating that Cao Yueji's location had changed. She found it suspicious that the woman would return to the studio so late at night. Guessing that the villainous was up to no good, Gu Chu decided she had to see for herself what was happening. Inside the darkened office, Cao Yueji rifled through piles of manuscripts until she finally found the script for the new movie. Her victory was short-lived, however, as a small, innocent voice asked what she was doing there. Gu Chu stood in the doorway, a bare headband in her hair, calmly pointing out that stealing was wrong. Cao Yueji nearly jumped out of her skin, quickly hiding her guilt behind a strained, fake smile. She realized this was a perfect opportunity to grab a strand of the girl's hair for a DNA test to prove the child's identity to Song Chen later. She reached out toward the child, her fingers clawing at the air, but Gu Chu was far too quick for her. Frustrated by the girl's agility, Cao Yueji decided to focus on the script first, snapping photos of the pages with her phone. The camera clicked repeatedly in the silence of the room. Gu Chu watched from a distance, munching on an ice cream cone as she deduced that Cao planned to sabotage the entire production. Gu Chu didn't just stand by, she quietly activated her phone to call Song Chen, letting him listen in on the scene. She smiled inwardly, ready to play along with whatever the actress had planned. Once Cao Yueji finished her task and returned the folder to its place, she turned her predatory gaze back toward the child's hair. She tried to lure the girl closer, claiming there was something something dirty in her hair that she needed to remove. Gu Chu dodged her again, jiggling that she would just wash it when she got home. Cao Yueji's patience evaporated, and she began to chase the child around the office, her face contorted with anger. Gu Chu led her on a merry chase, shouting that she would tell Director Liu about the theft. As she ran, she began rattling off Cao's darkest secrets, from drugging rivals to her history of secret plastic surgeries. Cao Yueji froze in horror, wondering how a 5-year-old could possibly know things she had spent years scrubbing from the internet. Gu Chu pointed a finger at her, declaring that a bad woman like her would never be liked by Director Liu. Shaking with rage and humiliation, Cao Yueji's face went pale under the brim of her hat. She screamed for the brat to shut up and lunged forward, papers flying everywhere in the chaos. At that exact moment, the door creaked open and slammed against the wall. Song Chen stood in the doorway, his silhouette imposing as papers drifted to the floor around him and the child. His eyes were cold and filled with a terrifying, quiet fury as he looked at the scene. Seeing her opening, Gu Chu collapsed to the floor and began to wail, crying out that the bad woman had tried to twist her head off and hit her. Cao Yueji, you had better give me a reasonable explanation, Song Chen said, his voice cold as he clutched the trembling Gu Chu against his chest. Cao Yueji did not back down, claiming the child was disobedient and needed a lesson. But Song Chen was having none of it, reminding her that Chu Chu was just a child. The actress scoffed, insisting the little girl had been cursing at her just moments ago. She tried to convince him that the child was just playing dumb, but Gu Chu buried her face into Song's shoulder and wailed that Miss Cao was being mean. With big, tearful eyes, Gu Chu looked up and pointed a small finger, accusing Miss Cao of trying to steal her hair for a DNA test and taking secret photos of Mr. Liu draft papers. You little brat, you are talking nonsense, Cao Yueji screamed, her face contorting with rage as she lunged forward with her hand raised. A sharp snap echoed through the room as Song Chen caught her wrist midair, his eyes flashing with a dangerous intensity. You are trying to hit her right in front of me, he growled, his grip tightening until she gasped. No, she stammered, her confidence crumbling instantly. Song Chen did not wait for her excuses, declaring that she was committing violence in the open and pulling tricks behind the scenes before telling her she never needed to come back to this crew. He threw her hand back with such force that she went sprawling onto the floor with a heavy thud. Cao Yueji glared up at him from the ground, her voice trembling with venom as she asked if he thought he was so clever. She shouted that Gu Mangxi had been lying to everyone, and that he was protecting a fatherless bastard like she was a treasure. I know Chu Chu is Mangxi's daughter, Song Chen replied calmly, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register, and I know it better than anyone. What? Cao Yueji gasped, her eyes widening in sheer disbelief. Song Chen stepped closer, his shadow looming over her as he promised that she would pay the price for every word she had said that day. Price? She laughed hysterically, clutching her chest as she reminded him she had been an artist at his company for 6 years. She wept, complaining that for the sake of Gu Mangxi and a child, she was being forced out despite the profits she had made. She spat that she envied how easily Mangxi succeeded by relying on her face and playing the victim. My mommy does not rely on her face, Gu Chu interrupted, her small voice firm and filled with conviction. The little girl explained that before they came here, her mother spent every day reading scripts until the room was filled with draft papers, often staying up late and missing out on playtime just to work. You are just unwilling to see other people's good qualities, Gu Chu added, leaving Cao Yueji stunned and speechless. The actress could only stare at the child, her mouth hanging open in shock. Since it has come to this, Mr. Song, you do not have to kick me out, Cao Yueji said as she stood up and straightened her coat. She claimed she would send her contract termination papers in a few days and boasted that she would still be a top actress without him. She tossed a final barb over her shoulder, stating she would be a top actress belonging to Wang Entertainment instead. Gu Chu watched her leave, thinking to herself how pitiful and pathetic it was for someone to see the world only as a dog-eat-dog place. Half an hour later, Lu Sheng looked through the files and asked Song Chen if the leak was serious. He flipped through the pages with a frown, his expression unreadable. That idiot, she cannot even steal properly, Lu Sheng remarked, tossing the papers aside as Gu Mangxi sat nearby, comfortingly stroking Gu Chu's hair. He revealed with a smug look that he had revised the script hundreds of times and the one she stole was merely an early rejected draft. However, his smile faded as he realized they would have to suspend shooting for a few days to find a replacement for the second female lead. Gu Mangxi sat quietly, her mind drifting back 6 years to when she and Cao Yueji were both newcomers. She remembered a specific reception where Cao Yueji had brought her a glass of water that made her head feel suddenly groggy. In a daze, she had been taken to a hotel room where a strange twist of fate led her to end up in bed with Song Chen. Her eyes narrowed as the pieces fell into place, realizing it had been a scheme from the very beginning. Song Chen noticed her staring and felt a cold sweat break out, wondering why she was looking at him with such intensity. Desperate to break the tension, Song Chen suddenly gasped and leaned against the wall, claiming he felt dizzy. What is wrong? Mangxi asked, her suspicion momentarily replaced by concern as she rushed to his side. He held his head, suggesting he might have a concussion from the papers Cao Yueji threw. Mangxi gently touched his face, noting a small cut on his brow bone and offering to call the crew doctor. Lu Shanhe watched the display with a look of pure disgust, while Gu Chu thought her dumbass daddy was a total phony whose scratch would heal before the doctor even arrived. Back at the office, an assistant informed Song Chen that Cao Yuezhi fans were bombarding the company's social media with abusive comments and had even created fake accounts to attack Gu Mangxi. Song Chen scrolled through the hateful posts, his eyes darkening as he saw the coordinated mob attack. Issue a blacklisting order on Cao Yuezhi immediately, he commanded his assistant. He added that it was also time for the Wang group to face the consequences of their actions. Later, his phone rang with a call from Gu Mangxi. He answered quickly, but she told him not to get involved in the online drama yet. She was worried that since Cao Yuezhi had Chu hair, a blacklist might provoke her into exposing the truth before things were under control. Song Chen smiled at his phone, thinking his decisive wife was so cool, but he insisted it was not appropriate for Chu to find out about his identity this way. "I will wait for you to say yes to marrying me," he said softly into the receiver. "I will announce your existence to the world openly and honorably," he promised, his voice full of warmth. "Marry," Gu Mangxi exclaimed on the other end, her face flushing a deep red. She stammered that she did not want to get married yet, which prompted Song Chen to desperately suggest getting engaged first. After she hung up on him, Song Chen sighed, realizing he could not rush things while she still held a grudge. He knew he needed to break off his engagement with Cheng Qingyan as soon as possible to show his sincerity. Standing by the window, he looked out at the city, knowing the online mob was backed by the Wang group. He had given them room to breathe out of respect for their elders, but they had mistaken his kindness for weakness. "Since I cannot blacklist her now, I will slowly take away everything she is after and make her wish she were dead," he thought coldly. A few days later, Gu Chu lounged on the sofa reading about the ongoing drama. Noting that Jiang Cheng had also left Wang Entertainment to join Song Entertainment, Lu Shanhe stumbled into the room, clearly drunk and complaining about the lack of talent among the actresses auditioning for the second female lead. He pinched Gu Chu's cheeks, lamenting that she was not 20 years old so she could play the part. To quiet him down, Gu Chu shoved a strawberry into his mouth, telling him to sober up. Down at the audition hall, the staff called out for the next group of 10 participants. Zhao Manshi received her number tag, looking confident as she prepared for her turn. Nearby, two men were gossiping, blaming Gu Mangxi for the production delay and spreading rumors about her visiting the director room at night. Zhao Manshi overheard them and turned around, asking why she could hear a dog barking when there were no dogs in sight. She confronted the men, telling them they should be earning a living instead of wasting time gossiping. When they tried to act tough, she shut them down, calling them trash and accusing them of spreading baseless rumors against women. Gu Chu and Lu Shanhe watched from a distance, with Gu Chu feeling confused that Zhao Manshi would actually defend her mother. Lu Shanhe, however, was captivated by the scene. He watched Zhao Manshi, noting that she was willful, headstrong, and possessed a noble air. A wide grin spread across his face as he watched her walk away. "This is the perfect candidate for the second female lead I have been dreaming of," he declared. Zhao Manshi stepped forward with an air of practiced elegance, introducing herself to director Lu as Gu Mangxi's sister and a candidate for the second female lead role. Gu Chu watched the scene unfold with a mixture of suspicion and disbelief, wondering if the woman had been possessed or if she was simply trapped in a very strange dream. Manshi did not stop at introductions. She immediately voiced her concerns about the potential danger from Cao Yuezhi's obsessive fans, urging the director to increase security on the set for her sister's sake. The sudden shift in the narrative left Gu Chu reeling as she questioned whether her own interference in the plot had caused the characters to go completely off script. Manshi humbly admitted to director Lu that she had only ever played minor roles with limited screen time, but her eyes sparkled with a desperate kind of hope. When the director handed her a script and told her she could have the part, Gu Chu could only blink in bewilderment at how rapidly the original story was being rewritten. Later, within the oppressive luxury of the Zhao estate, Manshi's mother paced the room, calling Gu Mangxi a little bitch and vowing to help her daughter crush her. To her mother's shock, Manshi actually defended her sister, pointing out that Mangxi had never caused their family any trouble. The elder woman exploded in rage, ordering Manshi to stop thinking about useless things and focus on seducing Song Chen to keep him away from that filthy woman. Manshi stared at her mother, a sense of deep unease settling in her chest as she wondered what dark secrets the woman was truly hiding. She looked around the cold, cavernous mansion, feeling the weight of her family's collapse and the frightening silence of being left all alone. Meanwhile, her mother brooded over her husband's long history of infidelity, mentally recording every debt she intended to settle with him. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice as she swore to make her enemies wish they were dead. Back on the film set, the atmosphere was charged with professional energy as director Lu finaled for a cut, his voice booming with genuine praise for the performance. Manhwa, dressed in an ornate white gown, beamed at the director and promised to keep working hard while Gu Chu watched her with a soft, supportive smile. Gu Chu let out a small sigh, watching Manhwa celebrate her success like a happy child and realizing that despite her complex situation, the woman was still remarkably immature. The cameras rolled again for a high-stakes dramatic sequence where the two sisters faced off over a shocking betrayal. Gu Chu delivered her lines with a chilling, raw intensity, her character declaring that a traitor deserved nothing but death. When the take finally wrapped, the crew members whispered among themselves, impressed by how much more smoothly the production was moving now that Manhwa had replaced the difficult Cao Yueji. Manhwa immediately began clinging to Manhwa, suggesting they change their clothes together and go shopping, which only served to increase Gu Chu's mounting annoyance. The little girl's irritation was cut short when a large, ripe peach was suddenly thrust toward her face. Song Chen stood there, looking every bit the powerful and handsome CEO, asking his little daughter if she had missed him during his brief absence. Gu Chu greeted him with a bright smile, though she secretly suspected that her dumbass daddy was the one responsible for cleaning up the recent public relations mess behind the scenes. The peaceful moment was interrupted when Song Chen asked about her homework and discovered she was busy chatting with Chen Qi. His expression shifted to one of immediate, protective jealousy, a mood that only softened slightly when Manhwa arrived with warm ginger tea for everyone. Manhwa watched the interaction from the side, struck by just how handsome and commanding Song Chen appeared when he wasn't in a boardroom. Gu Chu caught the look in Manhwa's eyes and went on high alert, suspecting that the woman might be trying to ruin her parents' relationship right under her nose. Song Chen, clearly looking for any excuse to stay longer, claimed his car was out of gas and suggested he should just sleep on the sofa for the night. Gu Chu was completely unmoved by his act, flatly telling him to take a taxi home, but the sight of the ruthless president pleading for a spot on the couch left Zhao Manhwa absolutely stunned. The room felt small as Song Chen sat on the sofa, a box of peaches resting on the low table before him, while Gu Chu and her sister stood nearby. Without a word of warning, he reached out and firmly grabbed a large, ripe peach from the box. He shoved the fruit directly into the mouth of the babbling, red-haired woman, silencing her instantly as he thought to himself that she was nothing more than a total airhead. "I have something to tell you," Song Chen said, turning his gaze toward Manhwa as he stood up to leave, prompting her to agree to see him out. "Wait for me," the sister tried to call out through her mouthful of fruit, but Gu Chu quickly grabbed her hand and told her it was perfectly fine to stay behind. The woman was immediately distracted, her face flushing with a manic sort of joy as she demanded that the little girl call her auntie over and over again. Gu Chu could only manage a strained, polite smile, thinking that her newfound relative was certainly energetic to a fault. Outside, the moonlight bathed the garden in a soft glow as Manhwa explained that her sister was only trying to protect her and asked Song Chen not to take her bluntness to heart. Song Chen stopped walking, looking down at her with a trace of hesitation before finally speaking about the following Saturday. He explained that it was his grandfather's 80th birthday and that he wanted to bring Gu Chu to attend the celebration. Manhwa immediately grew defensive, accusing him of trying to take the child away, but he stepped closer, taking her hands in his to promise that he only wanted them all to be together. His intense gaze made her heart flutter, and for a moment, the words of a confession seemed to hang in the air between them as she stared into his eyes. "Don't be ridiculous," she finally sputtered, pulling her hands away to hide her deep blush. After a moment of silence, she sighed and agreed to let him take the child to the meeting, though she insisted that he must guarantee the girl's absolute safety. Song Chen's face lit up with a brilliant smile as he bid her goodnight, waving enthusiastically as she walked back toward the house. Manhwa looked back at him with a mix of annoyance and lingering affection, reminding herself that she had already paid a heavy price for recklessness 6 years ago. Back inside, her sister warned her to stay away from Song Chen, calling him a scumbag for pestering her while he supposedly had a fiancé named Chen Qingyan. Gu Chu listened from her bed, her eyes narrowing as she realized the plot was moving toward the old master's birthday banquet and her chance to deal with the villainous. The Song estate was grand and bustling with guests, but the birthday boy himself, Old Master Song, was quickly growing tired of the empty pleasantries. He slipped away to the garden for a moment of peace, spotting a small child with pink hair trying to reach for a cluster of grapes. He watched her with a faint smile, amused by how her short arms couldn't quite reach the fruit. "Hey there, you kid. You can't eat those grapes," he called out, leaning on his cane as his attendant watched from behind. Gu Chu turned around with a look of feigned surprise, apologizing in a small, sweet voice that immediately melted the old man's heart. He looked at her chubby cheeks and well-behaved demeanor, tears of joy prickling his eyes as he wondered if this was what having a great-granddaughter felt like. He immediately ordered a child's meal to be brought to the garden, while Gu Chu secretly plotted to stay by his side to prevent the assassination attempt she knew was coming in the original story. When he asked about her father, she lowered her head and sadly explained that she didn't have one, making the old man sigh in pity. He complained about his own grandson being nearly 30 and still unmarried, leading Gu Chu to laugh internally at the idea that the old master doubted Song Chen's orientation. Somewhere else in the venue, Song Chen let out a sudden sneeze, rubbing his nose and wondering if someone was talking behind his back. He straightened his tie as he prepared for the formal proceedings. He was approached by a man with flamboyant blue hair and a fur collar, who greeted him with a fake smile. Song Chen kept his expression cold, wondering why Cheng Kaiyong was here instead of looking for his missing wife. The blonde youth at the man's side, Cheng Qi, didn't waste time with pleasantries and immediately asked where Gu Chu was hiding. Song Chen's eyes narrowed with protective rage, viewing the boy as a wolf in sheep's clothing, just like his father. He dismissed them curtly, leaving the two Chengs behind as Cheng Qi watched him with a terrifyingly sharp glare. Back in the garden, Gu Chu was happily devouring a sundae and pastries when a servant announced that Cheng Qingyan had arrived to offer her birthday wishes. Gu Chu's expression shifted to one of mock panic as she told the old man she had to hide so her mother wouldn't catch her eating snacks. Moments later, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat and a sophisticated white outfit entered the garden, greeting the old master with practiced grace. Behind her polite smile, Cheng Qingyan was seething with frustration at the old man's eccentric and distant behavior. She began to weep, claiming she was terminally ill and only wanted to leave a bloodline for Song Chen before she passed away. From her hiding spot, Gu Chu watched the performance with a cold gaze, knowing exactly how the woman was using the sympathy card to secure her place as the only acknowledged heir to the Song family fortune. Elder Song looked down at the woman before him with a piercing, analytical gaze, his voice heavy with skepticism as he asked if she truly intended to marry his grandson. Cheng Qingyan maintained a facade of desperate devotion, thinking to herself that a legal marriage was secondary to securing the family bloodline through a child. She began to weep softly, weaving a tragic tale of a congenital heart defect that had worsened over the last 2 years, claiming that modern medicine offered her almost no hope for a cure. The old man sighed, his expression softening as he remarked on what a pitiful child she seemed to be, while Cheng Qingyan secretly gloated, believing she had successfully manipulated him into letting her stay. However, the atmosphere shifted instantly when Elder Song told her she should leave, stating firmly that the Song family had no need for her. Cheng Qingyan gasped in genuine shock, her eyes widening as the rejection hit her like a physical blow. She desperately tried to pivot, asking if he could really refuse his own great-grandchild, but the patriarch remained unmoved. He countered that if she were truly as ill as she claimed, the sickness might be passed to the child, and he would not risk harming an innocent life. Besides, he scoffed at the idea that Song Chen would never have children without her. He informed her that he would discuss the matter with Song Chen to officially cancel the engagement, offering to cover all her medical expenses as a final form of compensation. Cheng Qingyan stood frozen, the shadows of the garden falling across her face as her jaw tightened in silent, boiling rage. Hidden behind a nearby stone structure, Gu Chu watched the scene with a devious smirk, impressed by her great-grandfather's sharp perspective, and noting that Cheng Qingyan had just burned every bridge she had left. Elder Song, unaware of the child's presence, offered the weeping woman one last piece of advice, telling her that she should always be sincere because wearing a mask for too long makes it impossible to take off. As he began to rise from his seat, Cheng Qingyan bowed her head in a show of false humility, claiming she had learned her lesson. She stepped behind his wheelchair, offering to push him back since it was getting windy, but her eyes were filled with a dark, murderous intent. She reached into her clothing, her fingers brushing against a sharp object as she prepared to strike while his back was turned. Gu Chu, seeing the glint of metal, realized the woman was actually going to make a move right then and there. As Cheng Qingyan's hand moved toward the wheelchair with a small blade, Gu Chu knew she had to intervene immediately. The young girl intentionally stumbled out from her hiding spot, letting out a loud cry of pain as she bumped into the table to draw their attention. She clutched her head and looked up with a wide, innocent grin, apologizing to Elder Song for the noise and claiming she had just been watching an ant try to eat a butterfly. Cheng Qingyan glared at the interloper, her heart racing as Gu Chu hopped up and offered to give her a cup of fruit tea to help her feel better. Elder Song chuckled at the girl's sweetness, telling her to be careful not to get burned. Cheng Qingyan sensed that the little brat was up to something, but she couldn't refuse the gesture in front of the old man. In a sudden, clumsy motion, Gu Chu tripped, splashing the scalding tea directly onto Cheng Qingyan's arm. In the chaos of the spill, a sharp blade clattered loudly onto the stone floor, sliding right into plain view. Elder Song's eyes narrowed dangerously as he looked at the weapon, realizing that the woman had been wandering around him with a blade the entire time. Cheng Qingyan stammered out a pathetic excuse, claiming it was just an eyebrow razor that had accidentally gotten stuck in her clothes, but the damage was done. Elder Song cut her off with a sharp command, telling her that he had seen enough, and that she should leave immediately without an escort. As she turned to go, her face contorted with a mixture of fear and hatred, she was suddenly stopped by the appearance of Cheng Qi. The sight of the blonde boy terrified her so much that she turned and bolted into the woods, desperate to escape. Gu Chu watched her run, wondering why the group of illegitimate children who used to bully Cheng Qi in the original story were now so afraid of him. Deep in the shadows of the garden, Cheng Qingyun gripped her arm, her face twisted in a mask of pure malice as she cursed the old man and the 5-year-old girl who had tricked her. She vowed that anyone who got in her way would have to die, her purple eyes glowing with a dark resolve. But her internal monologue was interrupted by Gu Chu, who had followed her and was now holding out the fallen blade with a cheerful, terrifyingly bright smile. She told the woman she had forgotten her eyebrow razor and offered it back. Cheng Qingyun's composure snapped, and she lunged forward, grabbing Gu Chu by the collar of her dress. She hissed that the little brat had done it on purpose, accusing her of hiding under the table and spilling the tea with malicious intent. She leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper, asking if Gu Mangxi had taught her to be so manipulative and calling both the child and her mother derogatory names. Suddenly, a sickening snap echoed through the air as Gu Chu grabbed the woman's hand and twisted it with professional precision. Cheng Qingyun let out a blood-curdling scream of agony as her fingers were forced into an unnatural angle. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her mangled hand and sobbing that it hurt too much to bear. Gu Chu stood over her, the innocent childlike light having vanished from her eyes, replaced by a cold, dark shadow. She asked in a flat, chilling tone who exactly the woman was calling names, daring her to say it one more time. Cheng Qingyun looked up, frozen by the sheer intensity of the gaze directed at her. It was an expression that didn't belong on a child. It was calm, bloodthirsty, and ready to kill in a single blow. In Cheng Qingyun's mind, she saw the glowing eye of a predatory beast lurking within the girl. She realized she had seen that exact look before, a ruthless aura of pure power. It was the same terrifying presence as Cheng Qi, but Gu Chu felt even more dangerous. The woman trembled, wondering how a 5-year-old could possibly possess such a soul. Gu Chu casually tossed the blade onto the ground near her. She leaned down and whispered that she hoped Cheng Qingyun would learn to be a good person and never use such dangerous things again. With a mocking, sidelong glance, she told the woman she had better watch herself from now on. Gu Chu walked away, leaving behind a final, chilling stare that served as a warning to never act rashly again. Cheng Qingyun stayed on the ground, sweat pouring down her face as she realized this child was far more difficult to deal with than she had ever imagined. A short while later, Gu Chu returned to the garden table where Elder Song and Cheng Qi were waiting. Her dress was noticeably torn, prompting Cheng Qi to ask what had happened and if a branch had snagged it. Elder Song watched the exchange closely, his suspicion rising as he wondered if Cheng Qingyun actually laid a hand on the girl, though Gu Chu's playful demeanor made it hard to tell. Cheng Qi stood up and told her to stop, looking her in the eye with a seriousness that caught her off guard. He told her that she didn't have to solve everything by herself, and that she could always come to him for help, showing a level of maturity that Chu didn't remember him having in the original novel. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Song Chen, who walked up behind Elder Song's wheelchair. The old man began to fume, complaining that his grandson was pushing him around like a lonely old man just to greet guests, while Song Chen told him to stop scolding since it was his birthday. The two men bickered with a familiar, sharp affection. Suddenly, Gu Chu appeared again, now wearing a beautiful new white and gold dress. She ran up to them, holding Cheng Qi's hand and excitedly showing off the outfit Elder Song had given her. Song Chen's face turned bright red as he let out a horrified scream, demanding to know why they were holding hands. He lunged forward and snatched Gu Chu away, cradling her protectively while glaring at Cheng Qi, asking if the boy was the one who had changed her clothes. Gu Chu giggled and explained that Cheng Qi had simply taken her to find a nanny to help her change. Song Chen huffed, telling her sternly that from now on, she wasn't allowed to let anyone other than her mother or himself help her with such things. Elder Song watched the scene unfold, seeing the way Song choted on the little girl with such fierce, paternal instinct. A look of profound realization washed over the old man's face as he put the pieces together. He realized that Chu Chu had to be Song Chen's biological child, and he began to cry tears of joy, overwhelmed by the fact that he finally had a great-granddaughter. Gu Chu looked back at him over her father's shoulder, smiling secretly as she realized the old master had finally figured out the truth about her and her father. The grand ballroom of the Song family estate was a sea of shimmering silk and sharp suits, but for Zhao Manshi, the atmosphere was far from celebratory. Her mother leaned in close, her voice a sharp whisper as she reminded her daughter that this birthday banquet was a rare opportunity to mingle with the city's elite. She insisted that Manshi needed to look beyond just Song Chen and take the initiative to toast powerful men like CEO Wang and CEO Cheng. Manshi tried to maintain her composure, her eyes darting toward the entrance where she finally spotted a familiar little figure. A smile broke across her face as she called out to Chu Chu, who was walking in with Cheng Qi. Manshi checked her phone as a notification chimed, seeing a message from her sister, Gu Mangxi. Her sister was stuck at a commercial shoot and mentioned she was nearly passing out from hunger. Manshi's expression softened instantly as she messaged back, promising to pack some delicious food from the banquet to bring home later. It was a small, heartwarming moment of sisterly care that made the stifling party feel a bit more bearable. She turned toward a passing waiter, holding out her hand to stop him. "Could you pack up some of these desserts for me?" Manshi asked politely. The waiter nodded, but the request didn't go unnoticed by a group of nearby socialites. They began to whisper loudly, their voices dripping with disdain as they recognized her. One woman sneered, identifying her as the girl who was obsessed with Song Chen, claiming her mother had pulled every string imaginable just to get her an invitation. They laughed amongst themselves, mocking her for trying to take food home and calling her desperate for trying to seduce a man who already had a fiancé. She felt the heat of their judgment, but she didn't shrink away. She took the bag of packed desserts from the waiter and turned to face her critics with a look of pure exasperation. "Waiter, why did you let 1,000 ducks into this room?" she asked loudly, her voice cutting through their laughter. "They are so noisy that my ears are actually starting to hurt." The women gasped, their faces contorting with rage as they realized they were being compared to squawking poultry. One of the women stepped forward, her face with fury, demanding to know if Manhwa was really calling them ducks. She lashed out, accusing Manhwa of being a shameless woman who threw herself at a man with a fiancé. Manhwa didn't flinch, her blue eyes flashing with defiance. "At least I dare to own up to my actions," she shouted back. She pointed a gloved finger at the trio, exposing their hypocrisy. She pointed out that while they judged her, they were the ones constantly gossiping and harboring secret crushes on Song Chen without the courage to ever act on them. She admitted she had been young and foolish once, but she had moved on. Unlike them, the socialites were left speechless, their mouths hanging open as Manhwa stood her ground. "Either you all shut up so we can have some peace, or I will start exposing every nasty thought on your minds," she threatened, her presence dominating the small corner of the hall. From a distance, a man in a red robe sat back, swirling a glass of wine as he watched the scene unfold. He found her personality fascinating, noting that she was the woman who had replaced the award-winning actress Cao Yueji. He smirked behind his cigar, intrigued by her fire. Nearby, Manhwa's mother watched with a cold, calculating smile, seemingly pleased that her daughter was making such a strong impression. As the night drew to a close, the group moved toward the driveway under the starlit sky. Chu waved a polite goodbye to Song Chen and Cheng Qi, announcing that she was heading home with her aunt. The little girl beamed at Cheng Qi, bidding him a sweet farewell as the luxury cars began to pull up for the guests. Nearby, a different kind of family drama was brewing. A middle-aged man in a fur-collared coat leaned against a car, smoking a cigarette while his son stood by. He wondered aloud if Song Chen disliked them because of Chu, but his son quickly shut down the conversation. A young woman in a wide-brimmed hat approached them, and the father struggled to even remember her name, eventually guessing Kingxian. The girl forced a smile, hiding the deep resentment she felt for a father who had only acknowledged her after her mother died. She vowed to herself that she would never return to the slums, even if it meant sucking up to a man she despised. The tension spiked when Cheng Qi suddenly ordered the car to stop before they could leave. He stepped out and called Cheng Qingyan over to him. His eyes were cold and piercing as he looked down at her. "I know what you are planning," he warned her, his voice low and dangerous. He told her he didn't care who else she went after, but if she dared to lay a single finger on Chu or her mother, he would make her regret ever being born. The sheer malice in his gaze left her paralyzed with fear. He climbed back into the car and ordered the driver to go, leaving her standing alone in the dark driveway, trembling. Meanwhile, inside the Song residence, the atmosphere was suffocating. Old Master Song sat in his wheelchair, his face a mask of disappointment as he looked at Song Chen, who was kneeling on the floor. "Useless brat," the old man barked, demanding to know who Chu's mother was. Song Chen lowered his head, admitting that he had only recently found her, and that she had been raising the child alone for the past 5 years. The news sent the old master into a fit of rage, and he began to swing his cane, striking Song Chen repeatedly for being an irresponsible scoundrel. Song Chen winced under the blows but tried to explain that he had proposed, yet Manhwa had refused him. The grandfather stopped his assault, his anger turning into frustration. He told Song Chen that he was muddled by matters of the heart and that he needed to cancel his engagement to Cheng Qingyan immediately, before he could ever hope to be accepted by the mother of his child. Song Chen looked away, his mind drifting back to a memory from his youth. He remembered falling into the water as a boy and being saved by a little girl. To show his gratitude, he had given her a ruby necklace. Years later, he had seen Cheng Qingyan wearing that very same necklace. Believing she was his savior, he had used the power of Song Entertainment to protect her from the internal strife of the Cheng family, ensuring no one dared to touch her. Old Master Song watched him, telling him that while gratitude was important, he had to distinguish it from moral duty. He reminded his grandson that while he could ensure Qingyan lived a peaceful life, he owed a much greater debt and duty to Chu and her mother. Song Chen looked up at his grandfather, his eyes clearing as the realization set in. He realized he had been foolish, and that for the woman he truly loved, he would have to be ruthless. Across the city, Chu was sitting in a living room, her attention captured by a news report on the television. A museum in Jing City had been robbed of 5 priceless antiques by a mysterious organization. Her eyes widened in shock as the screen displayed a photo of the most prominent stolen item, a Roman-era moonstone. Chu's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized that was the very stone that had caused her to transmigrate into this novel world. "Chu, what's wrong?" Xiao Tao asked, noticing her pale face. Chu didn't answer, her mind racing with the need to find out who had bought the stone. She wondered if she might even find the missing Mo from her previous life. A dark, Determined look crossed her young face as she imagined finding him and making him pay for everything he had done. Xiaozhou watched her, worried that the kid was going crazy from watching the news. Suddenly, Chuchu's high-tech watch began to ring with an unrecognized number. She quickly told Xiaozhou she was going to her room to take the call, ignoring his confused look. She hurried inside and slammed the door shut. When she answered, the sound of frantic sobbing filled her ear. It was Yi Sichin, her chubby little deskmate from her previous kindergarten. He wailed into the phone, crying that he was going to die and that he had wanted to grow up and marry her. Chuchu's expression turned serious as she asked him where he was. Sichin managed to choke out that he was at his new kindergarten. Suddenly, a harsh adult voice screamed in the background, calling him a fatty and accusing him of stealing a phone. Sichin screamed in terror, pleading for the man not to hit him. The line went dead with a series of sharp beeps. Chuchu stared at the watch, her blood running cold. Something had happened to the boy. She knew that ever since his family went bankrupt, he had been transferred to a different school. She immediately sat down at her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys as she began to trace the phone's owner. Within seconds, her hacking skills revealed a terrifying truth. The man who had been shouting was Yang Si, a former convict who had served time for theft. Chuchu's eyes filled with tears of anger as she discovered that this criminal had been released and was now employed as the principal of Royal Kindergarten. Gu Chu stared at the computer screen, her small brow furrowed in concentration as she bypassed security layer after security layer. She could not believe her eyes. Yi Sichin's parents had actually sent their own child to such a trashy kindergarten. What on earth were they thinking? She tapped away at the keys, determined to find out who the boss behind this facility was. Suddenly, a red X flashed on the screen with a warning that the information was not found. Gu Chu leaned back, stunned. She really could not find a single scrap of information about the ownership. A kindergarten like this should have been shut down years ago, yet it had been running for 5 years without a single scratch on its record. Even when children died in accidents there, the news never got out. This meant the kindergarten had to have a powerful backer. Maybe running a school was just a cover for some earth-shattering secret dealings. No matter what, she had to find a way to save Yi Sichin. The original Gu Chu in the novel had also died in this kindergarten, which had claimed who knows how many lives. If she did not expose the final boss, things would just keep happening. She grabbed her head in frustration, her pink pigtails shaking as she let out a scream of internal agony. What could she possibly do? She was just a 5.5-year-old kid. A soft knock sounded at the door. Her uncle called out from the hallway, telling her that Cheng Qi was there to see her. Gu Chu quickly wiped the frustration from her face, forcing a sweet smile as she told him she would be right there. She sighed to herself, realizing how much trouble it was for a grown adult mind to get things done in the body of a child. Cheng Qi walked in, looking as elegant as ever in his blue and white vest, carrying a small white box. He told her he had bought some new pastries from Furong Garden especially for her. Gu Chu looked at the treats with wide eyes, exclaiming that they looked delicious. She took a bite, making sure to look like a happy, innocent child. Cheng Qi watched her closely, his purple eyes unreadable. After a moment, he asked if something was troubling her. Gu Chu froze, a bead of sweat rolling down her temple. How did he figure it out? She tried to play it off, saying not really, but Cheng Qi told her not to lie. He said he could tell she was just putting on a brave face and reminded her that she could always come to him if something was wrong. Gu Chu panicked internally, wondering if he was some kind of ghost or if her acting was really that easy to see through. Cheng Qi leaned in, his gaze intense and focused as he asked her to tell him what happened. Gu Chu slowly put down her fork, the half-eaten pastry forgotten on the plate. She looked up at him with big, watery blue eyes. She asked him if he was free tomorrow, explaining that her friend had transferred schools and she wanted to go to his new kindergarten to see him. Cheng Qi seemed surprised, asking if that was all she was worried about. Gu Chu nodded innocently. She knew she could not tell him everything, like the fact that she was a transmigrator who had seen the script of this world, or that the kindergarten was a deadly trap. If she did, he would totally freak out. Cheng Kai agreed, telling her he would pick her up tomorrow afternoon. Gu Chu cheered, thanking him with a bright smile. As Cheng Qi left in his car, he immediately picked up his phone. He ordered his assistant to cancel his meeting for the next afternoon. In fact, he told them to cancel every single one of them. His assistant looked worried, thinking that ever since the young master met Gu Chu, he had not been career-minded at all. To Cheng Qi, nothing was more important than that little girl. He pulled up a file on his phone while riding in the back of the car. Yi Sichin was the only one who had transferred from Gu Chu's kindergarten this year. However, he could not find any information about the boy after the transfer. He realized this situation was not simple at all and decided he needed a helper who was good at gathering intelligence. A phone buzzed on a nightstand, the caller ID showing a call from Mr. Sharp-Tongued. A young man with messy blonde hair groaned from under the covers, asking what Cheng Qi wanted at this hour. Cheng Qi snapped at him to get up because he needed him for something. The young man, wearing a blue eye mask with a cat face and duck-pattern pajamas, looked utterly confused as he took the call, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The next day, the trio stood before a rusted, arched gate surrounded by overgrown weeds. The place looked like a derelict junkyard rather than a school. Gu Chu pointed it out, confirming this was the place. The blonde hacker with glasses looked skeptical, saying it did not look like it was open for business at all. Cheng Qi noted that he had looked it up all night and found nothing but the address. Suddenly, an old man in a flat cap appeared behind the chain-link fence. He glared at them, telling them outsiders were not allowed and ordered them to get out of there. Cheng Qi calmly explained they were there at the kindergarten to look for a child. The old man snapped that there were no children there and told them to go away. The blonde hacker yelled back at the old man, frustrated by the lack of cooperation. The guard's eyes turned cold and menacing. He told them they would not get in there alive, and if they did manage to get in, they would not get out alive. He warned them that once people went inside, they would not be able to leave even if they wanted to. Cheng Qi sensed the danger and told the others they should go. They did not actually leave, but circled around to the back of the facility. Gu Chu noted that the place was definitely suspicious. Despite the terrible environment, it was heavily guarded with high-voltage lines and security fences on the walls. The blonde hacker asked if she was sure her classmate had not been thrown into a mental hospital instead. Gu Chu explained that Yi Sichen's family had gone bankrupt, so he was studying here now. Suddenly, her eyes widened in shock. Through a gap in the fence, she saw several thin, haggard children working in a field. One of them was Yi Sichen. He looked like he had been tortured. Gu Chu called out his name, but Cheng Qi quickly told her to speak softly. Yi Sichen looked up, his eyes hollow and exhausted. He gasped her name as his eyes filled with recognition. Gu Chu reached toward the fence, telling him not to be scared and promising they would definitely get him out. Yi Sichen looked nervous. He put a finger to his lips, tears streaming down his face as he gestured for her to be quiet. His hands were covered in cuts and dirt. A cruel voice boomed as a guard approached, accusing Yi Sichen of slacking off during his punishment labor. He threatened to lock the boy in a doghouse. Yi Sichen cowered on the ground, begging the man not to hit him. From their hiding spot, Cheng Qi and the others watched in horror while the blonde hacker recorded everything on a tablet. The guard grabbed Yi Sichen, calling him a little brat who needed to be taught a lesson. The boy cried out in pain, apologizing over and over. Gu Chu's eyes burned with a cold, blue fire. She remembered that in the original storyline, the character Gu Chu was tortured to death just like this. She vowed that no matter what it took, she had to shut this place down. The guard yelled at the boy to get back to work, threatening to gouge his eyes out if he caught him looking around again. Yi Sichen sobbed quietly, clutching his face and whispering Gu Chu's name. The scene faded as the wind whistled through the barbed wire fences. Yi Sichen reached into the dirt and picked up a small, smooth white stone. He looked at it with tear-filled eyes, remembering a time back at their old school. He had offered the stone to Gu Chu, but she had been mean, calling it ugly and saying she did not want it. Despite her rejection, he still held onto it, whispering her name and thanking her in his heart for being his friend. Meanwhile, at the Song residence, a butler approached an elderly man. He informed the master that the DNA test report he requested was ready. The paper showed a clear result in red ink. No biological relationship confirmed between Song Cheng and Gu Chu. Master Song's face contorted with rage, his eyebrows twitching. He slammed the paper down and ordered his servants to bring that Miss Gu to him immediately. Back in the car, Gu Chu let out a sudden sneeze. Cheng Qi asked if she was feeling unwell, but she told him she was fine. Internally, she wondered why she suddenly had such a bad feeling. The blonde hacker suddenly cried out in disbelief. The expose he had just tried to post had been deleted, and he could not post any related content at all. Gu Chu realized that to deal with this organization, she could not do it alone. She had to mobilize the group of powerful big shots around her. She turned to Cheng Qi, asking if he had a way to rescue Yi Sichen since he was her good friend. Cheng Qi began to cough violently, his face flushing red as he assured her not to worry because he had a way. He looked at the little girl, thinking to himself that it was not easy for the legendary Ace of Hearts. A top-tier hacker had transmigrated into a 5-year-old kid who could not fight or really do anything. All she had left was her brain, and even then, she had to act cute just to get things done. The two men in dark suits stood before Gu Manxi, their presence a stark contrast to the set behind her as they informed her that old Master Song was requesting her presence. She hesitated for only a moment, realizing that since she had met Song Chen again, this day was destined to arrive sooner or later. She stood tall, her green eyes filled with a mother's fierce resolve, deciding that she would face whatever came head-on to ensure they could never take Chu Chu away from her. After a brief moment to change her attire, she was led through the grand hallways of the Song residence to the study where the elderly patriarch waited. Old Master Song looked up from his seat, his expression unreadable, but his voice heavy with authority as he told her they had a great deal to talk about today. Meanwhile, Song Chen hurried through the manor, his face set in a mask of worry as a maid struggled to keep pace with him, warning that the old master had forbidden anyone from approaching the study. He ignored the warning and pushed the heavy doors open, finding his grandfather sitting calmly behind his desk. The old man did not look up immediately, simply stating that Song Chen was to marry Cheng Qingyun, and that the date was already set for next month. Song Chen recoiled in shock, arguing that it was impossible because he was just about to call off the engagement to be with the only woman he truly loved. His grandfather narrowed his eyes, his gaze turning icy as he asked if he was referring to Gu Manxi. He looked at his grandson with a mixture of pity and disappointment, asking how he could be so blind to the truth. The old master reached for a stack of documents and threw them across the desk, telling Song Chen to see the reality for himself. Song Chen gripped the papers, his breath hitching as his eyes landed on the words stating that no biological relationship was confirmed between him and the child. He stammered that it had to be a mistake and that Manxi would never lie to him, but his grandfather pointed a finger at the report, declaring the evidence irrefutable and refusing to let a bastard taint their bloodline. The old man threatened to replace him with one of his uncles if he insisted on staying with her, but Song Chen stood his ground. He slammed the papers back onto the desk, his voice echoing with conviction as he vowed that even if Gu Chu was not his daughter, he would marry no one but Manxi because he could not lose her again. As Song Chen turned to storm out, the old master ordered the brat to stop where he was. He reached into a side drawer, his movements slow and deliberate. He pulled out 2 more reports and held them out, telling his grandson to take another look at the actual truth. Song Chen scanned the new documents, his heart racing as he saw the confirmed biological connection, and realized the first report had been a forgery from the Chang family's private hospital. Suddenly, the sound of a door opening drew his attention to the side of the room, where Gu Manxi stepped out with a shy, knowing smile. Song Chen froze in place, his face turning a deep shade of crimson as he realized she had been there the entire time and heard every word of his passionate confession. He covered his face with his hands in a fit of absolute embarrassment while the old master chuckled, enjoying the sight of his grandson being socially dead in public. The old master declared that he would no longer play the role of the third wheel, and assured Manxi that there would always be a place for her in the Song family. He suggested that Song Chen simply issue a public statement to draw a clear line with Cheng Qingyun, but Song Chen insisted on meeting her in person to settle things once and for all. His grandfather called him a silly child for wanting to drag things out after the misunderstanding was already cleared. However, Manxi stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Song Chen's arm, telling the old man it was all right because she trusted him to handle the situation his own way. The old master watched the couple with a newfound sense of approval. He then burst into a celebratory mood, shouting about his precious great-granddaughter, and how he was coming to take her home right away. Outside in the lush gardens, Gu Chu and Cheng Qi approached the group, with Gu Chu looking absolutely livid as she spotted her mother and Song Chen together. She had sensed something was wrong and tracked her mother's location, never expecting to find the two of them acting like a pair of lovebirds. Song Chen noticed her and beamed, his eyes lighting up as he called out her name. He rushed over and hoisted the little girl high into the air, calling her his darling, while Gu Chu kicked and screamed for him to put her down. Watching the chaotic scene, Cheng Qi rubbed his forehead, realizing that if Song Chen and Gu Manxi were truly together, his own life was about to get much more complicated. Song Chen didn't help matters by cheekily telling Cheng Qi to call him father-in-law, earning him a sharp command to go to hell. As evening fell, Song Chen caught Cheng Qi's attention, telling him they had things to discuss. Later that night, the setting shifted to Cheng Qi's private office, where the atmosphere was cold and professional. He sat in a high-backed chair, staring at Cheng Qingyun with a look of utter disdain, telling her that her hearing must be poor because he had warned her not to touch Gu Chu. He threw the falsified paternity test onto the desk, asking how she dared to use the company as a cover for such a pathetic trick. Cheng Qingyun's eyes darted around in panic, her mind racing as she wondered how he could have possibly uncovered her scheme. She tried to maintain a facade of innocence, claiming she didn't understand the accusations. Cheng Qi let out a cold laugh, calling her hopeless before ordering his men to bring the witness in. A man in a white lab coat was shoved into the room, falling to his knees on the carpet. Cheng Qingyun's face went pale as she recognized Dr. Lai, the man she had hired to tamper with the results. In a sudden burst of panicked rage, she lunged at him and delivered a stinging slap to his face, screaming at him for betraying her. The doctor cowered, holding his reddened cheek and stammering that he hadn't said a word. Cheng Qi leaned back and watched her with a triumphant, mocking smile, pointing out that the doctor was telling the truth. He hadn't spoken at all, but her own violent reaction to a simple bluff had just confirmed everything. Cheng Qi leaned in, his voice a low, dangerous rumble as he cornered Cheng Qingyun. "You collided with Dr. Li, abused your authority, and harmed the company's interests," he stated with chilling precision. "Tell me, which hospital should I put you in?" No, Cheng Qingyun gasped, her back against the wall as she trembled. "I am Song Chen's fiancée. Who dares to touch me?" She tried to shove past the men surrounding her, her face contorted in a mix of fear and indignation. "Cheng Qi, you are just trying to eliminate a rival. Stop using some test as an excuse. I am the Song family's future daughter-in-law. If you dare to lay a hand on me in private, Song Chen won't let you off the hook when he finds out." How impressive! A deep, resonant voice cut through her desperate shouting. Cheng Qingyun froze, her eyes widening as the color drained from her face. "This voice," she whispered, barely able to breathe. Song Chen stepped into the light, his expression a mask of cold disappointment. "So this is how you use the Song family's name to do such despicable things?" He looked at her as if she were a stranger, his gaze piercing. "Miss Cheng, why are you here?" she stammered, her hands shaking as she looked between the two powerful men. "Let me explain. Cheng keyframed me. None of this is real. I don't know anything about a paternity test, and I don't know that doctor." She reached out, grabbing Song Chen's arm in a desperate plea. "I don't know anything. Chen, you have to believe me." "Enough." Song Chen roared, shaking her off with a look of pure disgust. "We found the surveillance footage of your meetings. Stop putting on an act." Cheng Qingyun stared at him, her mouth agape as the reality of her situation finally set in. "Cheng Qingyun, you saved my life once, and I haven't treated you poorly all these years," Song Chen said, his tone softening only slightly, though his eyes remained hard. "Tomorrow, you will receive a sum of money. Whether you want to move somewhere else or study abroad, this money will be enough for you to live on." He turned his back on her, his posture rigid. "Take this money as my way of repaying you for saving my life. I won't pursue what you've done. Let's consider this the end of our connection." He paused at the door, his final words falling like a guillotine. "Our engagement is hereby cancelled. The announcement of the engagement's cancellation will be released tomorrow," he continued, his silhouette retreating down the hall. "From now on, the Song family has nothing to do with you. From this day forward, I don't want to see you ever again." "It's not like that," Cheng Qingyun whispered, tears finally spilling over her cheeks as she watched him walk away. "This isn't how things were supposed to be. Song Chen, don't go. I love you. I really can't lose you. Give me one more chance." The assistant looked toward Cheng Qi, his brow furrowed with concern. "Young master, should we go after her?" "No need," Cheng Qi replied, his eyes following the broken woman with a look of utter apathy. "She's already a nobody." The next day, in a different part of the city, a woman in a sharp red coat stood in a room filled with ancient artifacts. "Ma'am, based on the clues you provided, we've found the young lady's location," an investigator reported. "Really?" she exclaimed, her eyes lighting up with a fierce, protective fire. "Yes, but she's not in this city," the man replied over the phone. "When would be a good day to book a flight for you?" "Now. Immediately," she commanded, her gloved hand gripping the edge of the table. In a darkened bedroom, Cheng Qingyun sat huddled on the floor, the blue light of her phone illuminating her pale, tear-streaked face. Messages flooded her screen from friends and colleagues, all asking the same thing. "Qingyun, what's this about an announcement canceling the engagement? I just saw the news online. Why aren't you answering your phone? Please don't do anything rash. Everything will be okay." "It'll be okay," she echoed, her voice hollow and devoid of hope. "How can it be okay?" A sudden glint of light from her vanity caught her eye, reflecting off the mirror in a sharp, crystalline spark. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the cold metal of a jewelry box. It was like this before, too. My eyes were caught by its glint, she thought. Back then, my mother had died, and my father still hadn't come for me, she remembered, her mind drifting back to the grime and hunger of her childhood. I was living alone in the slums. That day, I was passing by a house when I was caught by a flash of light. It was a necklace. I stole it, thinking that if I could trade it for a couple of steamed buns, I wouldn't have to go hungry for the day. But the moment I put it on, she whispered, the memory of the cold gems against her skin still vivid. For the first time in my life, I felt like I no longer looked like an unwanted rag doll on the side of the road. Later, even when I was starving, even when I was bullied and beaten by the boys in the alley, I never lost this necklace. Get lost. She had screamed at them back then, clutching the stolen treasure to her chest as she sat in the dirt. It felt like her only shield. Later, at a party, I was publicly humiliated by the many illegitimate children of the Cheng family, she recalled. That's how Song Chen noticed me. "It's you! Long time no see," he had said, approaching her with a warmth she had never known. "I didn't know at the time that he only came to talk to me because of this necklace. It's me, Song Chen. Don't be afraid." But I knew that agreeing with important people like them was definitely the right thing to do, she thought, a bitter smile touching her lips as she remembered her younger self lying through her teeth. Long time no see, she had told him, the lie tasting like salvation. This necklace really did bring me hope. But now, she sobbed, her breath hitching in her throat. This hope, which was never mine to begin with, has expired. Her body gave out, her strength finally spent. She stumbled toward her bed, but her legs collapsed beneath her, and she fell to the floor with a heavy, muffled thud. The door to the suite was suddenly kicked open. "My child," a woman screamed, her voice filled with a mother's desperation. The woman in the red coat rushed into the room, her eyes darting around until they landed on the limp form on the carpet. "My dear child, wake up." She gathered the unconscious girl into her arms, her face contorted with grief. "Quick, call an ambulance." "Yes," her assistant shouted, already reaching for his phone. Hours later, the sterile smell of the hospital filled the air. "Ma'am, the doctor said the young lady fainted suddenly due to extreme mental stress," the assistant explained. "Her life is not in danger for now. It's just that she is extremely weak right now and won't wake up for a while." He held out a small, glittering object. "This is what we found on her." The woman took the necklace, her eyes widening as she felt the familiar weight of it in her palm. "This necklace," she whispered. This is the necklace from the photo." She pulled out a small, weathered photograph of two smiling sisters, one of whom was wearing the exact same piece of jewelry. "There's no mistake. She's my sister's adopted daughter." She reached out, stroking Cheng Qingyun's hair with a tender, protective hand. "My dear child, I was too late. I will take good care of you on behalf of my sister in heaven." She straightened her back, her expression turning cold and formidable. "From now on, with the protection of the Ming family, no one will be able to touch you." News of the event traveled fast. "Young master, we have news from the hospital," an assistant said, finding Cheng Qi in the conservatory. They said Miss Cheng was picked up by a lady with the surname Ming. She's Ming King Mai, the eldest daughter of the Southern Amelia newspaper group. They completed their procedures overnight and have already boarded a plane to Amelia. The assistant looked concerned. "Young master, should we send people to bring Miss Cheng back?" "A cornered beast will bite," Cheng Qi said calmly, his hands steady as he used a pair of shears to snip a dead leaf from a flowering plant. "There's no need to rush to deal with her." So what if she ran to Amelia? So what if she has the Ming family's protection? In the end, she can't escape from Mai and Gu Chu's grasp. He set the shears down, his eyes narrowing. "As for Cheng Qingyan, we just need to keep an eye on her movements. What about the royal kindergarten matter?" "How's the investigation going?" "We found some old zoning documents," the assistant replied, handing over a folder. "This location was once planned as a subway station, but the project was abandoned halfway. Later, the land was acquired by a mysterious figure and turned into a kindergarten. We haven't been able to identify them yet." Cheng Qi's gaze sharpened. "A subway station? Could it be that the kindergarten is just a cover? Is it actually for an underground transport line that can be used to move illegal goods?" "Go and buy all the land near the kindergarten, then make a public announcement. Say that Cheng Group is going to develop that place into a new commercial center." 3 days later, a sleek blue sports car pulled up to the curb of a busy street. "You brat!" "Wait," a man yelled, stepping out of another car and stomping toward the driver's side door. "That land in the suburbs can't be developed. Stop that project." Cheng Qi stepped out of his car, looking entirely unbothered by the older man's rage. "Why would a busy man like you be bothered by this matter? What does that land have to do with you?" The man, Cheng Kaiyuan, wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his face twisting into a forced, oily smile. I just think that land isn't very valuable. The return on investment period is too long. It's better to give up." Cheng Qi watched him, his eyes seeing right through the facade. "Cheng Kaiyuan, I deliberately leaked the news about developing that land, just waiting for the mastermind buyer to get restless and come to me," he thought. "I never thought that I flushed him out. Could it be the mastermind behind the royal kindergarten is him?" He looked at his father, a man who had supposedly retired to a life of leisure. "It seems this father of mine hasn't really retired," he mused. "His womanizing and frequent trips abroad to pick up girls, it seems that was all just for show." His frequent trips abroad were for the businesses he runs in secret. Cheng Qi recalled the rumors of his father's shady dealings in the darker corners of the city. Looking at all of Jing City, there are only a handful of people who could pull off an underground black market industrial chain so covertly. Cheng Kaiyuan has always been on my list of suspects. He leaned against his car, a dangerous glint in his purple eyes. "And what if I continue with this project?" Cheng Kaiyuan's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory sneer. "Cheng Qi, you know, I have more than one child, don't I?" Cheng Qi let out a short, mocking laugh, PF. "Then you also know that I've specially reserved a room for you at the hospital, father." Cheng Kaiyuan's eyes bulged, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "Cheng Qi is planning to purge the Cheng family, and he's even planning to make a move on me? I don't have time to argue with you," Cheng Qi said, straightening his vest and turning back to his car. "During your spare time, consider how you might save your own life." He pulled away, leaving his father standing on the sidewalk in a cloud of exhaust. Cheng Kaiyuan watched the car disappear, his hands shaking with a mix of fury and genuine terror. Cheng Qi is so insistent on developing that land. Could it be that he's discovered something? He's only 16, yet he has such ruthless decisiveness. It seems I need to make plans soon. Gu Chu leaned over the hospital bed, her expression softened with genuine concern for the injured boy, as she urged him to take his recovery seriously. She patted his hand gently, telling him he should lie down and rest, while behind them, he watched the exchange with a vein throbbing in his temple, cursing the brat under his breath. The man was practically vibrating with a comical level of fury, silently vowing to find a way to poison her tea that very night before the scene shifted to a week later. Gu Chu stared at the screen of her watch during a video call, surprised to hear the boy was leaving the country because a mysterious philanthropist had provided his family with the funds to move abroad. Behind the boy on the screen, he smirked with a dark, satisfied glint in his eyes, reveling in his role as the secret benefactor, who was finally shipping the little brat off to live with kangaroos. Suddenly, the door to Gu Chu's room burst open as Song Tingyu marched in, grinning widely while holding up 2 massive shopping bags filled with surprises. He proudly unveiled a frilly, overly poofy blue princess dress for her upcoming 6th birthday, completely oblivious to the fact that Gu Chu was internally screaming at his terrible fashion sense. At the lavish birthday party, Gu Chu sat amidst a mountain of expensive gifts, her eyes sparkling as she realized just how much wealth she was accumulating from the various guests. Her jaw nearly hit the floor when she opened a box containing property deeds for prime real estate in Jing City, a pure gold Buddha statue, and a share agreement for Song Entertainment. A tiny, greedy smile spread across her face as she succumbed to the joy of being incredibly rich, a faint trail of drool escaping her lips as she hugged her new assets. She eventually settled down to read the hacking guide Cheng Qi had given her, knowing she needed to master this world's technology, when a shadow fell over her book. A girl with brown pigtails stood over her, looking down her nose at Gu Chu and demanding to know if her mother had ever bothered to teach her any manners. The older girl snapped at her, asking why she was glaring, and insisted that Gu Chu stand up and address her as big sister immediately. When Gu Chu didn't move, the girl reached down and snatched the book away, tossing it onto the floor with a sneer of contempt. The bratty girl then lifted her heavy boot and stomped directly onto the pages of the hacking guide, declaring that Gu Chu was nothing but a bastard who didn't belong in the Song family. Gu Chu's blue eyes narrowed to slits as she stared at the ruined gift from Cheng Qi, her internal temper flaring as she decided this spoiled child needed a harsh lesson. Feigning a submissive retreat, Gu Chu stood up and claimed she was going to the bathroom, because she didn't want to talk, prompting the older girl to laugh and call her a coward. As Gu Chu walked away with a hidden, calculating smirk, the girl turned her attention to the pile of gifts, her eyes burning with jealousy over things she felt Gu Chu didn't deserve. Her gaze landed on a small, shimmering object that had been left partially exposed among the silk ribbons and torn paper. She picked up the gold Buddha pendant, convincing herself that Gu Chu had so many presents she would never even notice if this one went missing. From around the corner, Gu Chu watched the theft unfold with a chillingly calm expression, satisfied that the girl had fallen right into her trap. Later that evening in the quiet courtyard of the Song estate, Song Tingyu approached Gu Chu to ask if she had finished going through all her wonderful birthday treasures. He specifically asked about the gold Buddha pendant their great-grandfather had specially commissioned for her. But Gu Chu looked up with wide, innocent eyes and claimed she hadn't seen it. She offered to go back and look for it, leaving Lin He to watch her with a knowing look, wondering exactly which unfortunate soul was about to get wrecked by the little genius. Lin He took a sip of his drink, recognizing that look on Gu Chu's face as the precursor to someone else's absolute downfall. The scene shifted to Song Lanlin's home, where Song Tingyu confronted the girl's father with cold, terrifying authority, demanding the return of the stolen heirloom. After the pendant was recovered, Song Tingyu placed it around Gu Chu's neck, and she smiled with pure, triumphant sweetness, knowing she had secured both her treasure and her revenge. Gu Chu sat at the large dining table, her small hands deftly navigating a spoon as her grandfather watched her with a fond, approving smile. He remarked on how well she was eating and how much she had grown, while another family member noted how wonderful it was to share a meal with such a beautiful family. Despite the domestic bliss, Gu Chu's mind was elsewhere as she stared at the glowing screen of her hidden device. A high-resolution image of a magnificent moonstone necklace shimmered before her eyes, and she felt a chill of recognition. This was the exact object that had served as the catalyst, pulling her soul from her previous life and trapping her within the pages of this novel. Later that afternoon, she retreated to the comfort of the sofa, balancing a laptop on her knees while unwrapping another chocolate-covered ice cream bar. She pulled up the global hacker rankings, her brow furrowing as she saw her new alias, Ace of Hearts, languishing at the very bottom of the list. She knew she had to climb the leaderboards quickly to qualify for the upcoming competition in America, but seeing herself ranked so low was a blow to her professional pride. A sharp ding cut through the quiet room, signaling an incoming message on her encrypted chat. It was her associate, a frantic young man with messy blonde hair and thick glasses, reminding her that they only had a 3-hour window tonight to make their move. He was desperate to see her knock the current top hacker, a person known as Tiger, off his throne, and Gu Chu sent a brief reply confirming she would be online. As the message sent, she realized she had already finished her treat. Hummed a little tune to herself, she hopped off the couch and headed back toward the kitchen, determined to grab just one more ice cream bar to fuel her late-night hacking session. The night, however, took a turn for the worse. Under the dark, moonlit sky, the quiet of the house was broken by a soft, pained whimper as Gu Chu huddled in her bed, clutching her stomach and calling out for her mother. Her face was drained of color, and tears welled in her large blue eyes as she dealt with a localized agony she had never expected to face in this world. Soon she found herself in a sterile doctor's office, tucked into Gu Manxi's protective embrace. The doctor sighed, explaining that it was a simple but painful stomach cramp caused by a terrible diet, and he asked pointedly what the little girl had eaten that day. Gu Manxi looked down at her daughter, her voice stern as she demanded the truth. Gu Chu hesitated, her fingers twitching as she mentally counted the wrappers she had hidden. She admitted to eating 2, then 3, then eventually confessed to 5 ice cream bars, silently cursing the fact that her adult mind was trapped in a fragile child's body that couldn't handle a sugar binge. Her mother's face hardened with resolve, and she declared that every single ice cream bar in the house would be thrown away the moment they got home. Gu Chu let out a dramatic cry of protest, but the decision was final. While Gu Chu was being lectured, her blonde-haired associate sat in his dark room, nervously checking the time as the minutes slipped away. He tried to maintain his composure, telling himself that the boss always had a plan, and was likely just waiting to make a grand, theatrical entrance. But as the clock continued its rhythmic tick-tock, his anxiety began to peak. He eventually lost his cool, slamming his hands onto his desk and shouting at his monitor, terrified that they were doomed if she didn't show up within the next few minutes. Back at the house, Gu Chu suddenly bolted upright in bed, her eyes snapping open as the fog of her medicine finally cleared. She realized with a jolt of horror that she had completely passed out and the ranking window was almost closed. With the countdown clock showing a mere 11 minutes remaining, she scrambled to her laptop, her small fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed that defied her age. Across town, her associate's eyes widened as his screen began to flash with rapid-fire alerts. The system was being flooded with notifications as Ace of Hearts began identifying high-level vulnerabilities at a pace no one had ever witnessed before. The public forums were exploding with chatter about this mysterious newcomer, wondering if this monster of a hacker was actually a secret alt account for Tiger or something even more dangerous. When the deadline finally hit, Gu Chu collapsed back against her pillows, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Her hands were cramped and trembling from the exertion, but a look of triumph crossed her face when she saw her name officially listed at rank 100. She muttered to herself that she would never eat 5 ice cream bars in one sitting again, though she quickly amended that she might still manage 4. Suddenly, another ding echoed from the laptop. Her eyes lit up with curiosity as she saw a friend request from the #1 ranked hacker on the board. She smiled, thinking the timing was perfect, and clicked the accept button without a second thought. The top-ranked user sent a brief, challenging message, warning her to get ready because they intended to take first place in the Amelika competition. Shortly after, Gu Manxi entered the room to tell Gu Chu that she had to leave for an overseas photoshoot, leaving the girl in the care of her uncle. Gu Chu realized this was her golden opportunity. She put on a sweet, innocent face and began chatting with her uncle about his friend, Lin Xiaozhou. She cleverly mentioned how much Lin Xiaozhou missed home and suggested that her uncle should take her on a trip to Malika to visit him, knowing her uncle had been distracted ever since the two had an argument. Meanwhile, Lin Xiaozhou was in his own apartment, desperately begging his older brother for money. He explained that his entire allowance had been spent on upgrading his PC for the World Hacker Competition in New York, leaving him completely broke and unable to afford a flight. His brother, a striking man with long, pale blonde hair and piercing violet eyes, looked up from his work. He seemed intrigued by the mention of the World Hacker Competition. He told Lin Xiaozhou that he would be willing to cover the cost of the round-trip flights and all the accommodations. However, there was a catch that left the younger man speechless. The older brother leaned forward with a knowing smile and announced that he would be coming along as well. Lin Xiaozhou could only gape in surprise, his jaw dropping at the unexpected turn of events. A few days later, the plan reached its fruition at the airport. Gu Chu walked toward the terminal wearing a bright blue bunny hoodie, her heart racing with excitement as she realized her scheme was proceeding perfectly. Once they were settled on the plane, the group of 4 looked quite unusual together. Lin Xiaozhou sat in his seat, looking utterly bewildered as he wondered how a simple trip for 2 had suddenly expanded into a 4-person expedition. He turned to his brother, complaining that his seat had been taken over by a child and telling him to act his age. His brother simply smiled at Gu Chu, noting that Lin Xiaozhou had certainly changed his tune about noisy children ever since he met her, calling him a total kid person now. The flight attendant leaned over with a professional smile, placing a tray on the small table. "Mr. Chang, here is the dessert you ordered. Please enjoy," she said, her voice soft as she invited them to enjoy the treats. Chang Qi looked over at the little girl beside him, his expression softening as he watched her dig in. "Chu Chu, is it good?" he asked, to which Gu Chu gave a satisfied hum, her mouth full of sweetness as she declared it yummy. Watching from the seat behind them, Bobo grumbled under his breath, feeling entirely neglected by his own brother who hadn't even ordered a single dessert for him. Bobo leaned forward, a mischievous glint in his eyes as he peered over the seat at the pink-haired child. "Chu Chu, do you know how to play games?" he asked, his voice dripping with feigned innocence. Gu Chu looked up from her snack, her eyes wide and guileless as she nodded, confirming that she did indeed know how to play. A predatory smirk stretched across Bobo's face. "Then let's play a game," he suggested, already imagining the easy victory. He chuckled to himself, whispering that he was going to make her cry, while Cheng Kai merely closed his eyes, thinking that his silly little brother was currently digging his own grave. The sound of rapid tapping filled the cabin, followed quickly by the game's announcement of a double kill. "No way," Bobo shouted, his eyes nearly popping out of his head as he stared at the screen. Gu Chu didn't even look up, her fingers flying across the device with a precision that was terrifying for a 6-year-old. "Wait, I wasn't paying attention," she muttered casually just as the game announced a pentakill. A moment later, a giant red banner flashed across Bobo's screen, declaring his absolute defeat. Bobo stared at the word defeat in stunned silence, his hands trembling slightly as he held his phone. "What? How is this possible?" he stammered, unable to process the loss. Cheng Qi didn't even open his eyes as he mocked his brother, telling him he should just uninstall the game if he couldn't even beat a kid. Bobo turned bright red, shouting for a rematch and refusing to accept the outcome. He convinced himself it was just luck, fueled by a jealous rage that this little girl was stealing his brother's attention and stomping him in his favorite game. Gu Chu pulled her hood up slightly, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Too many openings, boy, she thought to herself as she engaged him once more. The results were catastrophic for Bobo. One defeat followed another, the word flashing on his screen like a recurring nightmare that sent him spiraling into despair. By the time they reached the end of their session, Bobo was a broken man, tears of frustration streaming down his face as the final defeat screen mocked him. He slumped over, his energy completely spent. Ugh, I quit, my phone is dead, Bobo groaned, huffing as he buried his face in a pillow. Cheng Qi glanced back, noting with a smirk that his brother had finally gone quiet after being so thoroughly beaten. With the nuisance out of the way, Cheng Qi turned to the girl. Bobo is a little tired, so I'll play with you, he offered, and Gu Chu happily agreed. As they played, their coordination was seamless. Cheng Qi directed her to take the buff while he pushed the lane, and she quickly alerted him when the enemy jungler disappeared. As they played, a strange sensation washed over Cheng Qi. Why does it feel like this? He wondered, his mind drifting back to the times he used to play games with someone named Seichen. Gu Chu, meanwhile, was having her own internal struggle, catching a glimpse of Cheng Qi's focused profile and trying desperately to push away memories of her mother's past. It was just a one-night thing, that's all, she told herself, trying to focus on the game and forget the complicated past that linked them. The plane eventually landed, and they made their way to the towering Amalika Imperial Hotel. Inside their suite, Gu Chu woke up to find only Bobo present. Why are you the only one here? Where are my uncle and Cheng Qi? She asked, rubbing her eyes. Bobo, who was hunched over a computer, told her they had gone out for business and expressed his amazement that she could sleep through the entire trip. He turned back to his screen, swearing under his breath about an annoying person named Tiger who was proving impossible to crack. Gu Chu watched as Bobo paced the room in frustration, complaining that his 3-hour time limit was almost up. If only the boss were here, he lamented, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Curious, Gu Chu wandered over to the monitor and saw a challenge letter from Tiger. It was a taunt asking Bobo to find his room number by cracking an IP address within 3 hours in exchange for covering all expenses in Amalika. Gu Chu smiled inwardly, recognizing the challenge. He's got talent, but he's still rough around the edges, she thought, deciding she would help him out just this once. Bobo threw his arms up, declaring he wouldn't give up and would try one more time before the clock ran out. While he was distracted, Gu Chu's small hand reached for the keyboard, her fingers moving with a speed Bobo couldn't hope to match. Suddenly, the screen flashed a brilliant green. What's going on? Bobo gasped as he turned back. The words IP address cracked stared back at him, informing him that Paper Tiger's defenses had been completely dismantled. Bobo spun around, his eyes wide with suspicion as he looked at the little girl sitting on the sofa. Chu, did you touch my computer just now? He asked. Gu Chu looked up from the book she was holding, her expression a mask of perfect, wide-eyed innocence. Nope, she chirped with a sweet smile. Bobo scratched his head, feeling that something was incredibly strange about the situation. However, the excitement of victory quickly took over. But the address has been cracked. This is great news, he cheered. He immediately began typing a response to Tiger, informing him that he was in room 319 and demanding he keep his word about covering the expenses. Otherwise, I'll post our chat history on a hacker forum and let the world see your dishonest face, Bobo threatened. Tiger's response was short, assuring him that he kept his word. Bobo jumped for joy, thrilled that he was going to rip Paper Tiger off big time. In his good mood, he turned to Gu Chu and asked if she wanted to join him for some shopping in New York. The two of them soon stood in the middle of a massive, neon-lit shopping center, both of them letting out a synchronous wow at the sight. The mall was a marvel of futuristic architecture and bright displays, looking like something out of a sci-fi movie. So cool, Bobo exclaimed, while Gu Chu's eyes sparkled with greed as she declared she wanted everything. She wandered off through the aisles, overwhelmed by the sheer number of items and wondering which one she should buy first. Lost in her thoughts, Gu Chu didn't see the tall figure walking toward her until she walked straight into him. Oof! She cried out as she bounced off the man's legs. She quickly rubbed her nose and looked up at the stranger. I'm sorry for bumping into you, sir, she said politely. The man, whose face was partially obscured by his long dark hair, looked down at her. It's all right, he replied in a calm, steady voice. Just then, Bobo's voice rang out, calling for Chu. I'm here, she shouted back, turning to run toward Bobo. Coming, she called out, leaving the mysterious man behind. The man watched her go, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. Ace of Hearts, long time no see, he whispered to himself. Later that evening, they gathered for dinner. Cheng Qi was still scolding Bobo, calling him careless for almost losing Chu while shopping. Bobo just grumbled that Cheng Qi was like a mother hen protecting her chick. As their food was served, Gu Chu dug in happily, though she noticed Bobo looking distracted. Bobo was staring at a waiter who seemed to be hovering nearby. Brother, why is that waiter staring at you? Bobo asked, pointing his chopsticks toward the man. Cheng Qi didn't even look up from his meal as he gave a nonchalant answer. Because I'm good-looking, he stated flatly. Bobo nearly choked on his food, coughing as he asked when his brother had learned to tell jokes. If you're not gonna eat, then get out, Cheng Qi retorted coldly. Gu Chu watched the interaction silently, her mind working fast as she observed the waiter. That waiter was acting a bit unusual. she thought, noting that the area was currently packed with hackers for the upcoming competition. Bobo's phone began to beep incessantly with messages from a forum. A user named Hooligan Rabbit claimed to have tracked Bobo's location and teased him about seeing the legendary Ace of Hearts. Bobo typed back furiously, asking what his boss looked like. Hooligan Rabbit replied that Ace of Hearts was sitting right next to him at that very moment. Bobo looked at the little girl beside him and then back at his phone, confused. Who's he talking about? Is Gu Chu his boss? Is he crazy? Bobo wondered. But then a new message appeared from Hooligan Rabbit, clarifying that he meant the one in the black shirt. Bobo's eyes nearly bulged out of his head as he looked at the waiter, who was indeed the person he was chatting with. That's my brother. Bobo thought in a panic. So the waiter who was leering at my brother just now was you damn rabbit, Bobo screamed internally, realizing he had been talking to his contact the whole time. The waiter, Hooligan Rabbit, just gave a sly look, neither confirming nor denying his identity. Bobo tried to process the information, thinking that a bet was a bet, but his brother couldn't possibly be a hacker. All Cheng-Ki cared about was business. He wouldn't have a spare moment to be the Ace of Hearts. He looked over at his brother and then at the innocent-looking 6-year-old girl, his mind reeling from the possibilities. The day of the hacker competition finally arrived, bringing with it a palpable sense of anticipation that Gu Chu could feel in the very air of the house. Bobo was getting ready to leave when Gu Chu tilted her head, her large blue eyes wide with feigned curiosity. She asked him what the hacker competition was and if she could tag along, but Bobo just adjusted his glasses and shook his head. He told her it was just a simple game competition and that she was far too young to be involved in such things. Gu Chu felt a surge of frustration as she watched him prepare to leave without her. Being trapped in the body of a 6-year-old girl was incredibly inconvenient when she had legendary hacking skills to put to use. She narrowed her eyes slightly, deciding right then and there that if they would not take her, she would simply have to sneak out later that night. Cheng-Ki, sitting nearby with a cup of tea, seemed to see right through her innocent facade. He caught her eye and asked with a knowing smile if she really wanted to go play with Bobo. Chu did not miss a beat, clenching her small fists in excitement and exclaiming that she really liked Bobo and wanted to play games with him. Bobo looked over at her, his expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. He wondered why he had not felt this supposed affection before, as all he had ever sensed from the girl was a strange kind of disdain. Cheng-Ki's smile deepened as he suggested that he could take Gu Chu along to watch the competition. Gu Chu cheered, throwing her arms up in a display of childish joy, while Cheng-Ki watched her with a calculating gaze. He knew that the mysterious Ace of Hearts would find a way to sneak out regardless, so it was much safer to keep her right where he could see her. Bobo was not entirely convinced by the arrangement, looking back at his brother with a skeptical frown. He pointed out that it was not like Cheng-Ki could actually do anything helpful if he went to the event. Suddenly, a realization seemed to strike Bobo, his eyes widening behind his spectacles. He remembered a message he had received, a challenge that proposed a bet. The message had stated that his brother would definitely show up at the hacker competition in the designated area. Bobo watched Cheng-Ki sip his tea in silence, the steam rising around his calm face. A new theory began to form in Bobo's mind, making him wonder if his brother was actually the elusive Ace of Hearts and was merely using Gu Chu as a convenient excuse to enter the competition grounds. Night fell over the city, and the bright lights of 10th Street glowed against the dark sky. The digital world was already buzzing as a masked figure known as Hacker K announced to the community that the competition was officially beginning at 10 in the evening. All participants were required to be within a 5-kilometer radius of 10th Street, finding a quiet corner to connect to the forum's network signal. In the car, Bobo pointed toward a 24-hour KFC and asked to be dropped off there, claiming it was his chosen spot. He told Cheng-Ki and Gu Chu not to follow him because he would get too nervous with them nearby, insisting he was aiming for a top 5 finish this year. Cheng-Ki pulled the car over, noting a small restaurant across the street. He told Bobo that he would take Gu Chu there to get some food while he waited. Bobo hopped out of the car, his mind still racing with the possibility that he was about to uncover his brother's secret identity. The host at the restaurant greeted Cheng-Ki and Gu Chu, offering a table for 2, but Cheng-Ki had a different plan in mind. He requested 2 separate tables, explaining that he needed to get some work done in a more private spot and would sit apart from the child. Gu Chu blinked in surprise as she followed him, hardly able to believe her luck. She had been racking her brain for a way to get away from Cheng-Ki so she could join the competition, and now the opportunity had fallen right into her lap. She sat down at her own table and immediately ordered 2 ice creams to keep up her cover. Cheng-Ki pointed to the table next to hers, telling her he would be right there if she needed anything before encouraging her to play for a bit. Gu Chu watched him settle in, noting that he was truly the head of the Cheng family for a reason, always working no matter where he was. For a brief moment, she admired his handsome profile, thinking he was quite a looker, before shaking the thought away. She had to focus because the competition was about to start. She reached into her bag and pulled out her laptop, her expression shifting from a playful child to a focused professional. Nearby, a waiter arrived at Cheng Qi's table to serve him a fresh cup of coffee. A man with messy, reddish-brown hair watched the scene from a distance, his eyes fixed on the pair. He smirked to himself, feeling confident that he had already won his bet and confirmed that Cheng Qi was indeed the one he was looking for. Unaware of the eyes on them, Gu Chu opened her laptop and prepared her workspace. She slipped her large headphones over her ears, the world around her fading away as she focused on the screen. With everything finally ready, she began the login process, watching the digital interface come to life. A determined glint appeared in her blue eyes as she stared at the glowing monitor. The hacker competition had officially begun, and she was more than ready to show them what she was capable of.